Welcome back to Harry's Cosmos. Today's adventure: what if Harry and Hermione were reborn as the last heirs of House Black? Before we begin, take a moment to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's dive in. Chapter 1: The House at the End of the World. The Death Chamber was full of falling light. Harry Potter had learned, in 5 years of a war nobody would name, to read a room the way other boys read a broom's drift: exits, angles, the places a curse could come from. The chamber gave him nothing. Stone benches descending like an amphitheater, a sunken floor, and at the center of it, on a raised dais, an archway that should have fallen 1,000 years ago and had not. The curtain hanging in it moved without wind. He heard voices behind the cloth, low and patient, the murmur of a crowded room heard through a wall. "Don't listen to it," Hermione said. Her wand arm was bleeding through her sleeve where Dolohov's curse had grazed her, and she had not once mentioned it. Harry, eyes on Lestrange. He was 15 years old. He had come here for a prophecy that turned out to be bait, dragging 5 friends into a nest of Death Eaters, and the knowledge of it sat under his ribs like swallowed iron. Neville was down with a broken nose and a shattered wand. Luna was somewhere above, holding a doorway. Ron was laughing at things that weren't there, and Bellatrix Lestrange was coming down the benches with her skirts gathered in one fist, unhurried, because she knew the arithmetic of the room better than he did. Reducto, Hermione's curse, took a bench apart a foot from Bellatrix's ankle. The witch didn't flinch. She answered with something purple and silent, and Harry knocked Hermione sideways and felt the spell part his hair. They fought their way backward up the dais because there was nowhere else to go. That was the trap of the chamber, he understood later, far too much later. Every line of retreat ran through the arch. "Together," Hermione said, not a question. She had her back to his back, and he could feel her shoulder blades working as she cast, the small mechanical courage of her, spell after spell after spell. Above them, Dumbledore had arrived at last. Harry heard the change in the room, the Death Eater's shape breaking like a flock hit by a hawk. 2 seconds more and it would have been over. Bellatrix, falling back, threw her last curse without aiming. It was meant for nobody. It struck the dais at their feet, and the old stone, older than the Ministry, older than wands, bucked like a horse. Harry went over backward into the curtain. He had time to grab, and what he grabbed was Hermione's hand, already reaching, and he would ask himself in the years afterward, in another body, under another name, whether she had reached to save him or to come with him. He never asked her aloud. Some questions you carry instead of asking, because carrying them keeps a door open. The voices took them. There was no falling in the place behind the curtain. There was no floor to fall toward. There was gray, and the gray was made of murmuring, and through it ran a thread of warmth from his right hand where her fingers had locked into his and did not loosen, not once, not ever, and afterward he would believe that this was the whole of the reason for everything that followed. The door was owed blood, and it was given 2 children holding hands, and it did not know how to keep them apart, so it did not know how to keep them. Something considered them. It was not a voice. It was the way a house considers you when you stand in its hall at night, the attention of beams and lintels. Old blood, it said, without saying. The stone remembered the hands that raised it, and the hands that raised the arch had worn a ring with a raven on it, and the boy falling through was none of that line, and yet the blood in him had married into that line 12 times over the centuries, Potter to Black and Black to Potter, and the girl's soul was fastened to the boy, as by a grip that death was finding very difficult to pick loose. A door owes a debt to those who built it, the attention said in the language of lintels, and doors open both ways. The gray turned, the murmuring rose like a tide coming in over flat sand, and the warmth in his hand became the whole of the world, and the world became very small and red and loud. Somewhere a woman was screaming in the practiced, furious way of labor, and an old man was standing in a stone hall with a letter in his hand, and it was the 31st of July, 1980. Arcturus Black had buried a wife's sister, 2 cousins, and the better part of his own expectations, and he had done all of it with his collar straight. He was 79 years old. He stood in the hall of Blackmore House with the moor wind worrying the windows, and he read his dead son's letter for the 4th time while above him, a girl he had met 2 hours ago screamed his grandchildren into the world. The letter was in Regulus's hand, the careful schoolboy loops he had never grown out of. It had been sewn into the lining of the girl's traveling cloak, along with a marriage certificate signed by a priest in Calais and dated 14 months prior, and the heir ring of the cadet line, which Arcturus now held in his palm like a coal. "Father," the letter said, "if Lyra has come to you, I am dead, and I have died doing the only worthwhile thing I have managed in 19 years. I cannot tell you what it was. I have told Creature, and I have ordered him to silence, and I beg you to leave that order in place because the knowing of it kills. I will tell you this much: the Dark Lord is not what we were promised. He is not the restoration of anything. He is a fire in the shape of a man, and I have stolen a piece of the fuel, and he does not know it yet, and by the time he knows it I will be beyond his reach, and my wife and child will be behind your wards. You disowned Sirius for leaving. I am asking you to understand that I left 2 only quieter. Look after them. Name the child something out of the sky. R.A.B. the midwife came down at 11:15 and told him there were 2. Arcturus Black climbed the stairs of his own house slowly, because his knees were the only part of him he permitted to be old, and stood in the doorway of the yellow guest room, and looked at the woman propped up in the bed with a black-haired scrap of a child in each arm. Lyra Black, born Folly, was 19, gray-eyed and so exhausted that her lips had gone white, and she looked at the lord of her husband's house with no deference whatsoever. "You'll want to inspect them," she said. "They're loud, and the boy has already been sick on me, so his character wants work." "Madam," Arcturus said, and found the sentence had no second half. He crossed the room. The floorboard by the window had creaked since 1912. He stepped over it out of 60 years' habit. The boy was asleep with one fist against his mouth. The girl was not asleep. The girl was looking at him. Newborns do not look. Their eyes wander, unfocused, sliding off the world. He knew this. He had had sons. The girl's eyes were dark blue in the way of infants that would go brown, and they were pointed at his face, both of them steady, and for a moment the old man had the sensation of being read, entered into some ledger, weighed against a column of figures he could not see. "Girls first in this family when they come first," Lyra said. "Regulus wanted the sky, so Cassiopeia, and the boy is Corvus. Cassiopeia was my aunt, a dreadful woman. Then the name has room to improve." Lyra shifted the boy higher on her shoulder. Her arms were shaking with tiredness, and she made them stop by will alone, and Arcturus, watching her do it, revised several judgments at speed. "He wrote to you. I felt the seam of my cloak come unpicked in the hall, so I know the letter went where he wanted it. Did he tell you what he did?" "No, he wouldn't tell me either." She looked down at the crown of her son's head. Outside, the wind came off the moor and laid itself against the house, and the house, 9 centuries old and warded to the roots of its hill, did not move. He told me it was the first thing he'd ever done that his brother would have been proud of. Then he went out the door. "So whatever you decide about me, Lord Black, you should know that I am not here to be tolerated. I am here because my husband spent his life buying these two a fortress, and you are it." Arcturus Black looked at the ring in his hand, and at the boy, and at the girl who was still watching him with that impossible bookkeeping stare, and he put the ring away in his breast pocket, next to the letter, over the heart he was widely believed not to have. "The nursery in the east wing has stood empty for 30 years, he said. "It faces the sunrise. I will have Melania open it tonight." It was not a welcome, quite. It was an entry in a ledger. In House Black for 300 years, those had been the same thing, and it would take 2 small children some years yet to teach him the difference. They were strange babies. Everyone agreed on this in the way of households, without ever saying it in the corridors where it could be heard. They would not sleep apart. This was ordinary in twins, the midwife said, and then stopped saying it the 3rd time she found them, too young to roll, somehow each with a fist knotted in the other's gown, having crossed a cot's width they had no muscles to cross. They did not cry at strangers, at thunder, at the peacock shrieking of the wind in the chimneys. They cried at other things. The boy Corvus wept at green, a green scarf, a green bottle, the green baize of the card table, a weeping so sudden and so total that Melania Black quietly had the nursery's green curtains replaced with blue and told her husband it was because of the light. The girl Cassiopeia wept at bells, not all bells, deep ones, the kind that toll, and they watched. Lyra, who had them most, felt it most. The sensation of being accompanied rather than merely observed, of doing her mending in a room with 2 very old friends who happened, for the moment, to be unable to speak. She said something of the sort to Melania once, laughing at herself, and Melania, who had been a Macmillan and had buried enough family to know that the old house's children sometimes came slightly haunted, patted her hand and said, "All Blacks are born with furniture in the attic, dear. Be glad it's good furniture." The war ended when the twins were 15 months old, and it ended the way a fever ends overnight, leaving the patient wrecked and blinking. Afterwards, even the prophet could not make the story stand up straight. The Dark Lord had gone to a cottage in Godric's Hollow on All Hallows' Eve, to the house of James and Lily Potter, who had defied him 3 times and hidden from him for a year, and something in that house had gone wrong for him. The Potters were dead. Their son, 15 months old, was dead, the cottage half torn from its bones, and the Dark Lord was gone. No body, a wand on the nursery floor, a mark like a burned star on the ceiling, and no body. The ministry declared him destroyed because the country would have broken if they hadn't. The Death Eater's trials filled a winter, and in the general amnesty of relief, nobody looked very hard at the fine grain of any of it, which was how Sirius Black went to Azkaban without a trial for the murder of Peter Pettigrew and 12 muggles on a Bermondsey street. At Blackmore, Arcturus read the account of his grandson's sentencing, set the paper down, sat without moving for the length of a burned-down candle, and had the North Tower study locked. He did not speak Sirius's name for 8 years. It should be recorded, because it was the hinge of much that came later, that he never once blasted it from the tapestry. Bellatrix Lestrange was taken in the last week of November, Wanpoint down in the wreck of the Longbottoms' sitting room, having gone looking for her vanished lord in the minds of 2 Aurors she did not believe had earned their peace. Frank and Alice Longbottom lived barely, because their son's screaming brought half the order down on the house 19 minutes into what Bellatrix had planned as a long night's work. 19 minutes was enough. They would spend years learning their own names again. She went to Azkaban laughing, and the prophet printed the laugh, and at Blackmore a 19-year-old widow read it at the breakfast table and went so still that the teapot in her hand poured on past the cup's brim without her feeling it. Because before Bellatrix had gone to the Longbottoms, she had come looking for whatever it was Regulus had stolen. She had come to the Folly House on a night in early November, she and two others, hunting her cousin's widow and her cousin's papers, and Lyra had gone out the back garden with a twin under each arm and the wards burning down behind her, and she had made the 200-mile apparition to Blackmore's gate in 3 jumps with a curse in her back that was meant to unmake whatever it touched. The gate knew her blood by then. The house took her in. She lasted 5 weeks, which the healers said was 4.5 weeks longer than the curse should have allowed, and nobody who watched her spend those weeks needed telling where the extra time was going. She was banking it hour by hour in 2 small heads. She sang to them. Frog marched Arcturus into learning the words. Made Melania promise about birthdays, made Creature promise about the songs, wrote 17 letters to be opened at 17 intervals, and at the very end of it, on a sleeting December afternoon with a twin asleep in each elbow, she told them the only lie she ever told them: "I'll see you both in the morning." The curse took her that night. The tapestry in its locked room put a fine silver line through Lyra Black, B. Folly, and the house went quiet in the way of houses that have decided to wait. Arcturus Black stood in the nursery doorway at 3 in the morning, watching his son's orphans sleep in one cot with their fists knotted in each other's gowns, and made the only vow of his long life that he made with no witnesses, no wand, and no exit clause. "You will want for nothing," he told them, "and you will fear no one." The girl opened her eyes. It occurred to him, absurdly meeting that steady bookkeeping look through the bars of the cot, that the words had been received less like a comfort and more like the terms of a contract, and accepted. The echoes began as talents because that is what everyone wished to call them. Cassiopeia Black taught herself to read at 3. This was the official version told at dinners. The truth, known only to the nursery, was stranger. She did not teach herself anything. She picked up Melania's copy of the Prophet from the ottoman one wet March morning, frowned at it in exact miniature of a scholar disappointed by a source, and read the headline aloud, complete with a small editorial sigh. Asked later how she had learned her letters, she went vague in a way that was unlike her, and her brother, aged 3, answered for her from under the table. She membered them. Remembered, not learned. The nursery filed it with everything else. Corvus's talent arrived the summer they were 5, at the Greengrass Garden party, which Arcturus attended twice a decade for reasons of politics and had brought the twins to for reasons of display. There were toy brooms, charmed to hover at a child's waist height, docile as fat ponies. The green-dress girl fell off one anyway, shrieking at the exact moment a house elf's tray shattered somewhere behind the topiary, and the little broom bucked and shot toward the ornamental lake with the shriek still attached. Corvus was on the second broom before any adult had drawn a wand. What the assembled guests saw and discussed for a season was a 5-year-old in miniature dress robes flying like a falcon stooping. No hesitation, no wobble, a line drawn in the air by somebody who had done this 10,000 times. The interception timed so exactly that Daphne Greengrass was plucked from her runaway broom a body length before the water and delivered to the lawn with her hair ribbon still in place. What nobody saw, because it happened inside him, was the moment midair when his hands knew where the toe straps of a racing broom would be on a toy that had none, and his body grieved, briefly and completely, for something with a name he didn't have yet, a word like a bird's name, a snitch of gold. Arcturus, arriving through the crowd at speed with his cane forgotten in the marquee, found his grandson standing on the lawn looking at his own hands like a man inspecting borrowed tools he has just used far too well. "Where," Arcturus said, "did you learn that?" "Nowhere," Corvus said, which was the truth, and "I'm sorry," which was a lie, and then looking up with an expression the old man could not place for years afterward because it had no business on a face that age. "It's better when you're not being chased, isn't it?" There were nightmares. Of course there were. There had been a war. The healers said children soaked such things out of the very walls. But the walls of Blackmore had seen no war, and the nightmares were oddly furnished. Corvus dreamed of a mirror that showed him people he loved and would not let him touch them. He dreamed of a graveyard, of cold water, of a woman's voice saying, "Not Harry, please, not Harry," and woke calling a name that belonged to nobody in the house. Cassiopeia dreamed of a great clock turning backward, of a cat with a lamplight stare, of standing in front of a mirror herself, hearing a heavy body slide over stone behind her, and in the dream she always turned around and woke rigid with her eyes screwed shut, whispering numbers, prime after prime, until her own heart consented to slow. They dreamed, more and more often, the same dreams on the same nights. They stopped telling the adults when they understood, wordlessly, in the way they understood everything between them, that the dreams were not visitors. The dreams were memory, wearing the only door it could find. Creature came to Blackmore the autumn they were 5, sent for by Arcturus when age finally made staffing the Moor house sensible, and the day he arrived deserves its place in this account. The old elf shuffled into the hall, took one look at the twins on the stairs, and stopped as though he had walked into glass. His ears went flat, his eyes, huge and bloodshot, moved from the boy to the girl and back and filled, and he sat down on the flagstones of the hall in his tea towel with a sound like a hinge, and said to Corvus, Master Regulus's face, come back to look at creature. Corvus came down the stairs and sat on the cold flags next to him, 5 years old, and did not say it's all right, and did not pat him as a child pats a dog. He sat with the precise, unhurried companionship of somebody who had once kept vigil beside another elf, in another kitchen, at the bottom of another house, and after a while he said, Tell us about him, tell us the best thing. Creature told them about the day 9-year-old Regulus had spent his whole birthday teaching Creature to play gobstones because Creature had once said, dusting, that the game looked a fine thing. It was not a story the elf had ever told anyone. He wept through the second half of it. Cassiopeia held one of his crabbed hands in both of hers, and above them, unnoticed on the landing, Arcturus Black stood listening with his own hand pressed flat against his waistcoat pocket, where a letter had lived for 5 years, and understood that he was watching his son be loved posthumously by 2 children who could not possibly remember him, and that nothing about it looked like children being kind. It looked like debts being honored. The tapestry room was opened for them the winter they were 6, because Cassiopeia asked, and by then the household had learned what her asking meant. She would ask twice politely, and then the third time the thing being asked about would somehow be found unlocked with her already inside it. The room ran the length of the west gallery, and the tapestry ran the length of the room, and it was not, as Corvus had half remembered from a dream of a darker, narrower house, a dead thing on a wall. Grimald Place had a copy, Arcturus said, walking the gallery with a twin at each side, a mere transcription. This was the original 900 years of it, woven and living. Gold thread crawled in it slow as sap. Names budded, flowered, put out branches, and among the branches were the burn marks, black-edged holes where the weave had been killed with a wand, each one a small murder of thread. Isla, Arcturus said, touching nothing, naming the scars from memory as another man might name campaigns. Phineas. Marius, Cedrella, Alpha, Andromeda. His hand paused under a scorch mark still faintly rimmed in brown, newer than the others. Your father's brother. Sirius, Cassiopeia said. Who burned him? Corvus asked. He was looking at the mark the way he looked at things he intended to outlast. His mother, my son's wife. Arcturus's voice did not change, which was itself an answer. A woman of firm views. She died the year after you were born, and her firm views are in this cloth for as long as the cloth hangs, which is the great cruelty of tapestries. They remember our tempers longer than our reasons. Cassiopeia stood on her toes. Below the scorch, the weave had thrown out a hopeful, incomplete tendril of gold, the tapestry's own scar tissue, going nowhere. She put her finger a hair's breadth from it, not touching because one did not touch, and asked the question she had been building the whole walk, laid up like a mason's course. Can it be mended? It has never been done. That isn't what I asked. Arcturus Black looked down at his granddaughter, 6 years old, chin up, hair a storm cloud that 3 generations of black-silver combs had failed to negotiate with, and he felt the ground of the conversation move in the manner he was gradually becoming used to, the sense that of the 3 people in this gallery, only one was actually a child, and he was not always sure it was either of the 2 smallest. The tapestry answers the family magic, he said slowly. The family magic answers the head of house and the blood. What has been cut by us can, in doctrine, be rewoven by us. In doctrine, the doctrine also says the house must consent, root and branch, and this house, children, has not consented to anything unanimously since the reign of Anne. Corvus put his hands behind his back, a small ambassador, and delivered the finding that he and his sister had reached in the silent parliament they held between their 2 heads at all hours. Then we'll be the root, he said. And she'll be the branch, or the other way round, we haven't decided. It became one of the stories Arcturus told in his last years to the 2 or 3 men he permitted near his fire, and we haven't decided, he would repeat, and laugh the laugh that nobody outside the family believed reports of, and tap his cane once like a gavel. 6 years old. I had estate solicitors 40 years my juniors dying in harness, and the succession of 9 centuries was settled in my west gallery by persons 4 feet high. But it was Melania who came closest, before the end of that winter, to the truth. She had them in the still room on the last afternoon of February, ostensibly to teach them the bottling of the beech bark cordial that the house had made since before wand-makers kept ledgers, actually because Arcturus had the gout and the twins made him laugh, and she wanted the house's noise arranged around him at a comfortable distance. Snow was coming down outside in fat, unserious flakes. Cassiopeia was sealing bottles with green wax, each seal stamped with the raven, each stamp placed with the fussy exactness that meant her mind was elsewhere. Corvus was labeling, his tongue between his teeth, his handwriting an ongoing scandal. Melania told them about Regulus because they always asked, and she was the only one who could do it without cost, how he had hated flying until he loved it. His terrible secret fondness for Muggle sherbet lemons, discovered and never betrayed by his grandmother, supplied thereafter in unmarked tins. His way of standing in doorways half in, half out, a boy with one foot always over some threshold, and how she had understood only afterwards that he had spent his whole short life like that, on thresholds, and that the last door he went through he had at least chosen himself. "He'd have liked you," she said, taking the wax spoon gently from Cassiopeia, whose seals had stopped even pretending to be about the bottles. "Not the way grandparents mean it. I mean he would have liked you. He collected brave people. He kept a list, I think, in his head of everyone braver than he was, and he studied them like an examination was coming." She smiled at some interior distance. It came, of course. I believe he passed. The still room was warm and smelled of wax and cold stone and the ghost of 100 autumns worth of beech bark, and Corvus stood in that warmth, 6.5 years old, holding a label that said bottled February 1987 in the reign of nobody, all quiet on the moor, which was how Melania let them fill in the year line, and something in him leaned, the whole weight of him leaned, like a door leaning on the last of its hinge. "Grandmother," he said, "do you believe people can come back?" The wax spoon went still. "Come back," Melania said. After, he was looking at the label, not at her. "If they weren't finished, if the magic knew they weren't finished and there was a door, do you believe it happens?" Melania Black, née Macmillan, had spent 60 years married into a family that kept a locked room for its tapestry, an arch it would not speak of in its oldest deed boxes, and a motto about purity that everyone misread, because Towdr's pur had never in the founding documents meant pure of blood. The oldest charter glossed it always whole, the house entire, nothing lost. She looked at the top of her grandson's bent head, and at her granddaughter, who had gone as still as the spoon and was watching her the way the defense watches a witness. "I believe," she said at last, carefully, giving each word its full weight in silver, "that this family built its house on the far edge of everything for a reason. And I believe magic pays its debts, even when it takes 100 years, and pays them in a currency nobody expects. And I believe," setting down the spoon, taking one twin's hand in each of hers, wax warm, steady, "that if 2 unfinished people ever did come back through some door, then the kindest thing the living could do would be to let them arrive in their own time, however long it took, whatever they turned out to remember." The snow ticked at the window. Nobody said anything for a long moment, and in the parliament between the two small heads a motion was proposed, seconded, and tabled for a braver day. "The cordial," Cassiopeia said finally, in a wobbling imitation of her ordinary primness, "is going to set wrong if we don't finish the wax." "Yes," Melania agreed, turning back to the bottles, granting them their retreat with the mercy of a woman who understood exactly what she had and had not been told. That would never do. The dream, when it finally came for them entire, came on the last night of October, which afterwards neither of them ever thought was chance. They were 6 years and 3 months old. A gale was crossing the moor in ranks, rain against the east windows like flung shingle. In the nursery, which they were getting too old for and defended like a walled city, 2 beds stood 6 feet apart and were, as usual, one empty and one overoccupied, because whatever the household did about the sleeping arrangements, the morning always found them like the infants they had been, within reach of each other. The dream began where all the fragments had been trying to begin for years, a room like a ruined theater, stone benches, a dais, and on the dais an arch, and in the arch a curtain that moved without wind, and this time the dream did not shatter into green light or cold water or a woman's voice. This time it held, and they were standing on the dais together, holding hands, in bodies that were the wrong height, too tall, too old, aching in the specific way of bodies that have been fighting, and the curtain in front of them breathed its gray breath, and the voices behind it sorted themselves at long last into words. "You asked to arrive in your own time," said the arch in the language of lintels, in a voice like Melania's and like Lyra's and like neither. 6 years. The door has held your luggage long enough. Take it, it was always yours." The curtain lifted. There was no wind in the nursery, but both children sat upright in the same second in the dark in the gale-loud house, and what poured through them was not a dream and did not politely observe the border of waking. It came the way a river comes through a failed dam hole, 11 years of it. Cupboards and cats and letters in green ink, a troll's club whistling, a hat that sang, chess pieces the size of tombs, a mirror, a stone, a scarlet stone, a diary that wrote back, a girl cold on the floor of a flooded bathroom, petrified light, a dog star in the window of a tower, a rat in a boy's pocket, 100 dementors over black water and 1 silver stag, a goblet spitting fire, a graveyard, a graveyard, a graveyard, blood in a cauldron, and a voice saying, "Kill despair." An atrium of green tile, a lift, a black door, a room of whispering glass spheres, and a curtain and a hand reaching taken. And under all of it, through all of it, like the warp the pictures were woven on each other. 11 and 12 and 13 and 14 and 15, a hand hauling her back from a troll's reach, a voice across a frozen lake, "There's something you should know, we're with you whatever happens," the whole long conversation that had never once in 5 years actually stopped. The river went through and left them beached in their own small bodies in the dark, 6 years old, 90 pounds of children containing 31 years of lived time between them, and the gale hit the windows, and neither of them had made a sound. Corvus Black turned his head. His eyes had adjusted, hers were already on him, of course. Storm gray now, both pairs, the black eyes remade by whatever alchemy had remade the rest of them, and behind the gray arrived, entire, unmistakable to the one person alive equipped to check her. Hermione, he said. His voice was 6 years old. The name came out of it anyway with all its old weight, 15 years of weight, and hung in the nursery air between the two beds like something that could never again be unsaid. She let out a breath that had been held, he understood later in some sense, for 6 years. Both her hands came up over her mouth, and above them her eyes went bright, and she was nodding, kept nodding as though the nod were load-bearing. Harry, she said through her fingers. Harry, oh, we died, we fell. Bellatrix's curse hit the dais and we fell. I couldn't hold I reached, I meant to. I could never decide afterward if I meant to pull you back or come with you, and it's Harry, it's 1986. Been reading the newspaper since I was 3. It's 1986 and do you understand what we are, whose house this is? I couldn't say anything, I kept almost knowing and it kept slipping. It's like trying to hold water. It's been like 6 years of trying to hold water. And Hermione. He was out of his bed, the floor was cold, the 6 feet between the beds was the width of 2 worlds, and it took him 4 small steps to cross it. You came with me, nobody makes you do anything. You reached because you'd already decided, you told me once, remember on the stairs, you said, whatever happens, we're with you, she finished, and her hands came down from her mouth, and there in the dark was her real face, the one under all her faces, the one perhaps 5 people had ever seen. We're the last of them, Harry. I did the family trees in February, I didn't even know why I was doing them. I cross-referenced the prophet obituaries against nature's nobility, and I cried for an hour and Creature thought I was ill. Sirius is in Azkaban, and he's innocent, he must be. Pettigrew, Harry, Pettigrew is alive and asleep in a boy's bed in Devon right now. Bellatrix is in Azkaban. Your parents are, and she stopped and made herself say the whole of it because she was who she was and the whole of it was owed. James and Lily Potter died here too, and their son died with them. There's no boy who lived in this world, there's no you. Nobody stopped him properly, nobody got named in a prophecy and hunted. He just broke on Halloween on that baby the same night, and he's not dead. We know he's not dead. We're the only 2 people in this entire world except Dumbledore who even suspect, and we're 6. The gale drew breath. Rain moved across the window in one long soft rake like a hand. We're 6, Harry agreed. Corvus, both. He sat down on the edge of her bed and looked at his own hands in the dark, the small unmarked hands with no scar anywhere on them. No lightning, no I must not tell lies, nothing written on him at all by anybody, and felt the strangeness of that like a lightness where a chain has been. And we're Blacks, the actual heirs, this actual house. Creature, Hermione, Creature's story about the cave, that's the locket, the real one, R.A.B., it's our father. The word came out of him unplanned, and they both heard it land. Father. Not Regulus, the sad boy in the stories. Father. Something in his chest moved over to make room for it. He stole a Horcrux from Voldemort and died for it, and nobody knows. He's a burn mark waiting to happen on that tapestry if anyone ever finds out, and he's the bravest of all of them, and nobody knows. We know, he said. We're the only ones who know anything, where the locket is. Where the cup is, the diadem, the ring, the diary, the snake, what Quirrell's going to have under his turban in 5 years, what Dumbledore will do, what he'll want us to be, how he plays it when he has a chosen one to spend, and Hermione, he doesn't have one this time. No prophecy boy, no pig for slaughter. Just a war coming back in a few years, and an old man planning for it, and the 2 of us sitting on every answer in the world, inside the one family with the gold and the seats and the wards to actually use them. He heard it as he said it, the shape of the thing, the size of it. Outside, the storm was beginning to spend itself, the gaps between gusts lengthening, the house settling its 900 years of stone deeper into the hill the way it did at the turn of every tide of weather, patient, defended, theirs. Hermione drew her knees up under the blanket and looked at him over them. In the years to come there would be lists, whole libraries of lists, plans layered like sediment, contingencies with their own contingencies. Every campaign that made the name Black mean something new in Britain began in the Parliament of this one night. That was all later. What she said first in the dark, in the small clear voice of the girl who had walked into a troll's bathroom because a boy she barely liked yet had asked her to run the wrong way, was, "We got a second chance, Harry." Actual, literal. The thing everyone in every graveyard we ever stood in would have given anything for. We are not going to spend it being anybody's pieces. Not his, not even Dumbledore's, especially not Dumbledore's. Agreed, he paused. We're going to have to be children for years, you realize. Lessons, bedtimes, I've seen you take bedtimes. I will manage. You corrected the etiquette tutor's Latin last month and made him cry. His Latin was wrong. He was 90. His Latin, said Hermione Granger, said Cassiopeia Black, with the ghost of the smile that had crossed 2 worlds to get here, was still wrong. The wind eased. Somewhere below in the sleeping house a clock let go of midnight, one bell deep, the kind that tolls, and for the first night in 6 years the sound of it woke nothing in her that needed quieting. It was only the house counting its hours, keeping its watch as it had for 9 centuries and would for the length of everything that was coming. Harry pulled the blanket up over them both, the old campaign habit of two people who had slept cold in worse places, and the last thing either of them said that night was said into the dark, so quietly that even the house could barely hear it and the house heard everything. Together this time, he said, from the start. Her hand found his under the blanket, fingers interlocked, the grip that death had found very difficult to pick loose. From before the start, she said. Above them, through floors and beams and the long cold gallery in a locked room on 900 years of living weave, two small names put out that night, the first new gold thread the tapestry had grown in a generation, a fine bright line going somewhere. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Names in the Blood Breakfast, the morning after the world ended and began, was Kipper's. This mattered because Corvus Black had always, in 6 years of documented preference, despised Kippers, and Harry Potter, who had gone to school 7 floors above a lake and learned to eat whatever appeared, did not mind them at all. He caught himself with the fork halfway to his mouth, recalculated, and pushed the fish to the rim of the plate with the exact mutinous jaw of every previous Tuesday. Across the table, over the toast rack, his sister watched him do it and approved with her eyelids. That was the first lesson of their new life, learned before 9 in the morning. They were now two people impersonating two other people who happened to be themselves. Every taste, every reflex, every stray word had a 6-year archive it had to match. Arcturus read the prophet at the head of the table with the particular rustle that meant the goblin accounts had displeased him. Melania spooned honey with her rings clicking against the jar. Creature moved around the table refilling things, and the two smallest people in the room conducted in glances the first strategic review of the new age. Slowly, said her look, at his kippers, at his hands, at everything. I know, said his, and then because 15 years old was still inside him arguing with the porridge. Sirius is in a cell this morning. Hers, level, unblinking over the rim of a milk cup, I know, slowly. The talent they discovered that first week was that the wordless language survived everything. It had been forged between 11 and 15 in libraries and hospital wings and tents of silence where speaking would have cost points or blood. It had crossed death without a scratch. Words were for the household. Between themselves they could hold whole sessions in the pauses of a card game, and did, in the household, watching the twins play Beggar My Neighbor in absolute silence for 2 hours, found it eerie and said nothing because it had been finding them eerie for 6 years and had made its peace on favorable terms. The archive itself they went through methodically, because one of them was Hermione and the other had learned. Nights, mostly. The nursery the candle creature pretended not to notice was missing from the linen store, an inventory. What did they actually hold? They held the map of a war. Every Horcrux, a locket already in the family's keeping, a cup in Bellatrix's vault, a diadem in a room that walked, a ring under a shack's floorboards with a stone in it neither of them would say much about yet, a diary in a Wiltshire manor, a snake not yet chosen. They held the roll of the guilty, which smiling ministry men had knelt, which had bought their way clear, who had cast what at whom on nights nobody living here had witnessed. They held small deadly conveniences, that a rat with a missing toe slept in a boy's bed in Devon, that a turban would come to Hogwarts in 5 years with a face in the back of it, that a stone that made men immortal would be moved to a school to be dangled as bait. They held Dumbledore, his kindnesses, his silences, his habit of spending people gently, like a man dealing cards he was sorry about, and neither of them forgot it, the greatest of what he was owed to, a basilisk fang's worth of debts in both directions. And they held holes, whole shelves of holes. This world had already diverged. No Boy Who Lived meant no cult of the scar, no Halloween industry, a ministry that believed its own obituary of the Dark Lord with a completeness that frightened them both. The Longbottoms here had been reached 19 minutes in. Neville had a mother who was learning to hold a spoon again, which was 19 minutes better than flowers and a gum wrapper. Some names in the prophet were alive that should have been dead, and some dead that should have been alive, and every difference was a printed warning. Your map is of another country. Trust the mountains, not the roads. Rule 1, Hermione said the third night in the voice she used for carving things onto the inside of them both. We are never caught knowing, not once, not ever. One slip, one date, one name we shouldn't have, and we become a thing to be investigated instead of people to be raised. Everything we do has to have grown here. She tapped the floorboards, visible roots. If we want to use a fact, we first build the way we could have found it. And Rule 2, Harry said, is each other. Rule 2 is each other. She said it the way treaties are ratified, before the house, before the plan, before everything. We're the only country either of us is a citizen of. He looked at her in the candlelight, 6-year-old hair like a thunderhead, jaw set no, doing the thing he was now forbidden to call setting her jaw, being herself with her whole face, and the 15-year-old inside him put down, quietly, forever, the last of the loneliness he had carried in 2 lives. Country was the right word. Everyone else had homelands. He had her. Then we're going to be fine, he said, and blew out the candle like a boarder closing for the night. Grief kept different hours than planning, and it would not be scheduled. For him it came by ambush, a smell of broom polish from the shed by the stables. Bonfire smoke off the tenant farms in November, which was the burrow, which was a kitchen with a clock whose hands said mortal peril as casually as tea time, which was a whole family that in this world would never owe him or know him. Ron, 11 months old right now in a Devon farmhouse with a future that had no seat saved on any train. He grieved his parents doubly and strangely. They had died here too, the same night the same door splintered and their son had died with them, and so somewhere in a churchyard in the West Country there was a small stone with a name and a single date on it. His own name, his own birthday, he asked to be taken. He was clever about it, or thought he was. A child's morbid curiosity about the famous tragedy, timed to a trip Arcturus was making to Bath. Arcturus looked at him for a long moment over the itinerary and said only, "The Potters were kin. Doria Black married Charles Potter, you are their cousin at some remove. It is proper to pay respects to kin." And so on a wet green afternoon in the spring of 1987, a boy stood in the churchyard of Godric's Hollow in a black coat, before a triple stone, and read his mother's name and his father's name. And under them Harry James Potter, 31 July 1980, 31 October 1981, and the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death, and understood in a way that had nothing to do with the plans and everything to do with why the plans mattered. That he was the only person alive who could mourn this child properly, because he was the only one who knew exactly what had been lost. 11 letters in green ink, a hand on a shoulder in a lit doorway, 7 years of a castle, a stag made of light, a whole boy, a whole world. He didn't cry in the churchyard. He stood with his grandfather's hand on his shoulder and the rain coming off the yews, and he made the child under the stone the only promise that meant anything from where he stood: "I'll take it from here." Hers came by expedition, because Hermione had never in either life waited for an ambush she could walk out and meet. It took her 4 months to build the Visible Roots, a junior naturalist's periodical, a subscription wheedled from Melania, a study of urban fox populations that just happened to require, of all the towns in England, Crawley. Creature took her, disguised as her own governess's errand, because Creature by then would have taken her into the sea if she had asked it with her father's eyes. The surgery was on the High Street, GRANGER and GRANGER, dental practice, gilt on glass, and through the window at 4:10 on a Thursday. A woman in a white coat laughed at something the receptionist said and pushed her glasses up her nose with the back of her wrist. Exactly the gesture. And a man with a beard came out of the back office holding a mug that said World SOKAYST Dentist, which had been a Christmas present in another world from a daughter. There was no daughter here. She had checked the records 3 ways. Helen and Daniel Granger, married 1978, no children. A file at a fertility clinic in Horsham she had been ashamed of finding and had read anyway, with a 5-year correspondence inside it that ended in a single line from Helen's own hand: "We have decided to stop trying and start living." Whatever soul had been meant for them, the door at the end of everything had posted it elsewhere. Cassiopeia Black stood on the far pavement in a gray pinafore, 7 years old, holding an unnecessary clipboard about foxes, and watched her mother laugh behind glass for as long as the light lasted. She did not go in. There was no version of going in. They were not her parents. Her parents had raised a girl called Hermione in a semi-detached house with fluoride opinions and love like central heating, constant and unremarked, and those people did not exist anywhere now except in her, in how she alphabetized, in how she took her tea, in 100 habits of kindness she would carry in a stranger's body for the rest of a stranger's life. The woman in the white coat glanced up once at the closing time at the small girl across the road, the way you glance at children who stand too still. For 1 lit second they looked at each other through the glass in 40 feet in one impassable world. Then Mrs. Granger smiled, vague and warm, a smile for somebody's daughter, and turned the sign to closed. Creature, who had stood under a disillusionment against the postbox for 3 hours without once complaining, walked her to the alley for the jump home and broke his silence exactly once. "Creature's little mistress watches that shop," he said, like Master Regulus watched the sea. "And what did the sea do?" she asked, when he watched it. "Nothing, little mistress." The old elf took her hand. "The sea kept what it kept." And Master Regulus came home and was Creature's, and that was the part the sea never got. She thought about that the whole way home, and at the gate of Blackmoor with the moor wind combing the heather and the lit windows of the only homeland left to her coming up through the dusk, she decided that the elf had said something true enough to build on. The sea kept what it kept. What came home was hers. She went in and was theirs and stopped watching shops. The trouble with carrying 2 lifetimes of magic in a body 8 summers old was that the body had opinions of its own, and they found this out, as they found out most things, the hard way, in the orchard, in front of a witness. There was a beech at the orchard's north corner, older than the orchard, that the twins had claimed the way children claim high places, and Cassiopeia climbed it not because Hermione Granger had ever climbed anything voluntarily, but because Cassiopeia Black had a brother who could not be allowed to hold the height record unchallenged in perpetuity. She was 11 feet up on an October afternoon, reaching for the 12-foot fork with the last of the light coming gold and level across the moor, when the branch under her left foot, weakened by a summer of wasps nobody had audited, went without any warning at all. What should have happened was a fall, a scream, at worst a wrist. What happened instead was Corvus. He was 40 feet away with his back half turned, peeling an apple with the potion's knife. He did not draw a wand, he had no wand. Wands were 10 months away. He turned with the knife still in his hand, and the world simply agreed to be different. The air under his sister went dense as deep water, took her, slowed her, and set her down among the windfalls with no more violence than a leaf uses, and every apple still on the tree came off it in the same second and hung suspended, 100 red moons in a bronze sky, because the magic had come out of him the size of the feeling and not the size of the job. The apples hung for 3 full heartbeats. Then they fell all together, a soft drumming thunder on the turf, and in the ringing quiet afterward brother and sister stared at each other across 40 feet of orchard with the identical thought passing between them on the silent wire. That was not 8 years old. That did not look anything like 8 years old. Melania was standing at the orchard gate with a trug of quinces. She had seen the whole of it. She stood quite still, an old woman gone the color of the sky behind her, and the twins walked to her through the fallen apples like 2 ambassadors approaching a border after an incident, ready with 6 explanations, every one of them workable, every one of them a lie. "Grandmother," Corvus began. "Hush," she set the trug down. She took his chin in her quince-gold fingers and looked into him, and then at Cassiopeia, a long look, a still-room look, and what she said, when she said anything, was, "In February in the still-room, you asked me whether people can come back. If they weren't finished, you said, if there was a door." The more wind moved the orchard. Neither twin spoke, which was itself the whole of an answer, and Melania Black nodded slowly, as a woman nods when a suspicion of long-standing finally consents to sit down at her table. "I have not asked again," she said. "I will not. I told you the kindest thing the living could do was let you arrive in your own time, and I hold to it. But you will hear me on this once, both of you, and then I'll take these quinces in." She straightened, and the softness went out of her posture, and something older stood there in her gardening coat, a Macmillan married 60 years into the house at the end of the world. "Whatever you carry, it is heavier than you are. That is not a rebuke, it is engineering. A house may hang any weight it likes from a beam that is thick enough, but you two hang yours from each other, and children's shoulders grow at the speed of childhood and not 1 hour faster. So you will do this family the courtesy of growing. You will eat and you will sleep and you will fall out of trees at ordinary speeds. There will be years and you will use them. The war, whichever war it is you two are so quietly furnishing for, will keep. Wars always keep, childhoods don't." She picked up her trug. Halfway through the gate she paused, and her voice came back over her shoulder, dry as good sherry. "The apples want gathering now you've had them all down. Bring the big baskets. And Corvus, dear, when you catch your sister, catch her a little sooner. My heart is also older than it looks." They gathered apples until dark, the 3 of them, and said nothing more about doors, and that winter, when Melania's heart made her words prophetic, in her sleep, with no pain the healers could find, the twins stood at the graveside in the family plot with the entire meaning of "there will be years, and you will use them turning over inside them like a key." Arcturus stood beside the stone for a long time after the others had gone in. They watched from the yew walk and did not intrude, and Corvus, watching the old man's bare head bend in the sleet, said quietly, "We're not fast enough. Everyone we plan to save has to survive the plan. We have to be faster." "Then we stop waiting to be older," said his sister, in whom loss did its work as engineering, exactly as her grandmother's had. "The locket first, this winter, while the house is quiet, and then serious. He's been in that cell 9 years while we've been growing shoulders." The locket they dealt with in their 8th year, because it could not wait longer and should not have waited so long, and the way of it became the private founding legend of everything the 2 of them did afterward. Creature told them the story on a January night, the twins cross-legged on the kitchen flags, the tale coming out of him in pieces like shrapnel working out of an old wound. The Dark Lord's request for an elf, the cave, the basin, the potion that made you watch things, the water and the hands in the water, Master Regulus's face when Creature came home, and then a year on Master Regulus's face in the same cave, drinking the same fire, saying switch them, saying go home, saying destroy it, and the last of him going under the black water with his hand still lifted, not waving, ordering home. And Creature tried. The elf's voice had worn down to wire. Creature tried everything, fire, axes, acid from Master's own stores. The locket laughed at Creature. 12 years it sits in its cupboard at the old house and laughs, and Creature cannot open it and cannot break it and cannot obey, and Master Regulus's last order sits on Creature's heart like a stone off that beach, and Creature polishes it, because what else is Creature to do with a thing he cannot kill? Silence in the old kitchen. The copper pans held their light. Corvus looked at Cassiopeia, and in the parliament between them a motion carried unanimously in the time it takes a candle to gutter. Bring it to us, Corvus said. Not tonight, next week when grandfather's in London. And creature, this is an order in father's name, so it goes above everything. You bring it inside a silver bowl, you don't touch it with your skin, and you don't listen to anything it says on the way. It talks. It will know what you want most, and it will offer it. It lies. Creature went very still. Little master knows what it is. Yes, little master knows, and is 8 years old and knows. The elf looked from one to the other of them, the great cracked intelligence behind his eyes assembling something at speed, and what it assembled visibly did not frighten him. It settled him, like a joint going back into its socket. Servants of old houses, they came to understand, kept a category the wizards themselves had lost. Some children come back haunted, and you do not question the ghost, you serve it. What are they then, if creature may ask it? Creature's twins, what are they? Cassiopeia reached out and took the elf's crabbed hand as she had at 5, listening to Gobstone's stories. Unfinished business, she said. His among others, will you help us finish it? They could not destroy the locket. That part of creature's engineering had been sound before they were born. Basilisk venom or fiendfire, and the second was a wildfire with opinions, and the first was a maintenance question for a future year. What they could do and did in the disused vestry of Blackmore's own chapel with the elf standing guard was contain it properly. A casket of Rowan lined with lead, and around it, chalked and then chiseled and then silver inlaid over 6 patient weekends. A triple ring Cassiopeia built out of the Black Library's grimmest shelf, quieting runes inside binding runes inside a ring of old Moor words that were less magic than manners. The formula the hill folk had cut over plague pits: sleep and be not missed. The locket fought exactly once at the closing. The vestry candles browned, the chalk lines smoked. A voice neither of them had heard in years came up off the metal, sweet as rot, trying doors. It offered Corvus a red-haired family at a long table with a place laid for him. It offered Cassiopeia a surgery on a high street, gilt on glass, and a mug that said World SOKYST, and a girl-shaped space behind the counter. And it had chosen out of everything in 2 worlds, the 2 of them exactly wrong because they came both pre-grieved, and a door only opens for wanting if the wanting is still bleeding, and theirs had scarred over into something with load-bearing walls. We know, Corvus told the locket conversationally and shut the lid, and the silver ring drank the last syllable of the sweet voice mid-lie. They sat afterward on the vestry step, drained white the way wardwork drains children, shoulder against shoulder, and the winter sun came through the lancet window and lay on the floor in a long gold blade, and their father's murderer's soul slept in a box behind them like a swatted wasp in a jar. 4 to find, Cassiopeia said, 1 to wait for. And a snake not born yet, maybe. He tipped his head back against the doorframe. You realize he'd be proud of us, Regulus, father. 2 years on, the word had stopped needing a run-up. First people in the world to finish one of his sentences. He'd be proud, she said, and then he'd tell us to eat something because his elf certainly will. And creature, materializing with sandwiches at the word elf like a summoned conscience, informed them that little master and little mistress would be eating in the kitchen where it was warm, and that creature had taken the liberty of a treacle tart, and neither of them had ever told him about treacle tart, and neither of them said a word about it, and both of them noticed, and it went into the archive of small impossible mercies that was becoming, entry by entry, a childhood. The North Tower study stayed locked, and the name it was locked around stayed unsaid, and in the spring after the locket went to sleep the twins decided the household had observed both customs long enough. They chose their ground with care, the anniversary of nothing, a mild grey Tuesday, the estate correspondence done, Arcturus mellowed by exactly 1 glass of the Armagnac he permitted himself when the tenant accounts balanced. Corvus opened because they had agreed the question would land better from the face that was Regulus's. Grandfather, tell us about our uncle. The pen did not stop. That was the tell they agreed afterward. An innocent man's pen would have stopped. Arcturus finished his line, blotted it, and said without looking up, you have no uncle. The tapestry disagrees, Cassiopeia said. There's a burn with his dates under it. Born 1959, no second date. The weave puts out gold toward the hole, grandfather. We've watched it do it. The cloth thinks he's alive, and the cloth thinks he's ours, and the cloth has been right about this family for 900 years. The cloth records blood. It has no opinion on merit. The old man set down his pen now, and the study assembled itself around him, the way rooms did when he decided a conversation was to be survived rather than escaped. Sirius Orion Black betrayed the Potters to the Dark Lord and murdered 13 people in a public street. The Wisengamot record is 11 lines. I have read them perhaps 1,000 times. He is in Azkaban, and the name is not spoken under this roof, and you will now tell me why 2 children who weep at the correct funerals have chosen this one to be curious about. They had built the roots for this, months of them, and Cassiopeia laid the visible chain out link by link, a child's precocious project gone somewhere the adults hadn't followed. The press archive in the library, the trial records she had written to the ministry for under the estate solicitor's letterhead, in a hand indistinguishable from the solicitor's clerk's because the request forms were public and nobody checks what children practice. 11 lines, grandfather, you said it yourself. I found the committal order. Do you know what I didn't find? A trial transcript. Dorcas, the archivist, wrote back that no such document exists, not sealed, not lost, never made. Bartemius Crouch sent him down by administrative order in November 1981, in the week the ministry was processing 40 Death Eaters, and there is no record that Sirius Black was ever asked a single question by anybody. They didn't even take his wand for priori incantatem until it had lain in an evidence box for 9 days, and when they took it, the record of the result was, she produced the phrase with tongs, misfiled. Silence. The Armagnac stood forgotten. Arcturus Black had spent 60 years reading contracts for the clause that kills, and they watched the 11 lines he had read 1,000 times rearrange themselves behind his eyes into what they had always been, not a verdict, a disposal. May still be guilty, he said at last, and his voice had the terrible evenness of a man conceding a breach in his own wall. He may, Corvus said. Everything we can find says the evidence was never tested. That's all we're claiming. But grandfather, you taught us the law of the family before anything else, most ancient and noble. Heir of the house imprisoned without trial, and the house said nothing for 9 years. Whatever he did or didn't do, what does the silence do to us? What has it already done? It was cruel, and they knew it, and they had discussed the cruelty in advance and levied it deliberately, because Arcturus Black could outwait guilt and outlive grief, but had never once in his long life been able to sit still inside a dereliction of the house. He rose. He went to the window and stood with his hands behind his back, looking down the valley where the beck ran silver through the ling, an old man doing arithmetic it had cost 9 years not to do. My son burned him off the London copy when he was 16, he said to the glass. Walburga's work, Orion signed it the way he signed everything she handed him. I did not countermand it. I told myself the boy had gone to the Potters and was the Potters' concern. Then the Potters were dead and he was in chains, and it was easier, do you understand me? It was easier that he be guilty, because if he was guilty, the family had merely produced one more monster, and we knew how to survive that. We have always known how to survive our monsters. What we have never once known how to survive is our innocence. He turned around. The light off the moor made his eyes pale as coin silver. You will leave this with me, both of you. Whatever I decide will be decided as Lord Black in the open on the record, and if I take this up it will not be as an old man's remorse. It will be the House of Black asking the Ministry of Magic, before the full Wisengamot, one question it cannot survive being asked twice. Such a question is asked once in a generation. It must not miss. Then we'll help you aim, Cassiopeia said. He looked at the two of them, side by side in front of his desk in the gray Tuesday light, 9 years old, patient as masons, and something crossed his face that on any younger man would have required a name. Merlin helped the ministry, said Lord Black, and rang for tea, and the North Tower study was unlocked by the weekend, and the name was spoken under the roof again, first carefully, like a word in a newly learned language, and then month by month as what it had been all along, which was the name of family. Arcturus began their formal education that same year, and it was war by other means from the first morning. He taught them himself, which was unheard of, lords of houses hired. But the tutors kept ending in tears or resignation, the Latin master's collapse being merely the most discussed, and the old man had watched his grandchildren for 8 years with the unhurried attention of a chess player watching a board that claims to be a garden, and he had reached, in private, a conclusion of his own. He never named it. Blacks of his vintage did not name things. Naming was expenditure. He acted on it instead. You will learn 3 subjects from me, he said, first lesson, the study curtains drawn against a June morning as though sunlight were an eavesdropper. The law of the family, the money of the family, and the war of the family. Everything else, languages, deportment, wandwork when your letters come, is furniture. These 3 are the house. The law of the family turned out to be the Wisengamot from the inside. Charters, precedents, proxies, the exact tonnage of the phrase most ancient and noble, why a house with 2 seats and clean books could lose every vote for a decade and still win the decade. The money of the family was Gringotts and everything Gringotts pretended not to be, which vaults fed which ventures, why the goblins honored contracts with the passion other races reserved for gods, what a debt was worth in gold and what the same debt was worth in silence. And the war of the family was the oldest subject in the curriculum, older than wands, taught with the tapestry room unlocked, and the 2 of them walked along 900 years of thread. Who had married whom to end which feud, which burn marks had cost which alliances, how a family was a wall built out of people, and how walls fell always, said Arcturus, from the inside first. They were, and had to be careful not to be, the 2 best students he had ever had. The calibration was Hermione's craft, and she ran it like an instrument, brilliant but plausible, precocious but patchy, each of them assigned deliberate weaknesses to inhabit. Corvus was permitted his real indifference to spelling. Cassiopeia manufactured a difficulty with goblin arithmetic that caused her actual physical suffering to maintain. The arithmetic got its revenge at Gringotts. Arcturus took them the autumn they were 9, a formal presentation of the heirs to the account manager, which was among the oldest of the house's customs, and he told them on the steps, the only appointment in Britain for which a Black was never late. The manager was called Ragnock the Younger, was 106, and had handled the Black accounts for 60 years from behind a desk of black granite with nothing on it but an abacus whose beads were carved. The twins realized halfway through the interview, from the knuckle bones of something that had presumably defaulted. He tested them. It was not disguised as anything else. Goblins did not disguise. He set Corvus a problem about a debtor who could repay either in gold now or in favors later, and listened, expressionless, while the boy worked through it aloud and concluded that it depended entirely on whether you ever intended to be weak, because favors were worth more than gold on the day you had no other coin, and a house that never planned to be weak was a house planning badly. One of Ragnock's ears moved, a quarter-inch, which Arcturus told them afterward was the most emotion a Black had extracted from that desk since the crash of 26. Cassiopeia he tested differently. He slid a single parchment across the granite, a contract, he said, that the house had signed in 1811, and a good one, find the flaw. She read it 4 times while the ancient clock dripped, and found no flaw in the terms at all, and said so, and then, because the 4th reading had snagged on something that was not a term, the flaw is the witness. This is witnessed by a wizard of House Rosier, and House Rosier held a grudge debt against House Black from 1794 that wasn't settled until 1820. His testimony could have been challenged at any time in those 9 years, and the contract voided at the challenger's convenience. The words are perfect, the signature is a knife under the table. Ragnock the Younger sat back and looked at Arcturus and said something in gobbledygook, 5 syllables that made the old man blink, and to the day of the reading of Ragnock's own will, in which he left Cassiopeia Black his abacus, a bequest that stunned the bank's whole senior floor into a week of silence, he never told either twin what the 5 syllables meant. Arcturus told them eventually on his last Christmas. Blade friends. Nearest translation, it is not a compliment goblins pay to wizards. It is not strictly a compliment goblins pay at all. It is a category, and it opens doors that gold does not, and no living Black had been in it, and now you are, and I am instructed by our account manager to tell you that the bank does not apologize for testing children, on the grounds that the bank has met children. Clemency he introduced the winter they were 9, and here the calibration nearly failed them, because Arcturus Black was a legilimens of the discreet old-fashioned kind, and the first time he touched his grandson's mind in a lesson framed as a card game, he met not a child's weather but weather over walls. He said nothing. He touched the girl's mind 3 days later behind a conversation about France and found the same, surfaces that behaved and beneath them masonry. He sat alone with the brandy that night for a long time. What he did next was the making of them all, and they only pieced together years later how near run a thing it had been, what other doors an old cold man might have opened instead. He summoned them to the study, set the wards himself, wand out, an honor he accorded perhaps 4 rooms a year, and laid his own cards face up on the leather. Someone has fortified your minds, he said. Both. The work is old, deep, and better than mine. I have not found who I no longer expect to. I have watched you 8 years, and what I have seen is 2 children who weep at the correct funerals. Guard this family's servants like kin, and ask always 1 question ahead of the lesson. So I will ask mine once and take whatever answer I am given, and then this subject will close. He looked at them one then the other, gray eyes in a face like a cliff. Are you mine? They understood the question. It was not whose are you, he knew the blood. It was the older question, the tapestry question, the only one his 9 centuries of thread actually cared about. Which way does your wall face? We're yours, Corvus said, and you're ours. That's the part we'd like written down somewhere, grandfather. It runs both directions or it doesn't run. The clock on the mantel dealt its dry seconds. Arcturus Black, who had buried both sons and spoken to neither of them at the end, looked at his heir across the leather desktop, and what moved behind the cliff face was visible only for the length of a card turning over. And then he said, noted in the ledger, in a voice 1 degree off true, and rang for creature, and had hot chocolate brought, unasked, for the only time in anyone's memory of the study. And taught them 3-handed piquet until midnight, while the wards sang their long, quiet chord around the last 3 blacks of the direct line. It ran both directions after that. Nobody named it. Naming was expenditure. The oath came at the turning of their 10th year, and the tapestry chose the night itself. It had been growing all that year. The gold thread from the twins' names had put out runners, fine as spider silk, questing along the weave in defiance of every doctrine in the family codices, which held that the tapestry recorded and did not anticipate. The runners had a heading. Creature noticed it first, dusting, the threads from Corvus and from Cassiopeia, and a third, older filament, dim but not dead, running down from the scorched hole where Sirius Orion Black had been burned away. all three feeling toward each other across the cloth like roots toward water. They stood before it on a night of hard frost, the gallery windows full of more stars, and they had come with the vestry candle and a purpose they had been building toward for 4 years, and found the tapestry already lit, the gold runners faintly shining, the whole 900-year weave holding its breath. It knows what we're for, Corvus said. It's a ledger. Cassiopeia's voice had the hush she saved for very great libraries. 9 centuries of entries, and every single one of them is somebody keeping or breaking the same promise. Of course it knows. It's seen every version of this ever tried. She looked up and up. The weave rose into the dark of the ceiling. Ravens and thorn vines and stars. Names, names, names. I keep thinking about what the arch said. Old blood, doors open both ways. This family built its house at the end of the world and kept a door there, and I don't think Tauger's purr ever meant what Walburga thought it meant. I read the founding charter. The gloss in the margin isn't purity of blood. Its purr is an entire, unbroken, always whole. Nothing lost, Harry said. The old gallery took his voice and returned it deepened. He thought of a stone in a wet churchyard with his own name on it, of a cell over cold water where his father's brother was counting his 12th year for a crime the rat in Devon slept sound on, of burn marks with living women behind them, Andromeda somewhere raising a daughter who fell over things, of a boy in a Wiltshire manor being taught to sneer at half his own family, of the sleeping wasp in the vestry and its 4 waking siblings, and of the man who had made them, who had also, it occurred to him every time and never stopped being strange, been a boy in an orphanage that smelled of carbolic, unloved by anybody, unfinished business of the cruelest kind, the whole broken tree of it, always whole, all right. Then here's the entry for the ledger. He drew the small knife they used for potions prep. They had argued about the blood and Hermione had lost, or rather had won the argument that it must be freely and equally given, and then insisted on going first. 2 thumbprints, hers and his, pressed together and then pressed to the selvage of the weave, the border, the blank margin where 900 years of weavers had signed nothing, because the margin belonged to the house itself. We are Cassiopeia and Corvus of the House of Black, she said, and the frostlight stood in the windows and the gold runners rose off the cloth like filings toward a lodestone. We were sent back through our family's door, and we take the debt that comes with passage. We will mend what was burned, we will free what was caged. We will finish what our father began, and unmake his murderers' anchors, every one, and we will do it without becoming anything the margin of this cloth would be ashamed to hold. The house whole, nothing lost, Tauger's purr the old way, and each other before everything, Harry said, because the treaty had a first clause and the tapestry might as well learn it now. Witnessed, the weave answered, not in words, the arch had spent its words. The 2 thumbprints sank into the selvage and silvered, small as seals on a deed. The gold runners knit, once visibly, the twins, threads, and the dim filament from the burned hole braiding a finger's width of new cloth. And through the fabric and the stone and the whole night hill beneath them ran a single slow pulse of warmth, like a great heart turning over in sleep, and every candle in Blackmore House, Creature swore it to his last day, every candle in every room stood straight and burned blue for the space of one breath. In the study 2 floors below, Arcturus Black looked up from his ledgers at his suddenly azure lamp, listened to the old magic move through his walls like tide under a boat, and did not ring for anyone, and did not go up. He sat still until the light came back to gold, and then he uncapped his pen, and in the great ledger of the house, in the column where his grandfather had recorded marriages and his great-grandfather had recorded duels, he wrote the date, and beside it, in the smallest of his hands, the house has consented to something. Root and branch, I was not consulted, and find I do not mind. He blotted it and sat alone in the lamplight with his hand flat on the page, an old man at the end of a long, cold ledger, feeling the warmth run out along lines of thread and blood to the 2 small furnaces asleep above him. And upstairs, in the bed that was theirs, because every bed they had ever defended had been theirs, the last heirs of the House of Black slept dreamless, hands interlocked, under a roof that had decided, in the oldest language there is, to be worthy of what had come home to it. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The Lord and the heirs. Lord Black went to war in the spring of 1990, and he went the way his house had always gone, by owl, by ledger, and by dinner party. The twins watched the campaign assemble from inside it, and it was, Cassiopeia said later, the finest education either of her lives ever gave her. Arcturus did not begin with the Wisengamot. He began with the ground the Wisengamot stood on. Through February and March, a procession of unremarkable letters left Blackmore under the Raven seal. To the solicitors Tibbet and Craik, instructing a quiet audit of every procedural order Bartemius Crouch had signed between October 1981 and January 1982. To the editor of the Prophet, renewing an advertising contract that had lapsed with a personal note. To 3 Wisengamot widows to whom the house owed or was owed some antique courtesy. And to Madame Amelia Bones, head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, an invitation to dine at the town house. On the stated occasion of a bequest the late Melania Black had left to St. Mungo's, and the unstated occasion that Amelia Bones was the only senior officer of the ministry whose incorruptibility both sides of the last war had found professionally inconvenient. "You are not going to tell her the conclusion," Arcturus instructed the twins, who were to be present at that dinner because their grandmother's bequest made a decent pretext for it. "You are going to hand her thread. Bones is not a woman who wears other people's conclusions. She knits her own. Hand her thread." They handed her thread. It was Cassiopeia over the soup who mentioned, in the mode of a precocious child showing off her research into the family her grandmother had married into, that she had tried to read her uncle's trial and been unable to find it. Not unable to read it, she clarified with the pedantry of 10 years old. Unable to find it. There wasn't one. Wasn't that odd, when even the worst of them, even Lestrange, had a transcript you could request? Amelia Bones's monocle came up slowly, like a gun laid on a rest. "There will have been a committal order," she said. "There is," said Cassiopeia. "It's 11 lines, I counted, and the wand evidence line says misfiled." The monocle turned to Arcturus, who was ostentatiously occupied with the decanting of a burgundy and did not look up on the principal, explained to the twins beforehand that the most persuasive thing a black could do in front of a law officer was visibly declined to persuade. "You understand," Bones said at last to the room in general, "that if the Wisengamot reopens Black, it reopens the winter of '81, all of it, every order Barty Crouch signed with the building on fire. There are 300 families who have spent 9 years healing over those orders like skin over shrapnel." "Shrapnel," said Arcturus, addressing the wine, "is customarily removed before the healing, madam. Where I served, at any rate, standards may differ at the ministry." The trial of Sirius Orion Black was gazetted for the last week of June. The prophet, whose advertising contract had been renewed, covered the procedural motions with a thoroughness that surprised its readers. The 3 widows produced, among them, 11 reliable votes. And Bartemius Crouch, who fought the reopening with a fury that read in the gallery as oddly personal, was reduced in the final session before the trial to arguing that the accused was too dangerous to transport, an argument that died when Madame Bones observed, aloud on the record, that the ministry had found him safe enough to transport 9 years ago, when it was in a hurry. Dumbledore voted with the majority for the trial. The twins in the gallery in their morning greys watched him do it, and watched him afterward not leave. The chief warlock lingering in his high seat with his fingers steepled while the chamber emptied, his half-moon spectacles angled, for a long considering moment, up at the 2 smallest spectators in the room. Corvus met the look with the polite blankness of a well-bred child who does not know he is being weighed. Beside him he felt his sister do the same, and under the blankness, on the silent wire between them, one word traveling both directions at once: walls. They had 8 years of Arcturus's masonry behind their eyes by then. The touch, when it came, was so light it was barely a question, snow landing on a roof, and it found the roof frozen and moved on, and Albus Dumbledore's expression did not change at all, which told them more about him than anything in either of their lifetimes' archives had, because a baffled man looks baffled, and a patient one looks kind. They brought Sirius up from the holding cells at 9 in the morning on the 26th of June, and the twins, seated between Arcturus and the solicitors, saw what 9 years of Dementors leave when they are done skimming. He had been the handsome one. Even the hostile press cuttings said so, the laughing dark boy in the wedding photographs, best man, best everything. What the Aurors steered into the chained chair was gray at 30, gray skin, gray-shot hair to his shoulder blades, eyes sunk so far back in his skull that at first they seemed all pupil. He moved like a man listening to his own bones for the catch in them. When the chains took his wrists he went perfectly still, in the manner of somebody for whom stillness had been, for a long time, the only remaining possession. Then he saw Arcturus, and the stillness cracked. "Grandfather." His voice was a ruin, 2 syllables of rust, and then, because even ruined he was Sirius Black, he dragged a bow out of himself against the chains, mocking, gallant, dead serious under both. "You've redecorated, I hate the venue." The gallery did not laugh. The gallery was 300 families healed over shrapnel. But in the front row a boy of 10 laughed before he could stop it. One short bark, indecorous, entirely audible, and Sirius Black's sunken eyes came around and found him, and found his sister beside him, and something in the wreck of his face flickered, puzzled, the instinct of a man seeing his brother's bones resurrected in a child's jaw and having no file to put it in. The Veritasrum was Bones's doing. She had made it a condition of her department's cooperation. 3 drops and the chamber got the winter of '81 from inside. It got the switch, Sirius the obvious secret keeper, the decoy, insisting they use Peter instead, the humble one, the safe one. "Tell no one, not even Dumbledore, not even Moony. I'll draw them off, it's me they'll watch." It got the cottage with its side torn open and the 2 bodies and the small third and what that had been like, delivered in the flat annihilating tense of the potion, for the man whose idea the switch had been. It got the street in Bermondsey, Peter screaming betrayal for the crowd, the wand behind his own back, the blast, the sewer, the finger. It got the laughing. You laughed, the prosecutor said. The record says you laughed, and the potion answered in Sirius's rusted voice. Yes, because it was funny. Peter had beaten us all with one stroke, and the joke was the size of the war. I stood in the crater and understood exactly how funny it was. I have been laughing at it for 9 years in the dark, and the potion, Ruthless added. It is the only thing they cannot take, a thing that is already broken. And it got because Cassiopeia had spent an evening teaching the junior solicitor precisely which questions to hand the prosecutor. As thread, the sentence that broke the case open. Peter Pettigrew is an unregistered animagus. His form is a common garden rat, brown, undersized. The finger they gave his mother in a box is a finger he cut off himself before he transformed. Check the sewer survey from that week. There was a live rat in the blast records, noted and dismissed. He is not dead. He is hiding. He is very, very good at hiding, and you have all spent 9 years feeding me to his joke. Uproar has a texture. Corvus had been in enough courtrooms in his first life, mostly as the accused, to know the difference between the uproar that changes nothing and the kind that moves load-bearing walls. This one moved walls, crouch on his feet shouting about contempt, bones on hers with the monocle blazing, the prophet bench writing so fast their quills smoked, and above it all Dumbledore silent, his gaze gone somewhere very far away and very fast, a man doing 9 years of arithmetic in 4 seconds and not liking a single line of it. The verdict took the assembled Wisengamot 11 minutes, one for each line of the committal order. Not guilty, all counts. Compensation to be assessed. And a writer read by Bones in a voice that promised the assessment would draw blood. A full audit of every conviction processed without trial in the winter of 1981, effective immediately, department resources to be reallocated as required. The hunt for the rat took 19 days. They did it with ledgers, not heroics, which the twins observed with professional appreciation. The DMLE cross-referenced 9 years of Hogwarts pet registries, apothecary sales, and at the suggestion of a junior clerk who had received an anonymous and very specific letter, wizarding households with recorded rats of unusual longevity. A common rat lives 3 years. Scabbers of the Weasleys of Ottery St. Catchpole had been in the family 12 and was missing, the youngest boy told the nice Auror lady proudly, before his mother could hush him, a toe. They took Pettigrew in the Burrows kitchen with a revealing charm and 4 wands already drawn, and Molly Weasley's shriek, the prophet reported, was audible in the village. The twins read the account at the Blackmore breakfast table, and Corvus put the paper down and looked at nothing for a while. At a kitchen he had eaten in 100 times in a world where its clock had watched a rat sleep on a boy's pillow for 3 more years, at the specific weight of 12 years, at how close things run. Cassiopeia's hand crossed the table and rested on his wrist, and the clocks of both worlds ticked on, and Pettigrew went to the cell that had been Sirius's, which nobody at the ministry seemed to find poetic except Amelia Bones, who assigned it personally. Albus Dumbledore came to Blackmore in July, between the verdict and the release, and he came correctly. A letter first, a stated purpose, the chief warlock calling upon Lord Black to discuss the audit of the winter convictions, in which the testimony of House Black would carry weight. Arcturus received him in the long drawing room with the good tea service and both twins present, because hiding them, he had ruled, would say more than displaying them ever could. He was exactly as they remembered and could not possibly remember. The beard, the half-moon glasses, robes the color of a bruised plum, the courtesy that filled a room like weather. He praised the prospect from the windows. He accepted a second cup. He spoke of the audit with what the twins recognized as complete sincerity. That was the thing about him neither of them had ever solved. The sincerity ran all the way down, and it was load-bearing for designs the sincerity itself never saw fit to mention. And in the natural course of things, with the sun moving 1 mullion's width along the carpet, he turned the conversation gently, like a man turning a boat with one finger on the tiller, to the children. You were in the gallery, I think, for the trial, a hard schoolroom. His eyes were on Cassiopeia, blue, kind, and at the bottom of the kindness, the instrument. Your grandfather tells me it was your reading that first found the gap in the record. That is a remarkable piece of scholarship for 10. Everyone kept telling me the trial would be in the archive, Cassiopeia said, in the ringing, earnest voice of a child reporting a fault in the universe. It was, I don't think books should say things that aren't true, sir. Archives are books that promise. So they are, he smiled, the instrument did not. And you, Mr. Black, in a fortnight the young man your research has freed will be your guardian's responsibility and in some sense yours. Most boys your age would find that a strange weather to grow in. What do you make of your uncle? The question had 3 floors, and they inspected all of them before Corvus answered it from the ground one. He laughs wrong, he said, like it hurts. Creature says our father laughed the same after the cave, a beat, deliberate, a card shown, after he quarreled with his employers, I mean at the end of the war, we're going to fix it. It just takes supper mostly, supper and nobody lying to him. Nobody lying to him, Dumbledore repeated softly. Yes. He looked at the boy for a moment with the whole church organ of his attention, every stop open, and the twins sat inside the sound of it with their walls frozen over and their faces 11 years old, and what he was looking for he did not find, and what he found he did not name. He set down the cup. Lord Black, your family has done the law of this country a service it will be a long time repaying. If ever the schooling of your heirs wants anything Hogwarts can supply early, my door stands open. Their schooling is provided for, said Arcturus, with the smile he kept for auditors, but the house thanks the school. They watched the carriage away down the valley afterward, the three of them at the window, and Arcturus said to the glass in the tone of a man annotating a contract, "That man came to see whether my grandchildren were being raised as anyone's weapons." A pause. He is not wrong to check, he is wrong to assume the armory would be his. Sirius came to Blackmore on the 1st of August, like a man walking into a house made of questions. He had refused St. Mungo's long-stay ward with a courtesy that had frightened the healers more than shouting would have, and he had stood in the entrance hall of the house his grandfather ruled, a house he had visited perhaps 5 times in childhood, and remembered as a cold museum of everything he'd run from, holding a paper bag that contained the whole of his possessions. A returned wand, a watch that had stopped, and the ministry's check which he had not cashed and for a year would not. What he found in the museum was 2 children waiting at the foot of the stairs, and neither of them said any of the things he had braced for. Cassiopeia said, "Your room faces the seaside of the moor. If you hate it you can have mine, it faces the orchard, but the orchard one hears the owls, and Creature says you sleep badly." Corvus said nothing at all, he just looked at him, gray eyes out of Regulus's face, out of his own face, out of the whole drowned gallery of family faces, and then crossed the hall and put his arms around Sirius's ruined ribs and held on, and Sirius Black stood in the museum with his paper bag being held onto until his knees quietly gave and he sat down on the 3rd stair and the arms came with him, and that was where Arcturus found the 3 of them some while later. His heir sitting on the stairs inside his grandchildren's double grip, shaking silently, marks on him where the paper bag had crumpled against his chest. "Creature," said Arcturus to the shadows which contained Creature, "supper on trays tonight, I think. The stairs will do. Supper on the stairs." In the annals of the House of Black there were coronations recorded in less detail than Creature's private account of that meal, because the old elf, who had hated Sirius with the full inherited force of Walburga's portrait ghost opinions, brought the trays and was met by a man who looked at him out of a wrecked gray face and said, "Creature, he talked about you at the end. Reg, in the letter he left me at Gringotts, did you know he left me a letter? They gave it to me yesterday with the wand. Half of it's about. He says if you ever read this, be kinder to Creature than we were taught to be. He knew things, our Reg, he knew things it took me 9 years in the dark to learn." And Creature set down the tray with great care and stood with his ears flat and then went and fetched, unasked, the treacle tart which was the highest sacrament of his liturgy, and the 2 great wounded halves of Regulus Black's legacy declared over it without a word of terms their truce. The healing was not a montage. The twins had both lived in a body that had been starved and locked up, one of them for 10 childhood years, and they knew better than any healer that the graph of it saws. There were good weeks, and then there was the morning Creature found every mirror in the east wing turned to the wall. There was laughter at dinner, real laughter, and then a night when a summer storm rolled its cold front over the moor and Sirius could not be persuaded that the sound of the sea and the wind was not the sea below the fortress, and sat in the kitchen until dawn with a candle while 2 children in dressing gowns sat with him, casually at 3 in the morning, on the excellently manufactured pretext that they had smelled Creature's bread proving and wanted the ends. He caught up to their strangeness by degrees, being a man with a strangeness of his own and therefore unhurried about other people's. But he was also the first person in either world who had known both of their kinds of ghosts, and one September evening in the orchard, watching Corvus throw a windfall apple for the enormous black dog to catch, because he had shown them Padfoot in the first week, to Cassiopeia's badly concealed delight, the dog trotted back, became a man sitting in the grass, and said without preamble, "You defend like oars, both of you. When Creature dropped the pan on Tuesday, you moved to put yourselves back to back. 10-year-olds don't do that. Reg's kids are not, Blacks are not, that's drilled, that's somebody's war living in your bodies, and I've been sitting in this beautiful house for a month trying to work out whose." He pulled a grass stem, put it between his teeth, looked at the 2 of them with the sunken eyes that were slowly resurfacing. "I'm not asking. I did 9 years for being convenient to blame. I don't put people in docks. I'm telling you what I see so you know you're seen. Whatever it is, whenever it wants saying, I've heard worse things than anything 2 children could possibly have to tell me. I've said worse things under a potion to full chamber." The twins looked at each other for a long moment, the wire between them humming with an entire debate, motion, objection, division bell, and Sirius watched the look with the grass stem stilled in his teeth, because he had grown up beside a wordless language himself once and knew one when he saw it. "Not yet," Corvus said at last. "Not because we don't trust you, because you're still rebuilding and it's heavy and he stopped and made himself finish the sentence with the truth in it. "We can't afford to hand it to someone and have it break them. We've done that before, once. It cost us everything we had at the time. Fair, said Sirius, who heard the shape of a whole graveyard in the sentence and did not dig in it. Then here's my counteroffer. I get strong, you get ready. And when you hand it over, whatever it weighs, he tipped his head back at the great gray house above them, 9 centuries planted on its hill, we'll have somewhere to put it down. It was that same autumn that he told them about James, and he told it to Corvus alone, not by design but because the evening arranged itself that way. Cassiopeia deep in the library with the codices, the fire lit early against the first frost, and Sirius with a photograph album the ministry had released from the Potter estate along with everything else 9 years of legal limbo had held, because the wills had named him and the audit had unfrozen the naming. That's him at 17. A laughing boy in the photograph, untidy black hair, glasses, arms slung around a younger Sirius, both of them mugging at the camera in the manner of the never-to-die. James Potter, best man I knew. His mum and dad took me in when I ran, did you know that? 16 years old with a trunk and a temper, and Charles Potter looked at me over the paper and said, well, the sorting was slow this year, and that was it, I lived there. Doria was your grandfather's cousin. So when I say the Potters were family, I mean it the way this house means it, in the blood and in the ledger both. He turned pages, wedding, Lily laughing under an arch of wands, a pram in a garden with a fat black dog guarding it, tongue out, ridiculous. I was his best man and I stood godfather to his boy and I got all 3 of them killed being clever. Don't, as Corvus's whole body had shifted, don't say it wasn't me. I've had the potion, remember, it was Peter's hand and my idea. There's a boy in a churchyard in Godric's Hollow who'd be your age. Harry, they called him. I'd have raised him if the winter had gone otherwise. I used to plan it in the cell when I could still hold a thought, teach him the bike, teach him the map, feed him nothing Lily would approve of. 9 years of a boy who never got to exist. He closed the album and laid his hand flat on it and the fire ticked. Then 2 children I'd never met dug me out of the dark with a court record, and I came to this house to convalesce among strangers, and the first thing the male one did was walk across the hall and hold on to my ribs like he'd been missing me for years. So here's what I think, and then we'll never be maudlin again, it's bad for creatures' nerves. I think the world took my godson and gave me you too, and I think somewhere in the arithmetic of that there's a mercy I don't deserve and intend to keep anyway. All right, the fire ticked. Corvus Black sat beside his father's brother, who was also, in a mathematics no living person could check, his own godfather, mourning him to his face, and out of everything in 2 lifetimes there was exactly one honest sentence available, and he used it. He'd have loved the bike, he said. He'd have loved the bike, Sirius agreed, wrecked and laughing, and reached over and dragged him in with one arm, and above them on the mantel Regulus's photograph watched the fire with its threshold-shy smile, half in, half out, 1 foot over some door forever, and kept the family counsel. Arcturus took his heir's oath from Corvus at Yule, in the tapestry room before witnesses, which is to say before Sirius, creature, and 900 years of thread. The ring of the heir apparent of the House of Black was white gold and black iron, raven-crested, and it had not been worn since Sirius had thrown it at Orion's feet in 1976, a fact of which everyone present was aware, and about which nobody said one word. The rite itself was older than the ring, older than the house, the old man's wand describing the circle, the words in the mongrel Norman Latin of the founding charter, blood, 1 drop, on the selvage of the tapestry, where 2 small silvered thumbprints already lay, though Arcturus did not know then what they were. Corvus Arcturus Black, the house asks, will you hold what is whole, mend what is broken, and keep the door? They had researched the rite, of course. Cassiopeia had found 3 transcriptions and a disputed 4th. In every version the response was 2 words, I will. Corvus stood in the candlelight with the ring cold in his palm and his father's brother at his shoulder, and his sister's eyes on him, storm-gray, steady, the only witness present who knew every grave this promise stood on, and he gave the response that was in none of the transcriptions and had been true since a night when he was 6 years old. We will. The tapestry lit, not the polite glimmer the codices called acknowledgement. It lit end to end, 900 years of names kindling gold like a city seen from altitude at dusk, and the great weave shivered once along its whole length with a sound like wings in a stone barn, and the ring in Corvus's palm went from cold to blood-warm in the time it took the light to travel. Sirius said quietly, Merlin, creature wept without noise. And Arcturus Black stood looking at the illuminated map of everything his long cold stewardship had kept alive, his face washed in the gold of it, and said, in a voice the twins had never heard him use, the voice of a man reading a ledger and finding it, against every expectation of his life, in credit, witnessed, and more than witnessed, the house consents. He turned to Sirius, and the gold light stood in the seams of both their faces. As it consented, I am now certain, some years before I asked. He died the following May, and he did it the way he had done everything, on schedule and order, with the paperwork completed. The healers gave the twins the word first, dragonpox late caught at his age, and the twins, who had between them watched more people die than the healers had, understood the sentence in it, and Arcturus watched them understand from his bed and said, none of that, I'm 89. I have buried everyone I was afraid of and reinstated everyone I wronged, saving one, and the one is a matter I am leaving in the family's hands, since the family has proven better at my job than I was. He had the great ledger brought up to the bedroom. In his last fortnight he took each of them through it alone, hours at a time, the living map of the house. Which debts were loyalties, which loyalties were debts, what the Wisengamot seats could and could not be spent on, the location and passwords of 4 properties that appeared on no register, what was in the sealed sub-vault, not gold, worse, read the inventory twice before you open anything with a lid. Sirius on the last evening, with the more light going long and bronze through the window, you will be Lord Black in days, I am aware of the joke, enjoy it on my behalf, I find I haven't the time. And then, when Sirius's laugh had cracked in the middle, I let them take you without asking one question. It is the entry in my ledger that does not balance, and it will not balance now. I do not ask you to forgive it. I ask you to outlive it, fill this house, spoil those children within the limits of sense. And when your godson's name is cleared, for I notice, Sirius, that you say the Potters the way I said your name for 9 years, when whatever it is that those two are so patiently building is built, be the man at the door of it. That is the whole of the job. I did it coldly. Do it warm and see if it goes better. He signed the last codicil at 9, took the potion for the pain at 10, and at some hour of the short May night the House of Black passed in its sleep from the hands that had held it through 2 wars into the hands of a man it had once burned off its own tapestry. And the tapestry at the moment of passage, quietly and of its own accord, regrew the name Sirius Orion Black in thread of new gold, with a small raven over it, and the burn mark closed around the name like earth around a transplanted root. They buried Arcturus in the family plot beside Melania on a morning of high, fast clouds. Half the Wisengamot came to the moor for it, feathers and furs among the heather, and the twins stood at the graveside and found that the loss had its own strange shape, not the tearing they had each known too well, but something with weight and grain, like a finished ledger closed. He had asked at the end whether they were his. The stone said black and the moor said nothing, and the 2 of them stood over the closed book of him in the wind, his, and stayed until the last feathered mourner had gone. The Hogwarts letters came on their 11th birthday, addressed in emerald ink to Blackmore House, the East Nursery, which made Sirius laugh. They always know it's indecent, and made the twins go very still over their breakfast, because no piece of parchment in 2 worlds had ever weighed so much. Mr. C. Black, Miss C. Black. Term begins September the 1st. Diagon Alley they did in state, deliberately. The new Lord Black, thin but upright, in midnight blue with the raven at his throat and the twin heirs at his flanks, and London parted for them like grass. The stairs had a different grammar than the ones Harry remembered. Nobody was checking his forehead. They were checking the ring on his hand, the cut of his sister's coat, the Wolfleen Godfa, the uncle, laughing over their heads at Fortescue-s, and the calculation in the adult faces was not is it really him but what will they become, and what will it cost or pay me, which was, both twins agreed, a much more honest kind of staring. Madame Malkin measured them for robes while Sirius sprawled in the waiting chair like a man practicing for a portrait, and a blond boy on the next stool, being pinned, informed the room that his father said the new Lord Black was soft on mudbloods, had said it at dinner actually, and Sirius, pleasantly, without opening his eyes. Your father owes my house 11,000 galleons, little cousin, secured against the Wiltshire Library, to give him my very best. The pins went on clicking. The blond boy did not speak again, and outside afterward Cassiopeia said, that was Draco, and Sirius said, that was Lucius, wearing a smaller suit. The boy might yet be somebody, Narcissa's in him too, and Narcissa was the cleverest of us after Andy. We'll see, and the twins exchanged, over their ice creams, the particular look of 2 generals updating a map. At Eolops, where they had gone in for a serviceable pair of post owls and nothing else, the day produced its one unscheduled event. The shop was a dim rustling cathedral of perches, and from the highest of them, before the bell over the door had finished its swing, a snowy owl dropped like a thrown snowball, ignored Sirius, ignored Cassiopeia, and landed on Corvus's shoulder with the finality of a seal going onto wax. She then bit his ear, not gently, in the manner of a personage who has been kept waiting at a station. Corvus stood extremely still. Above the white wings his eyes had gone to his sister S, and the wire between them carried something for which even their language had no economical word, so it sent the picture instead. A cage on a trunk, 1,000 letters, white wings over a hedge in Surrey, over a lake, over 7 years. That one's not for sale, technically, the owlkeeper said, apologetic. Won't be sold. 3 years she's turned down every buyer in the shop, bit a warlock from the Department of Mysteries so hard he needed regrowing. I'd have released her, only she won't be released either. She's been, the man searched for a respectable word, waiting, near as I can tell, for what Merlin knows. Sirius, watching his nephew's face do something complicated and settle, put his hand in his pocket and said, we'll pay whatever untechnical price makes it lawful. She's clearly concluded her business with the general public. She rode Corvus's shoulder out of the shop and all the rest of the day, and when Cassiopeia, deadpan over the ice creams, asked what he supposed he would call this owl he had so plainly never met before, he said, Hedwig, at once, without any decision occurring anywhere in him that he could detect, and the owl shifted her grip on his shoulder and made, low in her throat, the sound of a ledger balancing. Ollivanders they had saved for last. They had discussed it for a decade in the way of things too important to discuss often. What if the wands were different, what the wands being different would mean, whether who they had been was a fact of the soul or a fact of the story. The shop was exactly itself, dust and dim in the 1,000 narrow boxes, and the old wandmaker came out of the dark with his moon-pale eyes and looked at the two of them for a very long moment, longer than courtesy, longer than commerce. Curious, said Mr. Ollivander. I have been making wands for a great many years, and I find I have been expecting you both since Tuesday without being able to say why. Wands talk, you understand, not in words, in inclinations. Since Tuesday the shop has been, he moved a long hand, searching, lining. Cassiopeia came in 4 tries, vine wood, dragon heartstring 10 3/4 inches, and when it chose her the dust of the whole shop rose an inch off every shelf and hung spangled in the lamplight, and Ollivander said, ah, in the tone of a man having a theory confirmed and enlarged. For Corvus he wandered the stacks muttering, pulled boxes, rejected them himself half the time before Corvus could raise them. Then he stopped. He stood with his back to the room at the end of the farthest stack before a box he did not immediately touch. I made this wand's brother, he said, not turning, a long time ago. You, the brother, did great and terrible things in the war, and its master was never found, and the ministry keeps what remains of that file sealed even from me. This one has sat on my shelf for 50 years. Holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, nice and supple. It has declined every hand I ever offered it. I had concluded it was waiting for someone, and had further concluded, since the someone never came, that the someone had, so to speak, missed the appointment, died young, perhaps, before ever reaching my door. Wands do sometimes wait past hope. They are worse than we are about letting go. He turned and carried the box to the counter and opened it, and the shop went utterly still, dust and lamps and 10,000 sleeping wands, in the manner of a station platform when the train is heard at last down the line. Try it, said Ollivander softly. Humor an old man's 50-year question. Harry took up the holly wand. Warmth ran up his arm like the grip of a hand he knew. Red and gold came off the wand tip in a soft aurora that lit the shop to its rafters, caught in the floating dust, turned the whole dim room briefly into the inside of a struck bell, and in the light his sister was watching him with her fingers wrapped white around vine wood, and neither of them was breathing, and the question of a decade settled over them both with the sweetness of the answer, a fact of the soul. Some appointments are not missed, some are merely moved. Well, said Ollivander into the hush, there you are then, and would not take payment for the holly wand over Sirius's protest, saying only that a debt of patience had been discharged and the books were even. And he stood in his doorway watching the 3 of them away down the alley, the tall man and the 2 dark children with new wands and old eyes, until the crowd took them, and then he went in and turned his sign and sat for a long while among his leaning shelves. Whatever you 3 are walking toward, he said at last, to the shop, to the dust, to whatever listens inside 10,000 boxes, I am glad to have armed it. That night, the last but one of the summer, the twins sat on the orchard wall with the moor going violet behind them and the lit house before them. Sirius's gramophone sending something with saxophones out the open study window, Creature's shadow crossing the kitchen blind, the whole warm machinery of the only homeland either of them held citizenship in running. Slytherin, Cassiopeia said. It was not a question. The debate had run 2 years and closed months ago. The house our family built its name in. The house he'll recruit from twice. The house nobody ever stands in front of. If we're going to spend the next 7 years somewhere, we spend them holding the door nobody else will hold. The hat's going to argue. The hat argued with you last time and you won as an 11-year-old who'd read nothing. I've read everything and there are 2 of us. And there's the other appointment. He said it without weight, which was how they said the heavy things. 3rd floor corridor, right-hand side. This year, if the years still rhyme, the stone comes to the school and the turban comes to the defense post and the bait goes in the trap, and the trap is a school with 1,000 children in it, because that is how he plays when he has no chosen one to spend. He'll dangle the stone and watch what comes. Well, we know what comes. It drinks unicorns and it wears a man like a glove, and last time it took until June and a lot of luck. This time it doesn't get June. Cassiopeia drew her knees up on the wall, and the last light made her profile into one more raven on the Blackmore skyline. It doesn't get the school year, it doesn't get the unicorns, and above everything it does not get to be a secret, because the secret is the weapon, Harry. Think it through with me. A wraith in the back of a man's skull is a horror, but it's a small horror, it's one man's crime. What made him unstoppable last time was that for a whole year only a handful of people believed he was back, and the ministry spent that year shooting the messengers. So we don't play seeker with Quirrell in June. We play a different game entirely. We make Britain watch him be caught, publicly, provably, with horrors present and the prophet on the doorstep. Voldemort's survival stops being a madman's theory and becomes a matter of court record 4 years early, while he's still weak, while he's still a passenger in another man's head, and every hour of preparation the world gets is an hour he doesn't choose the timing of. Sirius on the Board of Governors by Christmas. Amelia owes the house a favor she's dying to pay, and Creature can go where house elves go, which is everywhere because nobody who matters has ever once looked down. There are two of us, Harry agreed, and the sentence held as it always held everything the plan was actually made of. And above them, between the orchard and the first of the stars, a pair of ravens went over the house in the last light, west to east, toward the school term, calling to each other in their black courteous language all the way across the sky. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The Serpent's Own King's Cross smelled of soot and pigeons in September, and the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 took them the same as it had always taken them, which was to say like a held breath. The Hogwarts Express stood in its cloud of steam being scarlet. Harry had wondered in the private hours what this moment would do to him, and the answer turned out to be everything quietly. The train that had carried him toward the only home his first life ever gave him now carried the second life's whole campaign, and both facts came in on the same whistle. Beside him, Cassiopeia had stopped walking. He gave her the time. She was reading the train like a difficult primary source, eyes going from the brass to the steam to the mob of owls and mothers, filing, shelving, and when she was done she said under the whistle, "It's smaller. We got bigger." "We got bigger," she agreed and put her chin up, and the platform turned to look at them, because the platform had been waiting too. The stairs traveled ahead of them like bow water. Lord Black's wards, the trial twins, the heirs who had dug their uncle out of Azkaban with a court record. The prophet had run a full page on the house's return in August, and the platform's attention had a spectrum to it that Harry catalogued as they walked: envy at the coats, arithmetic at the ring, and from a knot of older families something cooler and more careful, the watchfulness of people who had spent a decade assuming House Black was finished furniture, and now found it moving under its own power. Sirius walked them to the last carriage with Hedwig's cage held high like a lamp, entirely aware of his audience, entirely delighted by it. 12 years ago this station had watched him march through in chains for the connecting ministry flu, and there was nothing in his stride today that did not know it. At the carriage door he crouched to their level, which he did not need to do and did anyway, because it made the watching mothers melt and the watching lords recalculate. "Rules," he said. "Twice a week a creature starts appearing at your breakfast, and no one wants that. He'll criticize the sausages. If a teacher with a turban asks either of you anything beyond your homework, you are boring ordinary children with no opinions. And if anyone gives you real trouble," the grin went wolfish, "one register down, meant for them alone. Remember your blacks. We don't start feuds. We inherit them, audit them, and close them out at a profit. Off you go, hold the door for each other." The compartment filled the way they had quietly arranged for it to fill. Neville Longbottom came first, round-faced and clutching a toad, sent along by a grandmother who had decided after the trial that the Black heirs were the correct sort. He sat down apologizing for existing and was, within 10 minutes, unaccountably comfortable, because the girl twin asked him real questions about plants, and the boy twin caught Trevor twice without ever once making it a joke about Neville. Susan Bones arrived at the first stop of the corridor traffic, auburn plate in her aunt's level eyes. Bearing formal regards from Madame Bones and a bag of cauldron cakes, she shared out with the unfussy competence of a girl raised by a public servant. And Daphne Greengrass appeared in the doorway an hour in, cool as milk, flanked by a freckled girl called Tracy Davis, and said, "You won't remember me, Heir Black, but you caught my broom before the lake got it at my mother's garden party when we were 5. Mother says I'm to renew the acquaintance, and father says I'm to say nothing political. Tracy, sit down, they don't bite. Their uncle only does it on the full moon. That's a joke. My father made it. I'm told it's funny." "It's about 40% funny," Corvus said, and moved his sister's book to make room, and the compartment settled into the long green afternoon of the journey with a shape to it that neither twin had engineered so much as permitted. Longbottom, Bones, Greengrass, Davis. Old blood, new blood, neutral blood, and a toad. The beginnings of a court if you meant to build a court, the beginnings of a wall if you meant to build a wall. Draco Malfoy came last, of course, in the manner of comets and bad news, with Crabbe and Goyle for punctuation. He had been coached since Madame Malkin's, that was visible at once. The sneer had been sanded, and something more careful fitted over it. "Cousin," he said to Corvus correctly, and inclined his head the precise degree owed an air of senior line. "Cousins," amending it for Cassiopeia, who watched him with the interest she gave problematic footnotes. "Father says our houses have had differences, and that school is where the next generation mends them. He says blood should sit with blood." The compartment had gone quiet. Neville had shrunk half a size. And Harry, looking at the pointed pale face he had traded curses with across 2 decades of another history, felt the old reflexes present their usual invoice and declined this once to pay it, because 11 is 11, and this Draco had never stood on a tower or in a drawing room full of screaming, and the whole art of the second chance, they had agreed on the orchard wall, was refusing to bill children for their father's accounts. Blood's already sitting with blood, he said, easily nodding round the compartment. Longbottom's my cousin through Calidora. Bones and Black stood once together in grandfather's war. Greengrass is my cousin 4 ways if you run the chart back past 1800, which my sister has because she does that for fun. Everyone in this compartment is family if you draw the tree big enough, Malfoy. That's rather the point of trees. Sit down if you like, there's room by the toad. It was, all witnesses later agreed, the by the toad that did it. An air of senior line offering precedence terms that included a toad, unanswerable, unmockable, closing every door except the two he'd left open, sit as an equal or leave as a guest. Draco stood in the doorway for 4 seconds doing arithmetic his father had not coached, and then said, perhaps at school, with tolerable grace, and withdrew, and Cassiopeia turned a page of her book and murmured 40%, and Daphne Greengrass laughed her first real laugh in the presence of witnesses since infancy. The hat went onto Cassiopeia's head first, Black coming early in any alphabet, and stayed there 4.5 minutes. The hall timed it, halls always time it. What the hall could not hear was the conversation, and the conversation went, in the dark under the brim, approximately like this. Well, said the hat, and then nothing for a long moment, the way a reader goes silent on finding the letter folded inside the book. Well, I sat on this head once before, it says here. Except it says it in a hand I don't recognize, in a room this school has never had. You are going to have to help me with my filing, madam. I contain 1,000 years, and I have never once contained a contradiction. We're not a contradiction, she thought back politely. We're a correction, ha. The hat's laugh was dust and centuries. A correction, and it wants Slytherin this time, the mind that argued me to a standstill for Gryffindor once in a life it keeps behind better walls than the founder's own. I can see the shape of the plan from here, you know, just the shape, like furniture under sheets. You mean to stand in the Serpent House's doorway for 7 years so that what came for it last time finds it defended. Someone has to, nobody did before. 300 children were left to be recruited by their own common room, and the world called it their nature and washed its hands and got the war it deserved. She let the walls thin 1 calculated inch, let the old hat see 1 covered piece of furniture with the sheet drawn back, a common room under a lake, green light, first year's faces, and standing in front of them nobody. Never again, sort me where the fight is. The hat was quiet for a moment that stretched the hall's nerves audibly. You know, it said at last, I sing about this every year. Unity, the founders' regret, 4 houses, 1 school. 1,000 years, and the first mind that ever sat under me and made my own song into a battle plan is 11 years old and dead once already. I shan't tell, madam. What's said under the brim stays under the brim. It's the only law I have. But I'll ask you the founder's own question before I let you go, the one Salazar put to me with his own hands, for he made me too, you know, whatever the lions say. He asked when they come for the children, and they always come for the children who will stand in my house's door. We will, she thought, both directions. Whatever comes up out of that common room to menace the school meets us first, and whatever comes down from the school to write off those children as born lost meets us first too. That's the whole treaty. Sort me. Slytherin. Said the hat to the hall, and the hall made a sound like a struck tuning fork, and Cassiopeia Black walked to the green table through the noise with her chin up and her ears burning, and the Slytherin table, after 1 caught beat, rose to receive her the way old money receives a favorable verdict, quietly and all together. Corvus's sorting took 9 seconds. The hall assumed afterwards that the hat had simply seen the family name and followed the sister. What the hat actually said in the dark under the brim was, don't tell me, the other half of the correction. It rummaged, hit walls, rapped on them appreciatively like a builder approving masonry, and found the 1 door the twins kept unlocked for it and looked through and was silent for 2 of the 9 seconds. Then, you'd both have done well in my house, you know, either of you. All 4 of my houses would open every window for you, same as before. It's all here in the hand I don't recognize. But you didn't come to be schooled, did you? You came to hold a door, and there's the girl gone ahead to hold it alone. Not alone, Harry thought. That's the entire point of me. Then I'll waste neither of our time, said the hat, into the hall with what only the staff table was placed to hear as something very like satisfaction. Slytherin, he watched the staff table as he crossed to the green side. McGonagall's mouth had gone to a line with history in it, Blacks in Slytherin, the world turning back on its old rails after a strange decade. Quirrell applauded with everyone, damp, trembling, ordinary, and the reek of him. Garlic laid over something Swedish and wrong, reached further than any first-year's nose should have been able to say. And Dumbledore clapped twice slowly, watching the 2 of them settle side by side under Salazar's green, with the expression of a man who has watched a chess opening he does not know deploy itself on his own board, and Snape, beside him, watched too, black-eyed, unreadable, a man seeing his dead friend's face and his dead tormentor's blood arrive at his table wearing 1 child. Bets are being taken, Cassiopeia murmured, buttering bread, on which of them summons us first. Snape, tonight. Dumbledore checks his traps weekly, not daily. It was Snape that night, and it was not what either of them had braced for. He kept them back when the prefects took the rest up, the dungeon common room with its green windows full of lake light and passing shadows of fish, and he stood before the cold grate with his hands behind his back for a moment, and then said in the low voice that could scour cauldrons, "I taught your father." They waited. In 2 lifetimes of Severus Snape, Harry had never once heard this register, careful and paying out words like a man lowering something breakable on a rope. He sat where you sat tonight. He was quick, quiet, and desperate to be approved of by exactly the wrong people, and when he finally worked out what they were, he was in too deep to walk out the front door, so he went out the back. The black eyes moved from one to the other. I have spent 10 years assuming no one but I ever worked out that he turned. Then 2 children reopen a closed decade with a records request, and their first act at this school is to colonize its most dangerous table with Longbottoms and Boneses before the soup arrives. I find my assumptions requiring maintenance. A pause, black-eyed. Regulus Black was the only friend of my school years who never once made me pay for the friendship. I do not extend credit as a rule. His children may consider a line opened. Do not, the register snapped shut like a ledger, mistake it for indulgence. In my classroom you are 2 dunderheads among many. In this house and to this head of it, your father's name is good. Get upstairs. They got upstairs. In the green dark of the dormitory corridor, Cassiopeia said softly, "That man begged for a life once in the other world and got told no. Lilies. And here he had no one even to beg for, nobody's patroness." 10 years of nothing. She looked back at the stair down to the common room. The dough has to have gone somewhere, Harry. People don't stop being able to love. It just goes underground and comes up strange. Ours came up as a family. His might yet come up as one if this house gives him back the version of himself that had a friend in it. Long project. We have 7 years, she said, and we know where the door is. They were careful students, which was harder than being brilliant ones. Cassiopeia solved the problem structurally. She was competitive out loud in exactly 2 subjects, charms and history, plausible for a girl raised in the Black Library and merely sound elsewhere, and she got her real work done in the castle's blind spots. Corvus took the other road, effortless in the practical, incurious in the theory, a boy with good hands and a short attention span, the sort of profile no one ever suspects of anything except a future in Quidditch. Flitwick adored them both within a fortnight. McGonagall took 3 weeks longer on principle, being constitutionally braced against charming blacks. She surrendered the day Corvus, transfiguring his match, produced the needle with a tiny raven struck on it like a hallmark, and turned it silently to show his sister first before the teacher every time. And Minerva McGonagall, who had spent her career reading what children's eyes went to, wrote a private letter to Augusta Longbottom that evening containing the sentence. Whatever those 2 were raised on, it was not what their grandmother's generation fed its heirs. The boy checks the girl's face as though it were the marking scheme, and the girl checks the boy's as though it were the clock. Flying lessons nearly ended a year of careful mediocrity in 9 airborne seconds. Madame Hooch's whistle, the ranked school brooms shivering on the lawn, up on my command, and Corvus, who had sworn to his sister on the walk down that he would wobble, kicked off into the September blue and simply forgot, the body's memory outvoting the plans, one long carving turn over the stands with the wind going through him like absolution. He remembered himself at the top of the arc and manufactured a creditable near fall coming down, but Hooch's hawk-yellow eyes had already seen what 9 seconds had to show, and by October the notice board carried over Professor Snape's economical signature, the shortest team announcement in house memory, "Seeker, see Black, see me." Cassiopeia's contribution to the family archive was a single dry annotation in that week's letter home. He lasted 11 days undercover. I've paid Creature the Galleon. Defense against the dark arts was taught by a stammer in a turban, and they sat through it twice a week with their walls up to the weather line. They had debated in August whether the shadow at the back of Quirrell's skull could taste minds across a classroom, and had resolved to assume yes, and the assumption cost them. Occlumency under observation is stonework in a gale. It must not merely hold, it must look like sky. Twice a week for an hour they were 2 ordinary children with ordinary thoughts arranged in the shop window, boredom, a crushed 2 rows over, invented, curated, rotated weekly, while the true inventory sat behind the false wall breathing quietly, and the thing under the turban stood at the front of the room smelling of garlic and preserved rot and taught them badly about vampires. The reek was the confirmation the plan had waited on. The years still rhymed, bait, trap, turban. What the years had not supplied this time was a lonely girl in a bathroom, and Harry noticed the absence the way you notice a missing stair on Halloween morning at breakfast when the smell of pumpkin hit the hall and the date walked up his spine on cold feet. No Hermione crying in the bathroom this year. She was seated at his elbow, buttering toast, 12 kinds of armed. The troll would still come. The diversion was structural, nothing to do with any particular child. It would come through the dungeon's entrance, and the dungeons were now, in this run of the years, full of his house. "Tonight at the feast," he said quietly into his goblet, When Quirrell runs in, Snape will go for the third floor. The prefects will be ordered to walk Slytherin back toward the dungeons, toward the troll, because the school's emergency plans were written by people who forgot where our door is. I sent the letter to Susan's aunt on Tuesday, Cassiopeia said to her toast. Concerned first year, troubling rumors of unsecured creature transport in the school's supply contracts, CC'd to the board. Amelia will have filed it where she files my letters, a beat. In the drawer marked oddly prescient. When it came on the old schedule, the doors banging wide mid-feast, the turban-wailing troll in the dungeons, the theatrical faint. In the eruption that followed, 2 Slytherin first years did small, unnoticeable things with total calm. Corvus caught the sleeve of Gemma Farley, prefect, before the house had even formed up, and said, with wide, worried child's eyes, "The dungeons is where it is. Shouldn't we go to the Great Hall's antechamber instead? It's closer and it locks." A suggestion so evidently sensible that Farley adopted it as her own on the spot, and was commended for initiative afterward by 3 separate professors. And Cassiopeia in the crush walked backward into Quirrell's line as he rose from his faint, trod on his robe hem, turned to apologize with her whole earnest face, and cost him 11 seconds and his clean angle on the third-floor corridor stairs, which was 3 seconds more than Snape needed to be up them first. Whole-legged this time, no dog bite, no limp for a certain shadow to notice in the weeks after and draw conclusions from. The troll was cornered by staff in the dungeon corridor at 9 minutes past 9, having damaged a quantity of stonework and no children whatsoever. The prophet, tipped by a Board of Governors member who happened to be dining in Hogsmeade, ran mountain troll loose at Hogwarts. How? Across page 1 with a sidebar sourced to a letter in a DMLE file asking pointed questions about supply contracts, and the board, at Governor Black's cheerful insistence, voted 9-3 for an independent review of castle security, the reviewers to have flu access to the headmaster's office and a standing warrant to walk the wards. "He'll know it's aimed," Sirius wrote under the family cipher in a letter ostensibly about Quidditch. "He won't know at what, nor will the other one." That's the beauty of aiming at everything. It's indistinguishable from diligence. Dumbledore watched the review teams walk his corridors with unfailing courtesy and eyes that had stopped twinkling at governors' meetings. Sirius reported, somewhere around the second unannounced inspection of the third floor, at which the reviewers had found and minuted a Cerberus, a locked trapdoor, and a series of chambered defenses that the school's insurers, copied in by some helpful clerk, described in their own minute as an attractive nuisance as defined in the Goblin liability conventions. Whatever it is intended to attract, the phrase was Cassiopeia's, laundered through 3 intermediaries. She had it framed in miniature inside her trunk lid. Christmas restored Andromeda, and it was the tapestry's own doing in the end as much as anyone's. Sirius had been circling the subject since summer, in the way of a man picking at a lock he was afraid to find rusted shut. His favorite cousin, cast off for marrying a Muggle-born, 20 years of silence, a daughter at the Auror Academy he had never met. It was Cassiopeia who ended the circling, at the Yule planning over the long kitchen table, by the simple expedient of laying the guest list flat and writing Andromeda TONKS at the top of it in ink, and then looking up at the lord of the house with her grandmother's exact stillroom face and saying, "You're the head of the family. The burn was somebody else's temper. The invitation is yours." And the tapestry has been growing gold thread toward her name for a year. I've watched it. The cloth has already voted Sirius. It's only waiting on the Lord to catch up with the curtains. The Tonkses came on Christmas Eve in a flurry of sleet and awkwardness that lasted, by Creature's clock, 11 minutes, which was how long it took Nymphadora Tonks 19 to trip over the umbrella stand, turn her hair traffic cone orange with mortification, and be caught mid-stumble by a 12-year-old boy moving before anyone saw him start, at which she said, "Cheers, littlest cousin." Cool reflexes. Watcher and the ice of 20 years, being only ever 11 minutes thick, went through entirely and drowned nobody. Andromeda and Sirius did the actual mending in the tapestry room after supper alone for 2 hours, and no record of it exists, save that when they came down her eyes were wrecked and his voice was. And the next morning, Christmas before gifts, the whole strange household walked up together, Blacks by blood, Blacks by marriage, a Muggle-born healer's husband who kept looking around him like a man in a cathedral that had once refused him at the door. And they watched the lord of the house set his wand to the scorch mark that had been Andromeda Black and speak the old Norman Latin. And the tapestry, which had voted a year ago, regrew her name in thread of gold so promptly that it was visibly waiting, and then ran a fine bright runner sideways to add Ted TONKSM, and downward to add a daughter whose name on the cloth read, to her incandescent delight, simply DORA. "House rules," Sirius said gravely to his goddaughter's protest. "The cloth records the truth, take it up with 9 centuries." Ted Tonks stood a long time in front of the wall of woven names, his own among them now, a dentist's son, gold-threaded into the most ancient house in Britain, and the twins stood one at each of his elbows and did not tell him and would never tell him that his surname sat in both their chests like a second pulse, that in another world's arithmetic a dentist's daughter had been the whole treasury of a war. He looked down at the two of them looking up at the cloth. You'd think it would feel colder, he said. A wall that spent 20 years pretending my wife didn't exist, but I don't know the word, it feels like it's been embarrassed. It has been, said Cassiopeia. It's a ledger that was made to lie, and it hates lying. Everything in this family that was ever cruel was a lie told to the cloth, Mr. Tonks. We're going to spend our lives making it tell the truth, and the cloth is going to spend our lives helping. Ted Tonks was quiet for a moment. You're 12, he said, in the tone of a man checking his own arithmetic. It's a very old 12, said Sirius from across the room, with his arm around Andromeda. We've had it looked at, and the room laughed, and the cloth glowed, and Creature brought up the mulled wine early because some occasions outrank schedules, and outside the tall windows the sleet turned, with the theatrical timing the more reserved for its own family, to clean widowing snow. 3 days after Christmas, an owl none of them knew brought a card none of them expected. Heavy cream stock, a wreath of silver holly, season's regards to the lord and heirs of my father's house, from Narcissa Malfoy, née Black, signed by her alone, no husband's name anywhere on it, which in the grammar of their world was not an omission but a sentence. Sirius read it twice and set it on the mantel with a snort that did not entirely land as contempt. Sissy always could say more with a blank space than Lucius says with a speech. Cassiopeia retrieved the card later and studied the blank space for a long while, and then put it away in the deed box where she kept things that would one day be load-bearing, and wrote in her ledger of the family under N, the door is not locked, it is only heavy. The door holding, which had been a treaty made in the dark under a hat's brim, became visible school fact one wet evening in February, and it took 4 minutes. The victim was a first-year called Miles Harper, half-blood Quidditch mad, whose mother's maiden name had been deemed insufficiently anything by a knot of fifth-years led by one Adrian Selwyn, and the venue was the long green common room after supper, and the method was the old dungeon method. Not violence, nothing a prefect need report, just a boy's essay held out of reach and read aloud in a mincing voice while the room decided, page by page, whether to laugh. The room's decision was the whole point. The room was the trap Salazar's house had been left to be. Corvus and Cassiopeia put their books down at the same moment, which people who saw it described afterward with the same helpless phrase, like one creature standing up in 2 places and crossed the room, and did nothing dramatic whatsoever. Corvus sat down next to Harper. Cassiopeia held out her hand to Selwyn for the essay, and the common room, which knew by February exactly whose family had unseated a minister by owl post, watched the 5th-year prefect candidate look into a second-year's storm-gray eyes and hand her another boy's homework like a wand surrendered at a duel's end. Comma splice in the second paragraph, she said, giving it to Harper. Otherwise sound, you're better than he is at charms, which is the part he minds. And then to Selwyn in a carrying voice pleasantly, with the ancient rules audible under it like bedrock under turf. My house does not eat its own young, Selwyn. It never needed to. It was taught to by people who found a school full of ambitious children easier to harvest frightened. That harvest is cancelled. Pass it along. It passed along. Nothing about it reached any professor, which was correct dungeon form, and everything about it reached everyone, which was the design. And by Easter the youngest Slytherins had begun doing their homework in a loose ring around wherever the twins sat, not summoned, never dismissed, the way small boats raft to the hull that broke the weather. And Severus Snape, patrolling his kingdom with his black eyes open, logged the new arrangement of his house for several weeks and said nothing to anyone, except that in March, without explanation, he awarded Slytherin 10 points, reason recorded in the ledger as housekeeping. The trap for Quirinus Quirrell was sprung on the last Thursday of April, and the school never knew how many hands had built it, because the building had all been done in the open, disguised as diligence. The Independent Security Review had, by March, minuted 3 times that the third-floor installation constituted bait without a tripwire, and formally recommended, in language Cassiopeia had spent a weekend making sound like an insurance clause, that the school key its interior alarm wards to the trapdoor and grant the DMLE a standing rapid response authorization, so that whatever the attractive nuisance eventually attracted would be attracted on a legal footing. The board voted it through. Dumbledore, cornered between his own stated concern for student safety and a paper trail of impeccable procedure, signed, and the twins, reading Sirius's ciphered account, understood that the old man had signed knowing something was aimed, still not knowing what, and had chosen in character to let the aim reveal itself. He wanted to see what came too. They were, in a sense, neither party acknowledged, running the same trap from opposite ends, and only one of them knew it. What the year's rhyme supplied was the timing. The Stone's defenses were a faculty confidence. The ward's new tripwire was a board confidence. Quirrell held the first and not the second. And so on the last Thursday of April, with Dumbledore decoyed to London by a Wisengamot summons that Amelia Bones had, at Lord Black's suggestion, declined to make cancelable, A man in a turban walked a harp into the third-floor corridor at 1 in the morning, played the Cerberus to sleep, opened the trapdoor, and broke, without knowing it, a thread of ward magic that rang simultaneously in the deputy headmistress's chambers, the DMLE duty office, and, by way of a clause nobody remembered inserting, the wardstone of Blackmore House. The response was 17 Aurors because Amelia Bones did not believe in sufficiency. They took the corridor, the harp, and the sleeping dog's room. They found the trapdoor standing open and followed procedure which the review had written for them. Hold the aperture, flood the chambers, apprehend at the bottleneck. Quirrell was taken at the potion's riddle, wandless by Flitwick's own chamber design, boxed between 7 shield charms, and it should have ended there, cleanly, administratively, a disgraced teacher and a burglary charge. Then the prisoner's body stood wrong. All witnesses agreed on the phrase, stood like a coat being put on from the inside, and a second voice came out of him, high, cold, disdaining the stammer it had worn all year like a costume, and the 17 Aurors of the response detail, none of whom had been told what this might be, because who could have told them, heard it say, "Fools, you hold the hand, you will never hold me," and watched the turban char away from the back of the skull, and saw. Rita Skeeter had been in Hogsmeade since Tuesday, on retainer, briefed by an anonymous letter to expect a security incident at the school before term's end. The photograph that ran across the whole of page 1 on Friday morning, under the headline "He is not dead," was taken from the corridor mouth at the moment the wraith tore itself free of Quirinus Quirrell's collapsing body. A smoke of screaming gray-green, a face in the smoke that 300,000 readers recognized from a decade of nightmares, streaming up through the stone of a school with its mouth open. Quirrell did not survive his tenant's departure. The 17 Aurors all did, which Amelia Bones noted in her report, was directly attributable to the response protocols urged upon the school by the independent review, and the Wisengamot, reading that sentence, understood it as she meant it. Someone had seen this coming down the road before it arrived, and the state had better find out how to be that someone institutionally forever. Fudge's government did not survive the summer. It was not the wraith alone. It was the archive of the winter audits, the prophet asking daily who had been paid what to believe a bodiless death in 1981, the sense, curated by a dozen quiet dinners at the Black Town House, that an entire political generation had made itself comfortable inside a convenient lie. The Wisengamot's confidence vote fell in July. Amelia Bones was sworn as Minister for Magic in August with a mandate spelled out on every front page. He is not dead, so be ready, and among her first acts was the creation of a standing office with a budget and a warrant whose remit was a single question, publicly funded at last, 11 years early. By what means does a dead man survive, and how are those means unmade? They read the announcement at the Blackmore breakfast table, and Cassiopeia put the paper down and was quiet for a while, looking out at the moor, at the summer running silver through the ling. "Last time," she said, "we did this part alone, 3 children in a tent. I remember the tent, an entire department, Harry, with a warrant." She folded the paper with the care she gave sacred texts. "We just taught the world to hunt him. Whatever else we get wrong, that's done, and it can't be undone. It exists because we existed, twice." Dumbledore summoned Corvus alone on the last Monday of term, which was itself a move. Separate the pair, weigh the halves. The office was as remembered, the instruments, the perches, fox drowsing gold and scarlet, and the old man behind the desk poured tea and let the silence do its opening work, and Corvus, 12 years old, sat in it comfortably, being made of older silences than the room was. "Quirinus Quirrell," Dumbledore said at last, "is dead. The creature that killed him, for I watched the memories of 17 Aurors, and what left that body killed it as surely as any curse, is the same creature I have privately believed for 11 years to be undestroyed. I find myself in the novel position, Mr. Black, of having been publicly vindicated in my darkest opinion and wholly outmaneuvered in its handling, and I have spent some weeks establishing to my own satisfaction that every plank of the platform on which this year's events performed themselves was cut and laid by your family's timber. The review, the tripwire clause, the uncancelable summons, even, I suspect, the journalist. It was beautifully done, and I do not say that as flattery, for it has also cost me things I valued. The blue eyes were level, and there was no twinkle in them at all now, and this, the twins had agreed long ago, was when he was most worth listening to. I would like to know what the game is and who taught 2 children to play it. And I ask because the board we now share has a piece on it that eats the careless, and I have buried enough of the careless to fill a wing of this school. May I ask something first, sir? You may even receive an answer. The stone, was it real?" The question landed. A white eyebrow acknowledged the hit. Because if it was, then a 500-year-old couple agreed to stake their actual deaths as bait in a school or weren't asked. And if it wasn't real, then everything in that corridor was theater with a Cerberus in it, and the only thing the theater could ever actually catch was whichever children wandered into it, and it nearly did catch children, sir, in another. He chose the word with visible care and spent it like a coin he'd been saving. Arrangement of luck, it might have been first years down that trapdoor in June instead of Aurors in April. You ask who taught us the game. Watching the last board taught us, sir. We were raised on the winter of '81, on what happens when good men decide the ends are large enough to spend other people's children quietly. Our uncle was one of the coins, so the game, since you ask, is nobody in this family is ever anyone's coin again. It isn't aimed at you, it's just aimed wherever the minting happens. The office was very quiet. Fawkes had opened one eye, gold, unblinking, and was looking not at Corvus but at Dumbledore. The stone was real, the old man said at last. It has since returned to its owners with my recommendation, which they have declined, that it be unmade. You may score that exchange as you see fit. He took off the half-moon spectacles and polished them and looked older without them, looked for a moment like what he also was, a man of 110 who had buried 2 generations of students. I am going to say something now that I expect you to report faithfully to your sister, since I have concluded that saying anything to one of you is a form of publication. I do not know what you are. I have 3 theories, each less probable than the last, and I decline to test any of them by force, because the testing would make an enemy of the only other party at this table who appears to understand what is actually on the board. But here an old man's one credential. I have been the person on whom everything depended, and I am here to tell you it is a corrosive office. Child, it eats the holder, it ate me young, and I have governed from inside the hollow it left ever since. Whatever you carry and however capably you carry it, do not let it carve you into the last resort. Build the world that doesn't need you. You have made a better start on it in 1 year than I made in 50. Corvus stood. At the door, hand on the brass, he turned, because the room deserved one true sentence at parting, and the man, culpable, weary, sincere to the bottom and wrong at angles all the way down, deserved it too. We're not building a world that doesn't need us, sir, he said. We're building one that gets to love us without needing us. There's a difference. Our whole family died learning it. Good summer, headmaster. Fawkes sang one note as the door closed, a sound like gold given a voice, and Albus Dumbledore sat alone with his cold tea for a long while, revolving 3 impossible theories, and did not notice for several minutes that the note had loosened, very slightly, the oldest knot behind his ribs, the one tied in a parlor in Godric's Hollow in 1899, which no phoenix had sung at since. The express took them home through the long green evening. Susan had her aunt's official all-post smile perfected. Neville was carrying with terrified pride a mimbulous cutting from Professor Sprout personally. Daphne and Tracy had claimed the window seats by right of conquest. And somewhere past York, with the compartment drowsing and the moor beginning to gather itself outside the glass, Cassiopeia's head found its way to her brother's shoulder, 12 years old, guard fully down after 10 months of walls, and Harry sat very still so as not to disturb the one piece of the plan that had never once needed planning, and watched their kingdom come up the window, heather and stone and weather, and thought, 1 year down. One wraith flushed into the open, one ministry remade, one family regrown by a name. He kept the tally the whole slow way north, and every line of it ended in the same entry, the way the ledger of him always ended and always would, her asleep on his shoulder. Home, coming up the glass, everything else was strategy. This was the country it defended. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The Hollow Crown. They told Sirius the truth on the first clear night of the summer holidays, on the roof of the North Tower, because some conversations need the sky as a witness and an exit. They had planned the telling for 2 years, and in the event, used none of the plan. Sirius came up the ladder with 3 bottles of butterbeer and a blanket over his shoulder, expecting stars and Quidditch talk, and Corvus, watching his uncle settle against the parapet with the ease that 2 years of suppers had rebuilt over the ruin, heard himself say with no preamble at all, "You said when we handed it over there'd be somewhere to put it down." Sirius went still in the whole body listening. He had. "I did. It's heavy. I've carried Azkaban." He set the bottles down and gave them the sunken gray eyes, silver now at the temples, steady as bedrock. "Weigh me." So they weighed him. They started with the arch because the arch was the door of it, a chamber in the Department of Mysteries, a curtain that breathed, a battle over a prophecy that in this world had never been spoken, and 2 people falling through, hand in hand, 15 and 16 years old, in June of a year that would never now happen. They gave him the shape of the first world in long, steady courses, the way masons hand stone. A boy in a cupboard with his name on a letter, a school, a stone, a diary, a rat in Sirius's face at the rat, a tournament, a graveyard, a cold voice in a ministry atrium, a curtain. And then the gray place and the attention like a house considering them, old blood, doors open both ways, and waking with the wrong-sized hands on the last day of July, 1980, behind the wards of Blackmore. Sirius did not speak for the length of the telling, which took the moon a hand's width up the sky. When it was done, he sat with his elbows on his knees and his head down for a while, and the 2 of them let him because they knew from inside what it was to have a world rearranged at speed. "The boy in the churchyard," he said at last to the roof slates, "Godric's Hollow. When I told you about James and the bike and the boy who never got to exist, you said he'd have loved the bike." He looked up. "I was talking to him the whole time. I've been living with him 2 years. You've been living with both of us," Harry said. That's the part that matters, and it's the part that's hardest to say, so I'm going to say it slowly. I was him, I'm not now, I'm what he grew into, plus 6 years of being Regulus's son, your nephew, her brother. You didn't get the godson back, Sirius. Nobody gets anybody back, we learned that in front of a mirror once. What you got is what I got, family, on the second try, under different names. I'd have loved the bike. I did love the bike in a world where you got out of Azkaban a different way and flew me off a roof on it. Both things are true, we're asking you to hold both. Sirius Black held both. They watched him do it, the way they had watched him relearn, laughing, visibly at cost, refusing help. Then he reached over and took Cassiopeia's hand gently, turned it palm up and looked at it, the small ink-stained 13-year-old hand that had written the record's request that opened his cell. Muggle-born, he said. In the other run of things, dentist's daughter from Crawley, brightest witch of her age, you said the professors called her. They did, she was, and this age S2, Merlin help it. He folded her fingers closed, a jeweler returning something valuable to its case, and the wolfish grin came up through the wreckage of his composure like the moon through fast cloud. You realize what you've done, the pair of you. You've made me the only man alive whose brother's children are also his best friend's son and the girl who outthought the ministry at 10. The tapestry's going to need a footnote. Creature is going to need a lie down. The grin faltered and what was under it was bare and entire. Thank you for telling me. I know what it costs. I've watched you two carry it since you were knee-high, back to back at every drop pan, and I told you once I'd heard worse than anything two children could say. I was wrong. This is worse and better than anything I imagined in that beautiful house all these months, and I am going to help you finish it if it takes the rest of the name. It might, Cassiopeia said quietly. That's the next part of the conversation. They had the next part till 2 in the morning, the anchors, 5 made, 1 worn, 1 yet unmade. She laid it out on the slates in chalk, the ledger of a monster's soul, and Sirius, pureblood raised, war raised, read the word when she wrote it and said it once, flatly, Horcrux, and then, grandfather's sealed sub-vault, not gold, worse, read the inventory twice, the old man knew the theory. Every old family knows the theory, she said. That's rather the point we keep making to each other, Sirius. He's not an original, he's just the first one vulgar enough to do it 5 times. The books that taught him are on shelves like ours, which is why the destroying can't just be private revenge. Some of it has to end in daylight in a courtroom in doctrine, so the next orphan with a library card finds the cure cataloged next to the disease. She dusted chalk from her hands, but privately first, locket we hold, diaries in Wiltshire. Diadems in the castle, cup S in a vault we can reach by law if we're clever, ring is under a floor in Little Hangleton and it stays there longest, it's a pause the length of a held breath, defended, and the defense is aimed at exactly the 2 of us, so we go last and we go together. And the snake S not chosen yet. Sirius looked at the chalk marks, the neat death arithmetic on his ancestral slates, and up at the 2 children, and the thing he said next became, in the family's private history, the founding of the War Council. Right, house rules for hunting, nobody goes alone, nobody goes uninformed, and nobody, a finger at each of them, does anything heroic on school property without a signed permission slip from your uncle. I've read the syllabus of your first childhood. This one's going to be conducted with adult supervision, Merlin's teeth. I never thought I'd hear myself, I sound like Mooney. The name landed in the middle of the roof and sat there, glowing. Speaking of, Harry said carefully, 3rd year needs a defense professor and you need your other brother back. Sirius went very quiet. He never wrote after the trial. He wrote 11 letters, said Cassiopeia, who had made it her business to know. They're in a drawer in Yorkshire, unsent. Remus Lupin has spent 11 years being sorry in advance for existing. You of all people know the shape of that cell. Send Hedwig, she doesn't take no. The War Council's first campaign was fought over a tea table, and the weapon was a blank space. Narcissa Malfoy received Lord Black's invitation in the 2nd week of July, worded with archival correctness. The head of her father's house requesting the pleasure, family matters, the town house, 4 o'clock. She came alone, which the wording had made possible without making necessary, and the twins, watching from the landing as she gave Creature her gloves, understood why the card at Christmas had been load-bearing. Bellatrix's sister, Andromeda's sister, the same bones arranged to a different conclusion, a woman who had spent 20 years being the blank space in her own life. Sirius did the opening honors and then by design was called away by estate matters, leaving the heirs to pour because what followed had to be sayable, and things are sayable to children that are war to say to lords. Aunt Narcissa, Cassiopeia said when the cups were dealt with, we're going to ask you for something and we want to price it honestly before we ask because you were raised in the same rooms we were and you'll price it yourself anyway. The house is calling in the Malfoy debts, all of them. Grandfather's ledger has 11,000 galleons secured on the Wiltshire Library, and the marriage settlement has clauses Lucius has been in breach of since 1981. We've had Tibbet and Craik certify the breaches. It's not a bluff, you can take the file home. Called all at once, it ruins him. That's not the ask. That's the wall behind the ask, and we're sorry for it, but we're black, so we built it before we came to tea. Narcissa Malfoy set down her cup without a click, and the ask. There's a book in your husband's keeping, Harry said. Black cover, small, 50 years old with a name in it, T.M. Riddle. It came to him from his old master for safekeeping, and Lucius has never opened it because he was told not to, and he's a coward, forgive me, a survivor in exactly the way that made him obey. We want it, debts against the book, all of them marked settled, the library saved, the settlement breaches sealed in the family archive where no solicitor will ever read them. One book, you will tell me what the book is. It's the thing that would have been found in your husband's house, Cassiopeia said, on the day the new ministry finally came with a warrant, and it would not have gone to trial as his master's property aunt, it would have gone as his. Bones is minister now. The winter audits taught her office to dig, the pronoun placed with care, taught her office to dig. The book is a conviction lying in a drawer, and it is also worse than that, worse than you want to know, and the only offer of this kind that will ever be made is being made now at this table by family with tea. The clock dealt its measures. Narcissa looked from one twin to the other, the pale eyes doing bloodline arithmetic of their own, and what she said at last was not about the book at all. Draco writes home about you, did you know? A full year of letters. My cousin holds the house door, he wrote. No one buys anyone at that table, one sits where one likes. He thinks he keeps his admiration hidden. He is 14 ways his father's son, and that is one of them. She drew on her gloves, decision executed with the same economy as everything else about her. Lucius will discover the debts called and settled in the same afternoon, and he will not need to know the consideration. He has grown careless with what he leaves in drawers. Have your solicitors ready Thursday. At the door, gloved, she turned, and for a moment the resemblance to Andromeda was a physical event in the hallway. The Christmas card, you understood it. The door is not locked, Cassiopeia said. It is only heavy. See that it stays on its hinges, said Narcissa Black, under all those years of Malfoy, whatever my husband does to test it, and went down the steps to the waiting carriage like a queen leaving a parley she had, by her own count, one which, both sides being Blacks, was also the other side's count exactly. The diary came over on Thursday, wrapped in green silk, via solicitors, exchange so dry it generated dust. That night in the warded vestry, they let one drop of ink-black malice whisper against Cassiopeia's shields. 50 years of preserved boy monster testing the walls with its charm. Hello, who's there? You write, I'll listen, I'm so good at listening. And then they shut it in the Rowan casket beside the locket, and the two soul fragments lay in the lead-line dark together. And if they spoke to each other, in whatever tense the maimed dead use, the runes did not permit report of it. Remus Lupin came to Blackmore on the last Sunday of August, and he came the way he did everything, apologizing to the gravel for walking on it. Hedwig had, as predicted, declined to take no. She had reportedly sat on his kitchen table in a Yorkshire Dales cottage the size of a stamp and stared at him through 2 written refusals until he tore both up. What got out of the trap at the gate was a mild, gray-flecked man in a coat with careful elbows, 33 going on 70, and Sirius went down the steps at a speed that abandoned all his lordly choreography, and the two of them stood gripping forearms in the drive for a long time, not saying any of it, the last 2 marauders counting their dead in each other's faces. You never came, Sirius said finally. 2 years, Moony. You had a family. Remus said it without self-pity, a man stating a schedule. New lord, new heirs, the house rising. The last thing that picture needed was, he gestured at himself, the coat, the scars, the whole apologetic institution of him. And it was at this point that the picture's 2 heirs came out onto the steps, and Remus Lupin looked up at the children who had unraveled a decade of injustice with a record's request, and they looked down at the man who had taught one of them to drive off 100 Dementors with a memory of a family he didn't have yet, and Corvus said, We need a defense professor who's actually met the dark arts. Our uncle needs his other brother, and the moon is a scheduling problem, not a character reference. The wolf's bane comes by contract with a potioneer in Hogsmeade. Grandfather's ledger prices it at less than we spend on owl treats. You're taking the post, Professor. The board approved you Tuesday. The board can't have, I haven't applied. Governor Black moved the appointment, said Cassiopeia. And the seconder, you'll enjoy this, was Madame Longbottom, who informed the objectors that she had read your file and would entertain their concerns in writing. On the day any of their sons produced an order of Merlin citation for holding the Brockdale Bridge alone for 6 minutes. There were no letters. Come in, creature est on a treacle tart, and he becomes unbearable if it goes cold. He came in. He stayed in the end 11 years, though that summer he signed for 1. And at Hogwarts that autumn the 3rd years of every house discovered, with the shock of the chronically short-changed, what the subject was actually for, taught by a man who treated the dark arts not as a forbidden glamour nor a bureaucratic syllabus, but as weather that killed the unprepared, and defense marks across the school rose that year like the tide coming in. The diadem they took at Hallowe'en of 3rd year, because the castle was at feast and the 7th floor was empty, and because Remus Lupin, defense professor, marking essays in his office, had agreed, against every misgiving of a careful life, to be their unrecorded adult supervision, on the sole grounds Sirius had put to him in September. They will go regardless, Moony. The only variable we control is whether anyone stands at the door. The room of requirement gave Harry the room of hidden things on the third pass, as it always had, and walking into it was walking into the castle's own memory, the cathedral of the discarded, Alps of chairs and cauldrons and shame, 10 centuries of hidden evidence, and the smell, dust, and old varnish, and the faint sweetness of rot that he knew now in his sleep. They went down the aisles by the map Cassiopeia had rebuilt from a dead world's recollection, past the vanishing cabinet with its cracked twin song, past the stone warlock's bust, to the spot where a tarnished tiara sat on a wig stand like a duchess at a jumble sale, its beyond measure worked into metal that hummed at 10 feet like a struck tooth. "Talk to me," Cassiopeia said, as they cast the containment lattice they had drilled all summer. "It's going to try the minute the field touches it. Keep your voice in my ears, it's trying now." The diadem did not use words at this range, it used wanting. It found the seams of you and poured. For him it poured competence, every race lost by a half-second, every person who had died a corridor away. You could be fast enough, finally, where the wit's that measure. He named it aloud, monotone, diffusing it by inventory, and heard his sister doing the same beside him, hers pouring knowing, the last library, every answer, the crack in the wanting being that both of them had stood in a graveyard pricing exactly these purchases and watched the buyer's face come apart. "It's offering me the reflexes to have saved Cedric. Yours. The footnote that would have saved everyone. It's rather beneath her, honestly. Rowena built better than this parasite decorates." The lattice closed silver blue, and the hum went out of the air like a tooth stopping. In the sudden clean silence, the tiara was only a tarnished thing on a stand, and Cassiopeia looked at it down the aisle of the castle's hoarded shame and said, with unexpected quiet, "Second cleverest woman in her age, they say, whoever they were. And her own diadem ends up a coat hook for a soul splinter because she had one daughter and lost her badly. Everything he ever touched, Harry, it's all family gone wrong. The locket's a brother dead in a cave. The diary's an orphan telling himself his life story until it bit. The cup's a dead woman's kindness pawned. He's not building an empire of dark objects. He's taxidermying a family he never had." They carried it out in a warded satchel, past a suit of armor, down the marble stair, and delivered it to a defense office where Remus Lupin sat pretending to mark essays with a map open on the desk that showed, in faded ink older than any of tonight's lawful arrangements, 2 dots named Black moving safely home toward the dungeons an hour later. And if the professor noticed that the map, which he and its other surviving author had spent a sentimental evening repairing, had all year insisted on rendering those 2 particular dots in a slightly different ink than every other student in the school, an ink the parchment seemed to have mixed on its own initiative, he mentioned it only once to Sirius at Christmas, and Sirius looked at the 2 dots for a long time and said, "Padfoot and Prongs would have called it a misprint," and Mooney said, "Padfoot and Prongs never once in 7 years saw this parchment be wrong, and they left it there, 2 middle-aged marauders electing, in the tradition of wise dogs everywhere, not to dig in the garden they'd been told to leave. Growing up happened anyway. That was the strangest gift of the second chance, and they never stopped cataloging it. The war ledger filled in the vestry and the tower, and in between, unscheduled, life kept insisting on being lived. Corvus caught the snitch against Gryffindor in a rainstorm at 90 feet, and woke the old red and gold ache doing it, cheered by a green stand wearing his name on banners. Cassiopeia founded, with Daphne and Susan and a rotating conscript audience, an interhouse study circle that was 1/3 scholarship, 1/3 intelligence network, and 1/3 in Tracy Davis's official minutes, ambush pastry. Neville's Mimbulus flourished. Neville's boggart one gray November class was no longer his grandmother's disappointment but a hospital door closing, and it was Corvus who stayed behind after, not to comfort him but to tell him flatly, one heir to another, that his parents had held a door for 19 minutes against the worst this island ever produced, and that doors evidently ran in the blood, and Neville Longbottom walked out of that classroom half an inch taller and stayed there. Pettigrew escaped Azkaban in the spring of their 3rd year. The Prophet ran it under a headline with 3 exclamation marks. The Ministry ran it under a review board. The cell was intact, the wards unbreached. The prisoner, guards testified, had been eating poorly for months, wasting. The healers had noted it and prescribed potions he did not drink. Nobody in the review board's report used the word animagus because nobody on the review board knew, the trial testimony having been heard in closed session and sealed under the same old reflex of tidiness, and the twins, reading between the lines at the Slytherin breakfast table, felt the rime of the years turn under them like a ship's plate shifting. A rat, thin to nothing, through bars built for men. Somewhere in an Albanian forest a wraith hung in the dark like smoke over a cold fire, and its most faithful coward was crossing Europe toward it on bleeding paws. Faster, was all Cassiopeia said, and the ledger heard her. The Yule of 4th year brought the Ministry's victory gala, Bones's government making theater of its new vigilance, and the heirs of House Black were required ornaments. They were 14. Something had begun happening that year that the household courteously declined to notice aloud. Doors held a half-second longer, a hand at a shoulder in passing. the wordless wire between them acquiring, in idle moments, whole slow conversations that were not about logistics at all. At the gala, under 3,000 floating candles, the orchestra played the Selkie Waltz, and Sirius, resplendent and satanic in dress robes, materialized beside them and said, "Heirs dance, house rule. I've just invented it and I outrank you both." So they danced. They had danced once before, at a wedding of the world that never happened, 13 and 14 and elbows everywhere. 14 and 14 went otherwise. The waltz is a machine for making two people one moving decision. They were, it developed, catastrophically good at it, having spent 8 years being one moving decision in every other arena. And the floor cleared a little around them the way it does when a room notices, and the room noticed a great deal. And the Prophets Society page noticed in print, with a photograph, the last HEIRS, in which the Black twins turned and turned in dress grays, her hand in his eyes nowhere else, two profiles cut from the same coin. In which weekly's columnist wrote a paragraph of arch speculation about pureblood custom and childhood betrothals that made Andromeda snort tea, and made both twins go quietly and completely still at the breakfast table. It was Daphne in the dormitory, brushing out her hair with lethal calm, who put the school's whole season of whispering into one sentence and handed it over like a blade, hilt first. They can't decide, whether you're brother and sister who act like a married couple or a married couple doing an impression of brother and sister, and it drives them all mad, and you're not going to explain, are you, because there isn't a word for it. "There's a word," Cassiopeia said to the mirror before she could audit herself. "Go on, us." She said it and heard it land and declined every amendment. The rest of the language can catch up when it likes. On the train home, Harry watched the Moor come up the glass, and the wire between them ran one of its slow, unworded conversations the whole grey length of Yorkshire, and what travelled on it in the pictures that were their oldest grammar was a dais, a curtain, a hand reaching, an orchard wall at dusk, a waltz turning, and at the end from her side, deliberate as a seal pressed into wax, the fortress word itself, us, filed where they filed the things that were true early and would be spoken late. 14, said the household calendar. There will be years, said a still-room voice in both their memories, and you will use them. They were content, being patient people, raised twice to let every clock in the house agree. The drills for the chamber ran the whole of that spring's Easter holiday, on the west lawn under state privacy wards, and they entered family legend chiefly because of the garden hose. Cassiopeia had storyboarded the operation on 40 feet of butcher's paper, sightline geometry, mirror angles, gaze cones shaded in red pencil, 3 fallback plans lettered like appendices. What the paper could not supply was a basilisk, and it was Creature, unbidden, who solved the casting problem by appearing on the lawn with the stableyard hose charmed rigid, 60 feet of it, reared up like a cobra with 2 lampiello lanterns lashed on for eyes, hissing, when he worked the nozzle in a manner he had personally rehearsed. He took the role with total gravity and gave, all 5 witnesses agreed, a monstrous and committed performance, ambushing the mirror line from the shrubbery, feinting at Sirius out of the sun, and once memorably running Remus Lupin fully into the ornamental pond, after which he allowed himself the only review he ever gave of his own work. The wolf professor is dead and Creature is 60 feet long. They drilled until the choreography survived every sabotage Snape could invent, and Snape invented with relish. Mirrors fogged without warning, rooster cage jammed, wands called out of the drill by a bark casualty. "You're blind, Miss Black, your brother is down, the hose is behind you, proceed," and proceed she did, and proceed he did over and over until the plan stopped being a plan and became a reflex with 5 bodies. On the last evening, watching the twins run the blind variant faultless, back to back, calling angles to each other in their clipped private shorthand, Severus Snape delivered himself of the nearest thing to a compliment in his recorded corpus. "They drill like men who have buried the people who didn't," he said to Sirius quietly, not knowing how precisely he had put his finger on the whole of it, and Sirius, who knew exactly, said nothing at all and topped up his glass. The Chamber of Secrets they opened in June of 4th year, when the school had emptied for the summer, and the Board of Governors had approved, at Governor Black's urging, a plumbing survey of the second-floor west stack, contractors, access strictly controlled, deputy headmistress notified, all parchment work immaculate, and all of it, from foundation to signature, a beautiful lie. The party that stood in Myrtle Warren's bathroom at 6 in the morning was 5. The twins, Sirius, Remus, and on one condition that had brooked no negotiation, the condition being told everything or nobody goes below this floor, Severus Snape, carrying a case of instruments and the expression of a man who had spent 3 days rearranging his understanding of the universe and resent it every hour. The telling had been Sirius's motion, seconded by Remus, carried against the twins' abstention. Snape's the only combat potioneer in Britain, and he's ours, and it's time. So Snape knew what the staff table had never known, and had listened to the whole impossible ledger in Sirius's study with his arms folded, and had said at the end of it exactly one thing in the direction of the twins, in the voice he otherwise reserved for perfect antidotes. Regulus's son goes down to finish Regulus's war. I will be present, the rest of your metaphysics can await my convenience. Open, Harry said to the tap, and the word came out in the other language. It came out. That had been the question they could not test in advance, whether the tongue was the scars or the soul, and the snake-etched tap heard the soul, and the sink ground open on its dark, and 5 wands lit as one. The descent, the bones, the shed skin like a cathedral's molted nave, and then the long hall of pillars and the stone face of Salazar rising out of the black water at its end. They worked the plan like a drill they had run 40 times because they had run it 40 times, on the lawn at Blackmore, with Creature playing the basilisk by means of a charmed garden hose. Position, Snape and Remus at the flanks with the mirrors, great silvered shields on tripods angled, Sirius at point with the cage, the twins center, one voice, one wand pair. The cage held 7 roosters, dosed lightly asleep by Snape's own hand, and the whole apparatus of it, the twins had insisted through everyone's incredulity, was the entire battle. No duels, no swords, no luck. You do not fight 1,000 years of serpent. You end it with a farmyard. Speak to me, blood of my speaker, Harry called down the hall in the language like ice sliding, and the stone mouth opened, and what came out of the dark and the water was memory made flesh, 60 feet of ancient green murder, and every human spine in the chamber did what spines do. Mirrors, he said, one word, other tongue. The basilisk's gaze swept and met only silvered glass at every angle, its own lamp-yellow ruin reflected harmless. It reared, confounded, tasting air that stank of dog and wolf and man, and laced under everything, Snape's aerosolized confusion draft, 3 days brewing, rising off the wet stone in a fog it had no precedent for. Now, said Cassiopeia, and Sirius kicked the cage open, and 7 roosters woke at dawn's exact temperature under Remus's charmed light and crowed. The sound was small and ridiculous and absolute. The great serpent convulsed as though the noise were a blade the length of the hall. The second crow drove it thrashing against the pillars. On the third it went down, coil over ruinous coil, into the shallows beneath its maker's stone face and did not rise, and the echo of farmyard mourning rolled around the chamber of secrets and died away into the drip of 1,000 years. And Severus Snape said into the silence, with no inflection whatsoever, 10 points to Slytherin. And that was the moment all 5 later agreed that the War Council became a family. They harvested with respect because it had been a wonder once, Salazar's own familiar line, and its going wrong was one more entry in the ledger of things he had touched and taxidermied. Venom, sacks intact, into Snape's cold flasks, and for the work Sirius had brought up from the sealed sub-vault, read twice, the house's answer to the inventory's worst shelf. A dagger, goblin-forged, black-hilted, raven-pummeled, made in 1612 to settle a matter the ledger recorded only as concluded. Goblin steel takes in what makes it stronger. He drew it, dipped it to the guard in the venom of the last basilisk, held it there while the old metal drank, and named it aloud for the record in the cloth in the old tongue of the founding charter. Towgers, he said, always, family joke. It's coming home to the tapestry room wall, and it's coming down off it exactly once more for the snake that's left. The burning they did at the water's edge before Salazar's face, deliberately. Locket, diary, diadem laid in a triangle on the stone, and venom drawn into 3 lines by Snape's exact hand. The locket they opened first, one word of the other tongue, so it could be killed looking outward. It screamed in 2 voices they knew, offered in its last second every family either of them had ever lost, and took the fang line through both painted eyes. The diary died bleeding ink like a lung. The diadem went last and went strangely. No scream, only a long sigh and the whisper of a woman's voice in it under the boy monsters, so faint only twin ears bent close could parse it, and what it said was found, and then the blue stone cracked across and the hum went out of the world's oldest coat hook forever. 3 pillars of black smoke stood in the chamber air, bent, joined at the crowns, and sank. Somewhere over an Albanian ridgeline, a thing made of smoke and hunger convulsed around the sudden absence of 3/5 of itself, and screamed into the pines for an hour, and its faithful rat, curled at the roots with his silver-handed dreams, woke and did not know why he was weeping. In the chamber, Sirius Black looked around the dripping dark, at the dead wonder in the shallows, at the burned triangle on the stones, at Moony checking the children over with wand light, at Snape decanting catastrophe into labeled flasks, at his brother's impossible son and impossible daughter standing spine to spine out of habit older than their bodies, and pronounced the campaign's epitaph. Reg, he said to the water, to the stone face, to the ledger, we're winning. Dumbledore requested parley in the last week of term, and this time it was requested formally, Chief Warlock to the heirs of House Black, tea for 3 in the Tower office, and the pretense that saying anything to one was not publication to both had been retired on all sides. He knew, not the whole was unguessable, but they watched him lay his pieces out with the terrible tidiness of a man who had been arranging them for 4 years. The school's wards, he said, had recorded the second-floor survey party at 5 souls going down and 5 returning, which the contractor's manifest said too, and manifests did not interest him. What interested him was that the castle's oldest alarm, a bell of Salazar's own founding that had rung twice in 1,000 years, had rung a third time that morning once, and then, he said, stopped mid-toll as though satisfied. He had walked the second floor that evening and found the air changed, an oppression gone from the stones that had sat in them since his own boyhood, and he reminded them, a very old man who had made a long study of the school's weather. And in April his instruments, some of them, the ones tuned to a certain wavelength of soul magic he had been tracking since a screaming face fled a corridor 4 years ago, had registered in 1 hour of one morning 3 cessations. "I have spent 40 years," he said, "believing I was the only man in Britain who had counted the anchors. I arrived in the end at a number. This spring, persons unknown subtracted 3 from it in a morning, efficiently untraceably, and my instruments suggest in the correct killing order which took me a decade of theory to derive. So I will not insult either of us with my 3 theories, Mr. Black, Miss Black. I will state my conclusion. You are not children with a library. You are veterans with a map of what campaign fought where I cannot construct and have stopped trying. I ask 2 questions only, and I ask them as a man who will be dead before the work is done and wants the work done. How many remain, and what do you need?" The office ticked. Fawkes watched the twins. The twins on the wire held the shortest parliament of the age, carried without dissent. 2 remain, Cassiopeia said. "One is guarded in a way that will kill you, specifically you, Chief Warlock, if you go to it alone, and you know exactly which one I mean and exactly why it will work on you, so the price of our answer is your oath, on your wand and your sister's name, that you will not seek the ring without us." The blue eyes went wide, then old, then wet, then steady. The oath was sworn. The office's instruments recorded it. The other doesn't exist yet. It will be a living thing made in fear, close to the end. When it's made, we'll know where to look, because he'll keep it where he keeps his heart, which is nowhere, which is beside himself. As for what we need, she glanced at her brother, and the wire hummed, and she turned back and spent 4 years of stalemate in one sentence. "We need you to keep being what you are, sir, the great good man in the tower, the lightning rod. He fears you, the country trusts you, both facts buy us time. Just this once, be the lightning rod who tells us things. Version of you that dies least often." Albus Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment, and then he began helplessly to laugh, and the laugh had rust in it and then didn't, and Fawkes sang 2 notes to its finish like a fanfare for a surrender long overdue. "The version of me that dies least often," he repeated, wiping his eyes. 50 years of counselors, and it wanted a 14-year-old to prescribe me my own survival. Very well, partners then of a wary kind, I shall tell you things. He poured the tea, and over its steam, with the simple relief of a man setting down a stone he had carried alone past all sense, told them the first thing. His name was Tom. He was a boy in an orphanage that smelled of carbolic, and I met him when he was 11, and I have never told a living soul what I saw that day, and I am going to tell you now because somewhere in it I have always believed is the door he came through, and doors. The old eyes came up, blue and bottomless, and at last, allied, as persons wiser than I keep demonstrating, opened both ways. He told them about the wardrobe he had set alight, and the shoebox of trophies, the thimble and the mouth organ, small thefts kept like a dragon's first hoard. About I can make bad things happen to people who annoy me, said in the voice of a child reporting a talent, which it was. About the cave by the sea where 2 orphans went in and came out changed and silent, years before the same cave got a basin and a locket. He told it plainly in old teachers' case notes, and under the plainness they heard the 50-year wound. I saw the door standing open, and I watched him, and watching is not the same as standing in it. No one ever stood in it. The matron was afraid of him, the children were afraid of him, and I was 11 years into my own penance and mistook vigilance for care. By the time I understood the difference, the boy was a prefect charming half my colleagues, and the door was shut, and something else was wearing the doorway. You'll want to know why I tell you this, he said at the end, beyond the trade of it. It is because you 2 are the counterproof, and I have needed one for 50 years. The same country, the same kind of orphaning, the same cupboard, if I now read one of my 3 retired theories rightly. And on one side of the scale, Tom, and on the other, the 2 of you. And for half a century I believed the difference was some grace of temperament, some luck of the soul, and it let me sleep, because temperament is nobody's fault. It is not temperament. He looked at them over the ruin of the tea things, and delivered the finding like a man paying it out of his own ribs. It is that somebody stood in the door, for each of you. Even in the world you lost, someone stood there, a giant with an umbrella, a friend on a train, a family that owned a clock instead of money, and in this world an old cold man in his tapestry, and an elf with a locket, and always, always each other. Tom had a watcher, you had witnesses. That is the entire difference, and it is a policy difference, not a mystery, and I have wasted 50 years being sad about it when I could have been building doorkeepers. He stood and gathered his robes, and was for a moment neither the lightning rod nor the chessmaster, but the schoolteacher he had been before either. Miss Black, Mr. Black, the school's doors are yours, go and stand in them. I mean that as curriculum. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The debts of Albus Dumbledore. The gaunt shack crouched in its nettles above Little Hangleton like something the village had coughed up and declined to look at. and the four who came to it in the white mist of an October dawn came under an oath sworn on a wand in a sister's name. Dumbledore had honored the oath for 16 months, and the honoring, they understood by now, had been the hardest thing they had ever asked of anyone. They had watched it work on him through 5th year, the instruments in his office tuned to that one wavelength, the hunger in him rising every term like water behind a dam, an old man who knew where the resurrection stone lay in the earth and had promised 2 children not to go to it alone. He had kept the promise. He had also, Cassiopeia observed, aged around it, the way a tree ages around a nail. They went for the twins, Dumbledore and Severus Snape with his case of instruments and counteragents, because Snape's condition for everything now was presence. Sirius they had left, over his objections, holding the ward line at the lane with Remus. The arithmetic of the party had been Cassiopeia's, and it was not negotiable. No one whose face the ring could wear, that was the fear, and it proved exact. The curse on the box under the floorboards announced itself even through the shack's rot. A patient malice tuned, waiting, and Dumbledore knelt over the prized-up boards with his wand moving through diagnostics like a surgeon's hands, naming the layers for them in the flat instructional voice he had promised to use. Withering curse, keyed to skin. A compulsion woven under it, keyed to grief. The compulsion is the trigger, do you see? The curse does not need to catch your hand, it needs only to catch your wanting, and it was at the word wanting that his voice stopped instructing. The box was open. None of them had seen him open it. The ring sat in its nest of rotten velvet, gold shank, black stone, and the crack of dawn light through the shutter found the etched triangle and line in the stone's face. And Albus Dumbledore looked down at the hallow he had hunted since before any of their parents were born, and his hand, the ruin-to-be hand, the hand that in some other ledger had withered black from this exact minute, came off his wand and moved, slow as a sleepwalker, and his face was no longer 110 years old. It was 18, and it was looking at a girl of 14 laughing in a Godric's Hollow garden before any of it, before Gellert, before the cellar, before the 3 wands and the falling, and his lips were moving around a word that began with a professor, Harry said, and was not heard. On the wire, 1 syllable, now. They had drilled this too on butcher's paper in the vestry, the twins and Snape, the contingency they had never named in Dumbledore's hearing, because the naming would have wounded him, and the wounding would have changed nothing. Cassiopeia's shield charm took the old man's reaching hand, not violently, a cushion of air, a page interposed in a closing book. Snape's containment field dropped over box and ring together, glass screen humming. And Corvus stepped into the space between Albus Dumbledore and the thing on the floor, deliberately, bodily, a boy of 16 standing in a doorway, and said the sentence Cassiopeia had loaded him with against exactly this minute, because she had known, she had said quietly on the tower that when the moment came it would need to be his voice, the Seeker's voice, the one the old man had never once managed to categorize. Sir, tell us her name while you can still say it to the living. The shack was very quiet. Mist moved at the shutter. The 18-year-old face broke, and the 110-year-old one came back through it like weather, and Albus Dumbledore sat down on the rotten floor of the gaunt shack, all his height folding, and put his face in his unwithered hands and told them. Ariana. The whole of it, the Muggle boys and the broken sister, the father dead in Azkaban for vengeance, the mother dead of the sister's chaos, the brilliant sun chained to cottage and boiling with thwarted glory, the beautiful stranger over the garden wall that summer, and the plans, the greater good in 2 boys' letters, the quarrel, the 3 wands, the small body on the parlor floor, and no way ever in 90 years of unmatched power of knowing whose curse. Aberforth broke my nose at the funeral, he said, and I have been grateful to him for it every day since, for it is the only judgment in the whole affair I am certain was correctly aimed. I have told 2 living souls, he said at last to the floorboards. One is a portrait now, the other keeps goats and does not answer my letters. And I was reaching for that stone, knowing every layer of the curse on it, knowing I diagnosed it aloud to you not 4 minutes ago, because 90 years of knowing better has never once weighed as much as 1 minute of her voice. He looked up at the 2 of them, red-eyed ancients, stripped of every office. You knew not the details, the shape. You brought the exact counterweights, a shield for the hand, a wall for the body, and a question for the man, who taught you to disarm a grief. Grief taught us, Cassiopeia said. We're not going to trade you story for story today, sir. Ours is longer and the floor is cold, but we'll tell you what's on the other side of yours, because we've been to the other side and you've earned the report. She crouched to his level, 16 years old, and gave the greatest wizard of the age the intelligence briefing that mattered. The dead aren't waiting behind that stone, Professor. What waits behind that stone is your own wanting, wearing their faces. The dead are somewhere else entirely, and the somewhere else is kind. We can't prove it. We're the only 2 people alive who can almost prove it, and what we can testify is this. The door doesn't open backward. Not for you, not for us, not for him. It opens forward. Every anchor we burn is him learning that the hard way. Don't you spend 90 years, wisdom, learning it the same way on your knees in a shack. Snape destroyed the ring on the flagstone outside, 1 line of basilisk venom from a cold flask, exact as a signature, The scream of it went up with the crows off the hill and was gone. The stone, cracked but whole, its splinter of tenet burned out. Dumbledore lifted with a handkerchief and looked at for a long moment and then held out, flat-palmed, to the twins. "Spoils," he said, "to the victors of the engagement. I find I do not trust myself to own it," which is the first fully honest sentence I have said about a Hallow in a century. They took it. What they did with it that winter in the vestry, with the whole strange family standing witness, is recorded nowhere except in the persons present, and this account will honor the family's own restraint about it, save for 3 entries. That creature was brought forward first and given the stones one turning by unanimous vote, and that what stood in the candlelight for the space of 20 heartbeats wore its threshold-shy smile complete at last, both feet in one world as no memory of it had ever held it, and looked longest not at the elf, and not at the children with his face and his wife's eyes, but at his brother. And that of all the words said quietly in that room, the ones creature repeated afterward, polishing them as he had once polished a locket, were the last ones. Master Regulus said, "The sea kept nothing that mattered." Master Regulus said, "Well done, creature, well done, all of you. Finish it, and then, do you hear me, put the stone down and live." They put the stone down. It went into the sealed sub-vault, read twice, wrapped in Lyra's christening shawl, and the inventory entry in Sirius's hand reads, one door that opens backward, family policy, we don't. The Department of Mysteries came for them in February, and it came on parchment, which was the first mistake because parchment was Cassiopeia's home ground. The petition was beautiful in its way. They kept a framed copy later beside the insurance minute. In anomalous resonance of the Gateway Artifact 1, the Unspeakable's council informed the Wisengamot. The department had logged, over 6 years, 17 resonance events in Chamber 9, the first coinciding to the minute with the entry of 2 then minor persons into the Ministry atrium for the trial of S.O. Black, 1990, subsequent events correlating with each Ministry attendance of the same 2 persons since. That Artifact 1 predated the Ministry, the Wisengamot, and by some readings the wand itself, that it had never before resonated to a living signature, and that the department accordingly petitioned for a warrant of examination, the persons in question to be made available to the Office of Mysteries for assay. The word was assay, as though they were samples, for a period not exceeding 90 days. 90 days, said Sirius, white around the mouth, at the War Council that evening. They want to take my brother's children below the 9th level for a season and see what makes the death door sing. Over my body, and I want it minuted that I mean the phrase as logistics. It won't come to bodies, Cassiopeia said. She had the petition flat on the table, and she was reading it the way Ragnarok had taught her to read contracts, for the knife under the table. It'll come to charters. Here's their error, and it's fatal, and it's in the first line. They filed against Corvus Black and Cassiopeia Black, natural persons. But we're not natural persons at law, not entirely, not since the investiture. I'm heiress presumptive, and he's heir apparent of a most ancient and noble house. And the founding charter of the Wisengamot, the actual 1544 instrument. Grandfather made me recite the operative clause at 9 years old, says the mind, blood, and magic of the head, heir and heiress of a chartered house are the house's own franchise, inviolable to ministry process save upon attainder voted by the full body. It was written to stop exactly this. Tutorera Unspeakables wanted to vivisect the founding family's heirs for the secret of hereditary magics, and the houses made their charters conditional on never being samples. The clause has been invoked 4 times in as many centuries. It has never lost because it can't lose. The ministry's own legitimacy is downstream of the charters. If they void ours to get at us, they void the instrument they sit on. Snape from the fire, dry as slate, you are proposing to inform the Department of Mysteries that the mystery is none of their business. I'm proposing, said Cassiopeia, to inform them of it in Latin. The hearing filled the chamber to the gallery rails. The Unspeakable's counsel was good, urbane, reasonable, national interest arm in arm with scientific wonder. And for 40 minutes he built his tower, and then the heiress presumptive of the House of Black, 16 years old in formal grays, rose to respond by leave of the Lord her uncle, and took the tower down in 11 minutes with the 1544 charter, 3 precedents, and a closing paragraph that entered the culture the way such paragraphs do, the prophet printing it whole. Students reciting it at walls of other kinds for a generation. Learned counsel asks the chamber to weigh the house's privilege against the public's need to understand a door. The House answers, the public understanding of doors is not advanced by forcing them. My brother and I are subjects of this study only in the sense that the study proposes to happen to us, without consent, below the 9th level for a season at Wandpoint if we decline, and the last time this body allowed that logic against children of a chartered house it was 1544, and the House's answer then is the Charter Council now finds so inconvenient. The gateway resonates when we walk past it. Members of the Wisengamot, bells resonate when their note is struck. No one assays the passerby. The department is welcome to study its artifact until doctrine improves. It is welcome to written questions, which we may answer as a courtesy, being, unlike the petition before you, free people. What it may not have, while one stone of this chamber stands on its charters, is us. The House of Black has buried too many of its own behind that particular argument, the needs of the moment, the greatness of the good, the smallness of the person asked to be spent for it. Never again is not a sentiment, Chief Warlock. In this family it is a filing. The petition failed by 206 votes to 11. Dumbledore, presiding, entered the Chief Warlock's own vote against the department whose oversight was nominally his, with a single sentence of explanation that paid publicly the second of his debts. The chamber has heard counsel argue necessity. The chair has spent a long life learning what that argument costs the children it is aimed at, and how rarely the payer is the one who argued it. Croaker of the Unspeakables sought them out afterward in the marble hall, an old gray man with clever hands and no discernible malice, and said, "For the record, the written questions stand." And for the unrecorded record, the clever eyes went from one twin to the other unhurried. The gateway's resonance is a rising interval. 17 events, and each a fifth above the last. Whatever business you have with our door, it does not think the business is finished. Good day, Heir Black, heiress. And he was gone into the crowd, leaving the wire between them, carrying a single shared image, unbidden. A curtain breathing patient at the bottom of everything, keeping their luggage. The written questions arrived in March, 40 of them, drafted by committee, and it showed. The twins answered 11, declined 28 by charter, and to the 40th, which read, in the department's best attempt at guile, in your own words, what is the gateway? They returned over both signatures and the raven seal, a reply that Croaker, it was reliably reported, had framed for his office wall within the week. It is a door. Doors are for going through in one direction at the proper hour once. It has kept faith with every traveler it has ever taken, and it does not appreciate being knocked on. Extend it the courtesy you would extend any very old thing that has never once lied to you, and it will require no further study. Postscript: the interval is rising because the business is not finished. When the business is finished, you will find the chamber quiet. You are welcome. The school's answer to the gathering weather was built that same spring, and it was built with the headmaster's blessing and Professor Lupin's signature in the open on the timetable, which was the whole doctrine of it. They called it the doorkeeper's circle on the parchment and the circle everywhere else, an Interhouse Defense Society, 5th years and up, meeting Tuesdays in the old dueling hall, faculty supervisor R.J. Lupin, student conveners C. Black and C. Black. It was, on the surface, revision for defense examinations. Under the surface, and not far under, because the twins had learned from a world of secret armies exactly what secrecy costs, it was the thing Dumbledore had named in his tower, doorkeeping, as curriculum. Shield charms until they were boring, casualty drills until dragging a classmate behind cover was as unremarkable as passing a quill, the flu alarm protocol, the 4 sentences you say to a panicking room, practiced until they came out level. And woven through the wandwork, never preached, always practiced, the circle's single actual law, which Neville Longbottom of all the school was the one to put into words, and whose words went onto the wall of the dueling hall in gold paint the following autumn without any staff member ever admitting to the brush. Nobody stands alone in a door. That's the whole spell. They came from every house. That was the part the prophet never quite believed, and the school stopped noticing. Slytherin 5th years, shield training, Gryffindor 4th years, a Bones and a Greengrass running the triage drill, Draco Malfoy in his cool, unhurried way, teaching first-generation students the pureblood dueling forms their attackers would use, because he said, when someone finally asked him why, "My cousins hold the door open. One does something, standing in it." Susan Bones drilled like her aunt legislated, thoroughly and for keeps. And on the last Tuesday of term, Minerva McGonagall came down to the dueling hall unannounced, watched 40 minutes of mixed house shield rotations in silence from the back, and left one sentence with Remus at the door, which he reported to the War Council verbatim, because it was, they all agreed, the campaign's first captured standard. 11 years I have watched this school wait for someone to teach it courage as a subject. Kindly inform your conveners that Gryffindor Tower knows perfectly well where the idea of them keeps its heart, and has decided on the whole not to be jealous. The cup they took at midsummer, and it was the goblins in the end who made it almost stately. The approach had been 2 years of Cassiopeia's correspondence, conducted per Gringotts etiquette through the abacus Ragnarok had left her, each letter accompanying it like a passport. The bank's protocol office had never processed a blade friend before, and had finally created a category, which pleased them, goblins being collectors of unprecedented ledger events. The substance was this: the House of Black attested on its magic that the Lestrange primary vault held a wizard-made soul anchor, storage of which breached the Deep Vault Covenant of 1612, the same instrument, not coincidentally, under which a certain raven-pummeled dagger had been forged, Clause 9 of which declared soul magic stored in the bank's living rock to be hostile enchantment against the bank itself. The Lestranges being attainted lifers whose lease had been paid in blood money, the bank had never liked the smell of the covenant self-executed. Lease void, contents forfeit to inspection, hostile enchantment to be surrendered for destruction, and the House of Black as attesting party and covenant heir to witness. There was of course a price. Goblins do not do stately for free, and the price had been agreed the previous autumn in a contract 11 feet long. The carcass writes to the last basilisk of Salazar Slytherin, 60 feet of alchemically priceless wonder lying in a chamber only one living voice could open, harvested jointly, profits shared by a formula that made the bank's actuaries produce the goblin sound for weeping at beauty. Sharpax, Ragnarok's successor, had signed it with both hands, the high form, and had said to Cassiopeia over the wax, the old one told us before the end, "Blade friends bring the bank 3 things, work, war, and wonders." He instructed us to price the first 2 kindly for the sake of the third. This is the bank pricing kindly, do not expect it twice. So it was that Hufflepuff's cup came up from the dark of the earth in a warded goblin palanquin, borne by 4 armored guards to the chamber of forfeiture, a room of black basalt that existed, the bank confirmed serenely, on no plan of the bank ever filed with any ministry. And there, before witnesses human and goblin, with the twins' basilisk venom decanted by Snape into a crucible of the bank's own adamant, the last stolen kindness of Helga Hufflepuff was lowered, 2-handled, gleaming badger-graven, into the burning, and the scream that came off it shook dust from basalt and did not shake one goblin face, and Sharpax watched the black smoke pillar and sink with the satisfaction of an auditor watching a false entry struck through at last, and said, "The bank notes the covenant discharged," which is the goblin liturgy for something like grace. Foregone in daylight or lawful dark now of the 6 that had been made, locket, diary, diadem, ring, cup. Somewhere a wraith with a rat's hands to serve it had felt every one of the last 3 go, and the war council, walking out of Gringotts into the blazing ordinary noise of a Diagon Alley midsummer, did not need Croker's rising interval to tell them what came next. What remained to him now was 1 snake, 1 servant, and nothing left to lose by waiting. "He comes back this year," Harry said. "Before we're 17, he has to. Every month he waits we're stronger and he's less. It'll be the old ritual, it's the only road left him. Bone of the father, flesh of the servant, blood of the enemy." A beat. The alley roared its bright roar around them, children with ice creams, a new broom, and a window. He named us in the letter to the Lestranges the bank intercepted. "Thieves of my inheritance, enemy means us now, means me. Then we control the only variable he thinks is his," said Cassiopeia, and the summer light found the planes of her face and made her for a moment entirely her grandmother. "He needs your blood, Harry. He'll come for it or send for it, so we choose what it costs, we choose what it buys, and if we're better than we've ever been, we choose what it carries." Sirius stopped walking. "What it carries." "Blood taken by violence carries the taker's intent," she said. "That's the old doctrine, that's why the right wants an enemy's blood, unwilling, hating. But blood is the family's own magic, it's the tapestry's ink, Sirius, and the tapestry is on our side. I've been in the codices under the subvault since February. There's a right of the house older than the Gaunt's whole line, the founders used it on fostered children. Blood freely offered to the house's keeping, warded by the cloth itself. If Corvus's blood is already sworn into the weave when it's taken, then whatever body gets built with it is built on our foundation. Not control, nothing so kind, a flaw, a tithe, a thread in him that answers our loom. It might be worth nothing. It might, on the day everything is spent and counted, be worth exactly 1 opening." She looked at the 3 men of the council and then at her brother, and the wire hummed with the shape of it, the audacity, the cold loveliness, the price. "He wants to be reborn out of black blood. Let him, nothing borrowed from this house," and the old Grimmoor humor of 9 generations surfaced whole in the 16-year-old saying it, ever fails to come home. They swore the blood tithe at the September full of the tapestry room, all the house present, the right read from a codex that crumbled its margins as they turned it, and the attack, when it came at Yule, and it came because the enemy had also spent the year studying cleverly. Not Hogsmeade patrolled now like a border town, not the school. It came at the one seam in the family's armor that pride had kept from being plated. St. Mungo's, the Janus Thicky ward, the 4th Thursday of December, when, as the whole country knew from a decade of quiet prophet paragraphs, the Longbottom's son visited his parents for Christmas, and as rather fewer people knew, the Black twins had come with him every Christmas for 3 years because Alice Longbottom had progressed to a word or 2 now, and one of the words, learned as she learned everything now, by devotion, drop by drop, was Cassie. They took the ward with 6, greyback, both Carrows, 2 hired Macnair cousins, and unforgivably, wearing a Mediwich's lime green over the silver hand his master's gratitude had finally bought him, Peter Pettigrew. The Aurors on the door died last year's heroes, dropped by ambush before the alarm. The ward's patients were hostages by geometry alone, and the twins, 17 years old that summer, caught in dress clothes with their wands and holiday sleeves, did exactly what every drill since the garden hose had built them to do. They put Neville and his parents behind them, back to back in the aisle between the beds, and they held the door. The holding lasted 4 minutes, and the prophet's reconstruction, drawn from the memories of 11 witnesses, ran to 6 pages and made the duel at the Janus Thicky ward the most studied engagement since Grindelwald's fall. The heiress transfiguring the ward's iron bedsteads into a portcullis of thorn bars between the wounded and the wands, the heir taking Greyback out of the air mid-leap with a banishing charm measured to the ounce, into the one wall with no bed against it. The two of them rotating around each other in the aisle like a single instrument, shield and strike, her walls, his angles, no wasted syllable, while alarms woke floor by floor below them, and the 6 became 5, became 4. Amicus Caro on trial in February would say only, and the quote escaped the closed session because such quotes always do, "You don't understand, we had them 2 to 1, but it was never 6 against 2. It was 6 against one thing with 4 arms, and the thing had been fighting since before we were born. 4 minutes. Then the fireplaces went white with aura response and the raid broke, and in the breaking, with Tonks leading the flying squad through the flue and Greyback down and the Caros pinned, Pettigrew did the one competent thing of his miserable second career. He did not duel. He had never once dueled. He scurried, silver hand and lime green sleeves, through the overturned screens along the blind side of the portcullis, and what he wanted was not victory, it was a vial's worth. The cutting curse was small, precise, bought with all the practice of a coward who rehearses only exits, and it opened Corvus Black's forearm through his sleeve as Pettigrew went past him for the window, and the silver hand caught what it needed in a crystal phial, and the window took the rat shape out into the December dark 2 full seconds before Tonks's stunner unmade the sill. In the ringing aftermath, kneeling amid thorned iron with a healer already at his arm, Harry looked at the wound, and at his sister across the ward, and the wire between them carried, under the fury and the triage in Neville's white face, one cold, clean note of a bell struck at last after 15 months of waiting for it. Taken by violence, said her eyes across the wrecked ward, steady as winter, carrying everything we sowed. The aftermath sorted itself into its stations. Amelia Bones arrived personally within the hour, took one look at the thorn portcullis of transfigured bedsteads, still standing, still guarding. The healers had asked that it be left until the patient slept, and issued on the spot the order that put order details on every long-term ward in Britain and her own name on the overtime warrant. Greyback went to a cell built to hold what he was. The Caros went to trial and then to the deep levels. The 2 McNairs went to the mortuary lists, having discovered together the doctrinal error in apparating into a room Cassiopeia Black had had 90 seconds to prepare. And Neville Longbottom, who had spent the 4 minutes doing exactly what the circle had drilled into him, body between the wands and his parents' beds, shield charm held at an angle that took 2 curses meant for a man who could not move, stood afterward in the wreckage while his grandmother gripped his shoulder like a falcon gripping a glove, and looked down at his own steady hands with an expression the twins knew from the inside of 2 lifetimes. The discovery, come at last and come to stay, that the blood does hold. They came where the screaming was best, he said to Corvus quietly when the Aurors had taken his statement, like your aunt said they would, and the door held. We held it. He flexed the steady hands once, closed them. 5th Thursday running that Mum said Cassie. 1st Thursday anyone's ever tried to make her stop saying it. That's twice now this family of yours has stood in my family's door, and I want it minuted, that circle language. I know I'm using it on purpose. Whatever the last door of this war turns out to be, Longbottom stands in it with Black. My parents held 19 minutes alone. Imagine what we hold together. Voldemort rose again on the last night of the year in the graveyard at Little Hangleton, out of a cauldron fed with his father's bone, his servant's flesh, and the freely tithed, dearly warded, patiently poisoned blood of the heir apparent of the House of Black. He stood in his new flesh among the leaning stones, white as the year's last day, and flexed the new hands and found them good, and found also far down in the made blood something he could not name, not weakness. The body was strong, stronger than the old one. The rite had been performed faultlessly. The rat had even for once exceeded instruction. It was more like an acoustic, a faint answering quality in his own pulse, a sense, gone the instant he attended to it, of a very large quiet room somewhere listening politely to his heart. He put it to the strangeness of resurrection, having after all limited precedent to consult, and Lord Voldemort had in any case never once in 70 years pursued a question whose first answer flattered him. The blood of his enemy beat in him. He chose to hear it as conquest. 60 miles north, on 9 centuries of living weave, a fine gray thread lay athwart the gold, going nowhere without permission. Pettigrew he rewarded with continued existence, and remade in silver the hand the right had spent, and the silver hand is worth the record's pause, because every court of the coming year would hear of it. Brighter than metal has business being, strong past nature, and though its wearer did not know it yet, on loan. Gratitude, from what stood in that graveyard, was an instrument like everything else. It had made the gift already knowing every purpose to which a gift can be put, including the last one. At Blackmore, at the moment of the rising, Creature, keeping his Yule vigil among the candles of the tapestry room, watched the gray thread arrive on the cloth, fine as spider silk, running in off the selvage from the dark beyond the weave, and bared his old teeth at it, and went to wake the house. Dark Mark stood over the ruins of Azkaban's west wing by morning. His first act of jailbreak, Bellatrix and the Lestranges and 30 of the faithful decanted into the war. And over the ministry's own atrium by New Year's dusk, his second act of declaration, and the letter that arrived at Blackmore that night, addressed in a hand like fine wire to the thieves of the House of Black, was read aloud at the War Council by Sirius in a voice of studied boredom, and then filed at Cassiopeia's instruction. In the deed box of load-bearing things, it ran in whole, "You have unmade what was mine. I have remade myself of what is yours. Blood calls to blood, children. I will come to collect the rest of the debt in person." "Good," said Harry into the council's silence, 17 years old, his bandaged arm on the table like an entry in evidence. "Let him come owing. Everything he's ever touched, he's taxidermied family houses, his own name. He thinks he took a trophy from us. He's wearing a tithe. One snake left, one thread on our loom, sitting in his veins. The next time he stands in a room with this family, it will be the last room." He looked around the table, Sirius, Remus, Snape, Andromeda, Dora, the whole regrown tree, and last and always at his sister, and the plan's final page, blank for 11 years, began at that table that night to be written. The breakout brought Bellatrix home to the war, and Bellatrix brought the war home to the sisters. Narcissa came to Blackmore within the week, and this time not alone. Draco at her shoulder, 17 and white-faced and steadier than his color, and a single trunk which said everything before she did. Lucius had gone to his returned master within 2 days of the mark rising over Azkaban, gone at a run, debts and dignity abandoned, and his wife had watched him go from the top of the Wiltshire stairs and then written 2 letters, one to her husband's solicitors invoking clauses, one to the head of her father's house invoking nothing, asking in the hand that had once signed only a blank space whether the heavy door was still on its hinges. "He will come to the manor eventually," she said at the War Council's table, upright, unweeping, her son's hand under hers. "He held court there in the First War. He is sentimental in the way of things that cannot love, he reenacts. I have closed the house, dismissed the elves to the London property, and taken the liberty," she slid a folio across the table, "of an inventory. Wards, flue registrations, the cellars, the bolt holes Lucius believes secret. If my husband's master means to nest in my drawing room, the family may as well have the floor plan." Andromeda, across the table, had not taken her eyes from her sister since the door. 26 years stood between the two of them, a burned name and a married dentist and a whole history of chosen silences, and the War Council held its breath around the pair of them until Andromeda said, in the dry voice that was the sisters' shared inheritance, "You always did redecorate for guests, Sissy," and something old and load-bearing went back into place between them with an almost audible click. Bellatrix they spoke of only once that night at the end when the maps were rolled. It was Andromeda who said the name, flatly, a healer's wife pronouncing a diagnosis. "She won't come at the wards, she'll come at people. She goes where the screaming is best. It was true when she was 9 and the screaming was frogs, and Azkaban will not have improved her. Dora, Nymphadora, look at me. When it comes, you do not duel your aunt to prove anything. There is nothing in her to prove anything to. There hasn't been for 30 years. Tonks, pink-haired and suddenly very young at her mother's tone, looked to the twins, and the twins looked back with the flat gray steadiness of the only 2 people at the table who had seen Bellatrix Lestrange work at her craft once in a room of whispering glass, in a world nobody else at the table was owed the weight of, and Corvus said, "House rule for Bellatrix, everyone, same as basilisks, nobody duels her for honor. We end her by arrangement together on a day of our choosing, and we do not audition." He tapped the rolled maps once like a gavel. "She's not the war, she's the war's favorite noise. The war is a snake and a man made of theft, and both of them are running out of things to be made of. The tower roof, the last night of the Christmas holidays, was cold enough to make the stars ring. They had a blanket and the old telescope and no agenda, which was itself an event with a calendar entry's rarity now, and they sat shoulder to shoulder against the parapet where they had once weighed Sirius, and for a long time the only conversation was the wire's low idle hum, pictures traded lazily. Alice Longbottom saying Cassie unprompted on Boxing Day to the healer's recorded astonishment, Neville's face when his father's hand had closed once deliberately around his. Dora and her new trainee partner, Creature teaching Draco of all people to play gobstones at the Yule gathering Narcissa had attended alone again, the heavy door swinging wider by the year. 17, Hermione said at last to the stars in the voice she kept for the other ledger. "We're older now than we ever got to be." He turned that over. Every year of this life had been borrowed past the last one's balance, 16, and then the age she'd never reached, this July, the age he hadn't. 2 people living past their own deaths, in bodies the door had built them, in a family the plan had regrown, 1 snake and 1 monster from the end of the whole long errand. "When it's done," he said, not if, they had retired if in a bathroom with a troll in it decades ago. When it's done, what do you want? Not the house, not the war council. I've never once asked you straight in 2 lifetimes. It always felt like tempting something. She was quiet for a while. The cold made her breath visible, small silver ghosts going up between them and the winter stars. I want the library at Blackmore in October, she said. Rain on the long windows, nowhere to be. I want to teach someday, I think, doorkeeping, his word, curriculum and all. I want Creature to die old and smug and holding a treacle tart decades from now, and the tapestry so heavy with gold they'll need to reinforce the wall. I want, and here the wire went silent, wholly silent, because she had closed it deliberately, so that the next thing would arrive in words alone, spendable on the record. I want to stop being careful about the one sentence we've been careful about since we were 14. After, when it's finished, when we're standing in the same world with nothing hunting us, I am going to say it, Harry, the whole sentence, and you are going to say it back, and neither of us is going to pretend it's news. That's what I want, confirm the appointment. The stars rang. Below them the house held its 9 centuries of stone and all its sleeping family. Ahead of them, past the dark moor's edge, the last year of the errand waited with its teeth. Harry Black took his sister's hand, his oldest country, his second pulse since before either of their hearts had beaten, and pressed it once, the treaty grip, the grip the door itself had failed to break, and gave the appointment its seal. Booked, he said, after. The whole sentence, both of us, both of us. It was always going to be both of us, he said. The hat knew it before we did, and she laughed at last, the real one, the one perhaps 5 people alive had heard, and the sound of it went up between the parapets with the silver ghosts of their breath, up past the tower and the sleeping rooks, thin and bright and utterly unafraid, into the enormous listening winter, where anything at all might have heard it, and one thing, patient grey, at the bottom of a chamber in London. Keeping their luggage these 11 years undoubtedly did. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The last heirs, the war's first half-year, taught Britain what the last decade had built, and the lesson surprised everyone except the people who had built it. This was not the country of the First War. That country had learned of its monster gradually, denied him for years, and met him with an order of 40 brave amateurs and a ministry of hollow men. This one had watched him tear out of a teacher's skull on the front page 6 years ago, had elected its government on the promise of his return, had aura details drilled by protocols a records request had shamed into existence, had a generation of school leavers who thought shield rotations were a normal Tuesday, and a word for standing indoors and gold paint on a dueling hall wall. He came back expecting 1979, terror spreading through soft tissue. He found scar tissue organized. There was still burning. War is war, a village in the fens, the Montgomery family. The second Azkaban raid, beaten off at cost. Diagon Alley's dark fortnight in March ended when the shop wards, cross-linked that winter by a Gringotts brokered covenant nobody would confirm the drafters of, turned the whole street for one night into a single instrument that rang its attackers senseless. The prophet's casualty lists were real, and the black-bordered pages were real. But the tide never turned his way, and by midsummer the shape of the endgame was visible to both sides, and both sides' planners, who understood each other by now like old correspondents, arrived at the same square on the board by different arithmetic. The Wisengamot's midsummer session, gazetted for the 31st of July, at which, by petition of the Lord of the House, the twin heirs of the most ancient and noble House of Black, having attained their majority and passed their examinations with the highest marks recorded in a century, would be formally invested before the assembled chamber. Corvus Arcturus as heir apparent, with seat and voice, Cassiopeia Lyra as heiress and warden of the house's charter. He'll come, Cassiopeia said at the War Council's map table the night the Gazette notice ran. It was not a fear, it was the design. Read it as he'll read it. Everything he has left is theater. We've unmade everything else. The heirs who burned his anchors of age crowned in the state's own hall on his enemy's blood's birthday. He told us in writing, I will come to collect in person. He is sentimental in the way of things that cannot love, he reenacts. She looked up from the map around the table at the family. So we hold the ceremony. We hold it in the last room he'd choose if he thought for a century, and we make sure he doesn't think because every thread of his pride is pulling the same direction. We hold it at the ministry, and when he breaches it, and he will breach it, we give ground in exactly one direction down. Snape, who had spent 2 lifetimes, reputations on reading monsters, studied the map's lowest floor, the lifts, the black door, the round room, and at the heart of the 9th level in the department the family had once refused at Charterpoint, the sunken chamber where an arch older than the building breathed behind its curtain. You mean to fight him in the room with the door. We mean to finish him in the room with the door, Harry said. It's the only room in Britain that's ours by blood and his by nothing. Croker's cleared it. Officially the department is neutral. Unofficially he framed our postscript, and when I asked him for the chamber he said, and I quote, "The gateway has been waiting on your business for 12 years, Heir Black. The department merely requests observers' notes afterward." He set 2 raven markers on the 9th level, side by side. Everything above ground is the ministry's battle and Amelia's command. The circle's graduates hold the atrium doors with the Aurors. Sirius and the Ants have the appointment they've been promising Bellatrix. Nagini never leaves his shadow now, so she comes to us, which saves hunting. And the last room is family only. Him, the snake, and the House of Black, all debts called the same day, one floor apart. Sirius looked at the two raven markers on the 9th level for a long time. Lord Black at his own map table, silver-templed, whole these 8 years because 2 children had been unwilling to leave him in a cell, and what he finally said, he said to the whole table, in the voice he kept for oaths. 13 years ago a court potion made me say that Peter beat us all with one stroke, and the joke was the size of the war. Here's the size of the war now, the joke's coming to our party on our schedule through our door. Motion before the council, no debate required. When it's done, when it is finally actually done, the first toast is Regulus Arcturus Black, who started it alone in a cave with no hope of any of this. Seconded, said the whole strange, regrown tree together. The winter had already shown the country what the Circle's generation was made of at Hogsmeade in February, and the showing mattered to everything that followed, because it was the engagement that taught both sides the same lesson. 20 came against the village on a market Saturday, werewolves and second-rank masks, a terror raid of the old style, meant for screaming and a mark in the sky, and a country reminded to be afraid. What they found was a market town that had drilled its flu alarm protocol quarterly since the twins' 5th year. Shopkeepers whose wards cross-linked into the Gringotts Covenant at the first alarm note. And piling out of the 3 broomsticks and honeydukes in the post office within 90 seconds, not Aurors. The Aurors were 11 minutes out, but 24 Circle graduates home for the holidays and half the 7th year of Hogwarts on their Hogsmeade weekend, who folded into shield rotations between the raiders and the fleeing market crowd, as though the high street were the old dueling hall with weather. Susan Bones held the well square with a triage line behind her. Draco Malfoy and Neville Longbottom, a pairing the First War could not have written, held the Honeyduke's corner for 9 minutes back to back and were heard, witnesses insisted, bickering academically the entire time about shield angles. Nobody died on the defenders' side. 11 raiders were taken, and the report Amelia Bones read to the Wisengamot ended on the sentence the war was remembered by afterward, quoted, stitched onto banners, painted under the gold line on the dueling hall wall. They came to teach a village fear, and the village had done its homework. The twins fought that day too, having apparated in with the War Council's flying response 4 minutes after the first alarm, and the accounts of what the pair of them did to the raid's collapsing left flank passed into the folklore of a generation of schoolchildren. But when the prophet came asking, they gave it one quote jointly, and it was not about themselves. We weren't needed. Read that sentence again, slowly, Britain. It's the best one anybody's written in 20 years. The night before the ceremony, Blackmore held the quietest full house of its long memory. Every bed occupied, the whole regrown tree under the one roof at Sirius's unnegotiable insistence, and nobody sleeping much, and everybody pretending, for everybody else, to be asleep. Harry gave it up at 2 and went down to the kitchen and found Sirius already there, at the scrubbed old table with the teapot and 2 cups, the second cup set out and waiting, because 13 years in this family had taught everyone the family's schedules. They drank the tea. The kitchen fire kept its low counsel. Sirius, who could have said any of 100 things and had plainly spent an hour discarding them, said finally the right one. Reg would be 40. I keep doing the sums lately, can't stop. 40 and probably gray. We gray early when we bother, and standing where I'll stand tomorrow, watching his 2 get their seats. So I'll be doing it with his hands in my pockets if you follow me. Both of us are borrowing somebody tomorrow. He turned his cup a quarter turn. I know what the day's really for. I signed off the maps. I know where the lifts go. I know my children are walking 60 Death Eaters into a box and then walking themselves into the bottom of the world to face the thing that made the century what it was. And here's the whole of what I have as the man at the door of it, which your grandfather told me was the job. I have watched the 2 of you be inevitable since you were 10. Not safe. Never safe. I'm not a fool, and you'd hear the lie. Inevitable. Like weather coming over the moor, you can time it to the minute from the smell of the wind. Tomorrow night the weather's ours. Now drink your tea and go to bed, Air Black. You've a coronation and an apocalypse in the morning, and Creature will not have you yawning through either. Cassiopeia, for her part, was found at 3 by Narcissa in the tapestry room, checking a stitch of gray against 9 centuries of gold, and what passed between the heiress and the aunt was brief and never repeated, save that Narcissa, leaving, was heard to say at the door in the voice of a woman closing her own ledger, "My sister Bella chose the noise, and my husband chose the kneeling, and I spent 26 years believing the 3rd door was just enduring quietly. You 2 built the 4th one. Whatever happens tomorrow, the family knows what it owes, and I have never once said that sentence aloud in my life. Sleep, Warden, the cloth will hold." The 31st of July, 1998 was, the record notes with the dryness of records, a clear day. They came up the atrium at 10 in state. the lord and heirs of the House of Black, the family in mourning gray and raven silver, the Wisengamot in plum, the galleries full, the prophet's box full, the great fireplaces along both walls burning official green, and the security arrangements, visibly ostentatiously those of a state occasion. Or honor details, ceremonial ward pylons, the minister herself. What the visible arrangements were built to obscure was the second set. 70 circle graduates salted through the crowd in civilian robes, the atrium's rebuilt fountain, its statuary recast that spring by a board of donors in bronze that happened to meet shield transfiguration gauge. And below everything, 9 levels down, an empty round room whose doors had all been locked open onto one corridor, and a chamber of stone benches dusted for company, and a curtain breathing. The investiture itself, history should record, was real and was beautiful. Whatever else the day was designed to be, the chamber's oldest magic took the oaths seriously. The 1544 charter read whole, the house's answers given in the mongrel Norman Latin, "We will," the same 2 words that had lit a tapestry, and when the chief warlock presiding set the chamber's seal to the rolls and pronounced the House of Black restored to full strength for the first time since 1976, the wards of the old courtroom rang once unstruck, a long bronze note that the oldest members present claimed not to have heard since the fall of Grindelwald. And Albus Dumbledore smiled down at the 2 people taking their seats and let the note say what protocol did not permit him to. Voldemort breached the atrium at 4 minutes past noon. He did it, as the council had bet he would, at the moment of maximum theater, the recessional, the heirs descending the dais, and he did it with craft, the fireplaces. A month of quiet murders in the flu regulation panel, a suborned network engineer, and the official green flames along both walls went black together, and delivered his strike force into the heart of British wizarding government in 11 seconds. 60 masked, the Lestranges, Greyback's orphan pack, Macnair, Lucius Malfoy Holtwide in the second rank, and at the center, tall and white and smiling under the high blue ceiling, the theater's own author, with a great snake pouring around his shoulders like a living stole. What he had scripted next, the captured plans later showed, was rout. A government beheaded at its own party, the heirs dead on their investiture rolls, the mark over the ministry by half past. What happened instead had been rehearsed since March. The galleries did not stampede. They folded rank by rank behind bronze, the fountain's statuary leaping apart under 40 simultaneous transfigurations into a shield wall with the minister's voice riding over it, flat as a drill sergeant's positions as trained wands out hold. The honor details were not honor details. The civilians were not civilians. The doors his 60 had counted on flanking were each of them, suddenly a place where somebody stood, and the somebody had a word for it in gold paint, and the atrium of the Ministry of Magic, 4 minutes into the last battle of the war, was not a government being beheaded. It was a box with 60 Death Eaters in it, and the box had been 11 years in the joining, and the lid was the whole prepared country. He understood it faster than any of his followers. He had always been the intelligent one, that had always been the tragedy of him. The red eyes went once around the folding trap, to the minister's shield wall, to the chief warlock descending the dais steps with his wand loose in his hand like a paintbrush, to the 2 gray figures at the dais's foot who had not folded behind anything, who stood in the open with their heads tipped slightly, watching him, side by side, unsurprised, and every court record of the day agrees on what Lord Voldemort said then, because he said it into a silence his own entrance had made. And the acoustics of the atrium are famous. "You built all of this," he said to the twins, almost wonderingly. Almost, the transcripts insist on the word delighted, "for me." "Happy birthday to us," said Harry Black. "You got our letter, we got yours. Shall we discuss the debt somewhere quieter, family only?" And the twins turned their backs on him together, deliberate as a slap in that watching silence, and walked, unhurried, into the golden lift hall and down. The battle above broke over their descending heads like weather on a roof. It has its own histories, how the shield wall held the first shock and the circle's doors held the flanks. How Bellatrix Lestrange, screaming happily, cut toward the minister and found her way barred instead by the appointment she had been promised. Her cousin, her 2 sisters, champion Sirius Black with Nymphadora Tonks at his left and Andromeda Tonks at his right, the last duel of the Blacks of the old generation, 3 wands against the war's favorite noise. No audition, no honor, only arrangement, family business concluded by the family, and when it was concluded, 4 minutes of it. The survivors' accounts all use the same strange, quiet phrasing, that Sirius stood over what had been the terror of 2 wars and said nothing at all, and turned away, and was seen to be, in a way no witness could remember seeing before, entirely done with the dark of his own house. How Lucius Malfoy hollow-eyed was taken at wand point by a shield line that opened, impossibly, to let one duelist through to face him alone. His own son, who disarmed him in 9 seconds, Expelliarmus, nothing else, the boy's face white and wet and absolutely steady, and who then stood over him and said in the atrium's famous acoustics, "Mother sends her regards." The door was heavy. You never once helped push, which the prophet declined to print, and every witness repeated forever. How Peter Pettigrew, judging the day early and correctly, made for an unwatched fireplace with his talent intact, and was betrayed at the threshold of escape by the gift on his own wrist. The silver hand, its maker's instrument to the last, its lone recalled at its maker's first stumble below, closed on the mantle's edge and would not release him, held its debtor at the scene of 13 years of accounts until the horrors took him alive, weeping 60 seconds before his master died. And there are worse epitaphs than the one Amelia Bones entered in the arrest log with her own hand, held at the end by what he served. 9 levels down, the lift doors opened on the black corridor, and the twins walked the last 100 feet of the long errand with the sound of the war above them fading into stone, and behind them, unhurried, certain, sentimental as a thing that cannot love, the author of all of it followed his blood. The death chamber was full of falling light. It was always full of falling light. They had wondered 12 years from what. They took the floor of it, the sunken center, the dais with its arch, and they did not hide, and they did not raise their wands. They stood before the breathing curtain in the amphitheater silence, side by side, hands loose. 2 people come at last to the bottom of everything, and the murmuring behind the cloth rose at their coming like a tide recognizing the moon. He came down the stone benches with Nagini flowing beside him, and he came slowly, tasting the room, because he was the intelligent one and the room was wrong. No ambush in it, no shield wall, no Dumbledore, only 2 18-year-olds and an artifact, and his own blood ringing in his own veins with that acoustic he had chosen 7 months ago not to pursue. He stopped at the dais's edge. The red eyes went from the twins to the arch and back, and something ancient and reptile cold in him, older than his making, the animal that had kept an unloved boy alive in a carbolic orphanage, spoke its one warning of the century and was, as it had been at every hinge of his long ruin, overruled by the person he had built on top of it. "The famous door," he said, "the department's pet mystery. Did you imagine, children, that the furniture would save you? I have passed beyond death. There is nothing behind that rag but the dead, and the dead are nothing. I have made myself the proof. I am the only man in this room's history who ever, in Cassiopeia Black, warden of the charter, interrupted Lord Voldemort in a voice of scholarly correction, one appointed officer of a very old institution putting the record straight. You've never once been in this room's history. We checked. It's why we chose it. This room's history is ours, Tom. Our family raised the arch when your family was still drowning its squibs in the fen. The stone remembers the hands that set it, the door owes the blood that paid for it, and the blood," her eyes storm gray, "came up to his, and 18 years of patience came up with them. The blood is standing in front of you, and some of it you borrowed." He understood then. The intelligence was never the deficit. They watched him reach it in one stride of thought, the acoustic, the tithe, the trap below the trap below the trap, watched the red eyes go for one instant to his own white wrist as though it belonged to a stranger who had lent it, and then he did the thing his whole biography guaranteed, the only thing he had ever done with understanding. He tried to kill it before it finished becoming true. The duel that followed lasted, by the Unspeakable's instruments, 4 minutes and 10 seconds, and their observers' notes, published after 2 decades of classification, run to 90 pages, and conclude with a paragraph of departmental prose that fails in the reading to stay departmental. Subjects fought as a single system. We possess no other record of paired casting at this level. The bonded dyad theories of the medieval sources, long dismissed, require reopening. It was not that the Dark Lord was outmatched in power. Our readings show he was not. It was that he was outnumbered in a way that has nothing to do with counting. He fought 2 people who had already died once holding hands. There is no spell for that. There is, apparently, no anything for that. He was magnificent, the notes say that too, with the honesty of instruments. 70 years of stolen craft against 2 children of 18. Fire and shapes the chamber's stones had never been shown, the snake striking in the seams between spells. But the snake met the dagger. That was the first hinge. Nagini launched at Harry's blind side in the duel's 2nd minute, intersected mid-strike with Tauger's, thrown flat and spinning by the hand that had thrown flat and spinning things across 2 lifetimes of libraries and 1 goblin drill yard. The black blade that had drunk the last basilisk, taking the last Horcrux out of the air like the full stop at the end of a 9th-century sentence, and the scream that came out of the falling snake was not a snake. And the thing that stood wearing Tom Riddle's shape in this world staggered, and was, after 70 years and 2 worlds, running mortal. "Whole at last," said the arch in the language of lintels to the 2 it had carried. "One piece. How he hated being many. Bring him. He is owed passage, and the door does not forgive debts, it discharges them." The 2nd hinge was the blood. Mortal cornered past all theater now. He gathered everything, and the killing curse he built in those last seconds was, the instruments agree, the largest single working they had ever recorded in the chamber, and it was aimed, because he was what he was, made of theft to the end, not at the brother and not at the sister, but at the joined hands between them. Now, said Hermione Granger, said Cassiopeia Black, said both of them together, one word, 2 lifetimes, and they called the tithe home. The old rite in the crumbling codex had promised one opening, and the house had sworn its blood into the weave, and the weave, 60 miles north, 9 centuries deep, gold end to end, answered like the tide answers, without hurry, without mercy, total. Every drop in his made body that had come from the vein of the heir of House Black remembered in one heartbeat whose it was. It did not obey the twins, blood is not a wand. It simply, for the space of that single heartbeat, went home, the acoustic resolving at last into its chord, and Lord Voldemort's curse died unfinished in a wand gone heavy as a ledger, and his body for one heartbeat knelt, to whom the observer's notes declined to speculate. The twins' working was already crossing the space between. It was not a curse. The department's instruments, which can read the Unforgivable's signatures through 9 floors, recorded nothing dark at all, and the Unspeakables spent years failing to classify what they did record, and the twins never helped them because the truth was unclassifiable on purpose. It was a banishing charm, schoolwork. 4th-year syllabus taught by a mild man in a patched coat, practiced until boring, cast now by 2 people as one person with the whole consenting weight of a 900-year house behind it. And it took the kneeling architect of both their orphanings and every grief in 2 worlds' ledgers, and it moved him, with no violence at all, with the terrible gentleness of very large things, backward up the dais into the breathing curtain of the door his own blood had opened. The last thing either worlds records hold of Tom Marvolo Riddle is the Observer's final instrument line, and the department in the end published it without comment because there was no comment adequate. At the moment of transit, the gateway's resonance, rising for 12 years, ceased. Chamber quiet, interval resolved. The curtain moved as in a light wind and was still. The falling light fell. The murmur behind the cloth had gone to something even, and low, and both of them would swear it to no one but each other, briefly satisfied. Harry Black stood in the bottom of the world with his sister's hand in his, before the door that had killed them, birthed them, and now balanced its books, and the war was over, and the errand was done, and the silence after was so large that it took a while to hear the small sounds inside it, her breathing, his, the 2 of them alive at the end of all of it, alive. Chamber quiet, she said unsteadily, scholar to the last. You are welcome. He laughed, wrecked, and it echoed off 1,000 years of benches, and that was how Dumbledore and Sirius found them when the doors banged open with half the War Council behind them. The last heirs of the House of Black, 18 years old, standing in the falling light before the oldest door there is, laughing and weeping in each other's arms like 2 people let out of school. Croker arrived last, unhurried through the jubilation with his clever hands folded, and stood at the rim of the sunken floor looking down at the arch for a long professional moment, listening to 12 years of rising interval resolved into rest, and then came down the benches and offered the twins in order a handshake each, which from an Unspeakable is a state honor, and a small gray card which read in full, business concluded. Chamber quiet. The department thanks the House and has amended Artifact 1's file designation, effective today. He was halfway back up the benches before Cassiopeia, turning the card over, found the new designation printed on the reverse and read it aloud to the chamber's falling light, and had to stop in the middle and start the last word again. Artifact 1 reclassified, formerly the Veil of Death, currently per attested usage, the Black family door. And it was Dumbledore, standing a little apart in his singed plum robes, with his half-moon glasses cracked across one lens and the wand of his old age loose in his hand, who paid the last of his debts there in the chamber, before the histories could arrive and start their versions. He looked at the curtain, quiet now, breathing its small even breath, and at the 2 of them inside the family's tangle of arms, and he said, to no protocol at all, I spent 50 years believing that when this hour finally came, it would come as a sacrifice. That someone would have to walk into some fire, and that my whole crooked office was to choose whom, and to grieve efficiently afterward. I have planned that hour 100 ways since I was young, and every plan needed a death to spend, because I could never imagine the arithmetic without one. You 2 have just ended the century's war by banishing charm, syllabus of the 4th year, with your family upstairs and nobody spent at all. He took off the cracked spectacles, and his eyes, unmagnified, were only an old man's, wet and blue and unarmored. You did not defeat him with a power he knew not. You defeated him with a solvency he knew not. Nothing in either of you was ever mortgaged, and everything in him always was. I shall be in my office rewriting 50 years of conclusions, and Miss Black, Mr. Black, I find I have never in a long life been so glad to be made obsolete. The lightning rod is retired, the weather at last is yours. The accounting afterward filled a season, as accountings do. 60 had come through the fireplaces, 51 saw trial, and the trials were trials, transcripts, counsel, the winter audits, hard-learned liturgy, because Amelia Bones had not rebuilt the law for a decade in order to abandon it at the victory party. Lucius Malfoy went to Azkaban for life, his sentence read aloud by a court that did not know, and would have needed a new jurisprudence to process, that the deciding testimony against him had been arranged into evidence shape by his own wife with the unhurried thoroughness of a woman who had warned him for 6 years that the door had hinges. The dead were buried in the black-bordered pages printed, and the war's last casualty lists were, against every model of the First War short, which no one called luck, because the whole country had watched what preparation had bought, minute by minute, in the atrium's famous acoustics. The first toast was drunk on the night of the victory itself, at Blackmore, the entire war council and half the circle crowded into a kitchen built for a garrison, and finally, for one night, used as one, and it was drunk standing, by unanimous prearrangement, per the motion seconded months before. Sirius raised his glass and found, when the room had stilled, that the speech he had carried for 13 years had worn itself down, the way carried things do, to almost nothing, and that the almost nothing was the speech. Regulus Arcturus Black, he said, 18 years old, no allies, no orders, no hope of being believed, no chance of being thanked. He looked at the thing the whole world was kneeling to, worked out what it had done to stay standing, and went into the dark to start unmaking it with an elf and a locket and 4 sentences in a letter. Everything after, all of it, everyone in this kitchen, is his interest compounding. He looked at the twins, his brother's children, twice over, by blood and by whatever the door had done, and finished it the family way, leisure plain, to the account that opened the books. Little brother, paid in full. Paid in full, said the house, all of it, and drank, and Creature, who had been given the first glass in the place by the fire and had stood through the toast with his ears trembling flat, said, into the quiet after, in a voice like a hinge singing, Master Regulus always said the family would come right. Creature has lived to serve the coming right. Creature would like it minuted, and the room, which had learned its language from 2 children and their lists, minuted it, in laughter and in the estate's actual minute book, where it may be read today, item the last. The family came right, witnessed all hands. The Order of Merlin, first class, was voted that autumn to Regulus Arcturus Black, posthumous, for services rendered alone, unwitnessed, and unrewarded, at the war's true beginning, the citation drafted by the chief warlock personally and read to a standing chamber, and there were, the prophet reported, 2 guests of honor at the investiture whose names appeared on no order of precedence. An aged house elf in a tea towel of raven black silk, seated, at the house's insistence, in the front row, who held the medals case on his knees through the ceremony with his ears flat and his old face shining. And a tapestry weaver from the Department of Antiquities, brought to certify what the family already knew, that at the moment the chamber rose for the dead man's name, the gold thread under Regulus Arcturus Black, 60 miles away, had put out a border of new weave in a pattern the codices had no precedent for, and that the nearest translation of the old Moor words that appeared woven under it, sleep and be missed, was, the weaver said, unheard of. The cloth had never before been known to edit an epitaph. Creature lived 9 more years, smug ones, and died on a summer afternoon in the tapestry room armchair that had been placed there for him by unanimous vote, holding, because the family had learned to read schedules, that morning's treacle-tart plate, wiped clean. And the elf who had once been ordered to destroy a locket and failed for 12 faithful years went wherever elves' doors open onto, with his master's metal polished bright as a sun, and the tapestry, which had no precedent for that either, made one. A small golden thread off the selvage in the margin the house itself owned, in the shape of a bowed ear. And one visit was paid that August that appears in no gazette, because the 2 who paid it told only Sirius, and Sirius only drove them, on the bike which was itself a kept promise. A wet green churchyard in the west country, Yews, a triple stone. Harry stood before it as he had stood at 6, in a black coat, and read his mother's name and his father's name, and under them the name and the single spanning year of the boy he had been sent to this world too late to be, and he crouched and laid on the grave because Flowers said the wrong thing and this said the right one, a small toy motorbike, charmed to gleam, and paid off the oldest debt in his ledger in 4 words, spoken aloud to the stone, to the rain. To whichever of the somewhere else's kind rooms was listening, taken from here, done, Hermione's hand found his shoulder. Behind them at the lich gate, Sirius stood bareheaded in the rain beside his brother's medal, which he had brought in his breast pocket without telling anyone. Over the heart he was widely believed to wear on his sleeve and never had, and the 3 of them stayed as long as the rain was kind, the survivors of 2 wars and 2 worlds, in the village where both stories had their wound and then went home, which was the whole point all along of everything, that there was one. But that was later. First there was the 8th of August, 1998, Blackmore, the orchard, the evening. The house had emptied slowly all afternoon, the last of a week of celebrations, Andromeda and Ted the final leave-takers, and Sirius, with the transcendent unsubtlety of Sirius, had announced at 6 that he and Remus and Snape and this grouping alone should have alerted the whole county, Had urgent business at the Tinworth cottage regarding, he said, reading it off his own cuff, comparative brandy. The gate had barely rung behind them before Creature was discovered to have laid out on the orchard wall, unasked, a supper for two, and to have then developed pressing duties at the extreme other end of the house. "We've been arranged," Hermione said, inspecting the wall. Plums, bread still warm, the good cheese, and in the place of honor, catching the low sun, 2 glasses and a bottle of the beech bark cordial, the last of a batch bottled 11 years ago by 2 children and a grandmother in the reign of nobody, all quiet on the moor. "We've been arranged since we were 6, Harry poured. The cordial went into the glasses, the color of the whole evening. "By everyone, the hat, the bank, and owl. My personal favorite is still the tapestry. It started growing our threads together before we'd told anyone anything. The cloth records the truth." She took her glass and her place on the wall, the moor going violet and gold behind her, 18 years old twice, the whole of both his lives sitting an arm's length away in the last of the light. It just doesn't wait for the truth to be convenient. Ledgers don't. They ate the supper. The moor did its evening. Somewhere below in the valley, the beck ran silver through the ling, and the first star came out over the orchard where an 8-year-old had once hung 100 red moons in a bronze sky rather than see his sister bruise. And neither of them hurried, because the whole day, the whole summer, the whole rest of everything had at last the one quality neither of their lives had ever held before. Nothing was hunting them. "I booked an appointment," she said at last to the star conversationally, 18 months ago. On a roof, I recall the booking after we said the whole sentence. He set down his glass. The wire between them had gone very quiet, the way it went before their largest workings cleared for a single signal. "You said you'd say it, and I'd say it back, and neither of us would pretend it was news. It won't be news." Her chin was up, the storm cloud hair had the last light in it, her eyes had never once in 2 worlds let go of his when it mattered, and did not now. "It's the oldest fact I have, Harry. It predates my name, both my names. I reached for you at a door once, and I have had 11 years since to decide whether I meant to pull you back or come with you, and I've decided I meant both. I've always meant both, pull you back and come with you everywhere, in every world on offer, in whatever language the year permits, brother and sister. When that was the shape the mercy came in us, when there wasn't a word. There's a word now. We're 18. The war's over. The appointment stands." She took one breath, the kind you take at the top of the dive, and spent the sentence they had carried unspent across death, rebirth, and a tapestry's slow gold, and it was in the end 5 words, which is the correct length for anything load-bearing. "I love you, both lifetimes." "I love you," he said back, no pause, no news in it, only the enormous quiet of a thing set down at last in its right place. "Both lifetimes. And the next one, and I want that minuted, because you'll want it in writing eventually. You're you." "I'm me," she agreed, unsteady and laughing. And then there was nothing left in 2 worlds to arrange, and he leaned in, or she did. The observer's notes on this point were never taken, and the only 2 witnesses always afterward disputed the priority with great scholarly relish. And under the first star on the orchard wall of the house at the end of the world, Harry kissed Hermione, or Hermione kissed Harry, once, softly, 18 and 18, and older than every clock in the county. And the kiss tasted of beech bark cordial and plums, and the whole patient decade of not hurrying, and 60 miles of ling and heather stood witness, and one other thing did too. Because in the tapestry room, in the empty candle-lit length of the west gallery, at the moment the appointment was kept, the great cloth of the House of Black, 900 years of ravens and thorn vines and names, did the thing it had been quietly preparing since a frost-bright night 8 years before, when 2 children pressed bloody thumbprints to its margin and asked it to witness. The 2 gold threads that had run side by side from the selvage since 1986, plated but separate, separate but plated, crossed and knotted, and became, in the sight of nobody except a house that had waited 9 centuries for its motto to come true, one thread, heavier than either, brighter than both, running on into the unwoven dark of the cloth's own future, toward names not yet budded, years not yet earned, a long gold line with no end the weave could find. "Towger's purr," said the old words over the door in the oldest gloss, the true one, always whole, nothing lost. And the house at the end of the world settled its stones deeper into its hill, warmed to the roots of its foundations, and kept over the 2 hearts in its orchard in the enormous listening summer dark its oldest and only real watch. The door held. The family home. The light in the windows burning gold, like something the dark had tried twice to put out and would not try again. Chapter 7 End.